Sup, my fellas. Don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. Gangnam 2 years ago. A street lamp was burning in the rain. A light was on in one of the rooms of the house. A request to go to bed was heard. The light in the room went out. From the TV behind the hero came the news that the economic situation was hitting small businesses hard. On the screen was a kendo club. The announcer was saying that in one of the districts of Seoul, fast food outlets were completely eliminated, even kendo and taekwondo clubs. They hoped that small businesses would be able to survive. An image of a silhouette appeared on the screen. The host was saying that a wave of burglaries and murders had swept through Seoul. The targets were lonely women living in studio apartments. The surviving victims were outraged. How many more murders were needed for the police to deal with these robbers and murderers? A hand touched the remote control. The guy was climbing the stairs. A light was on in one window. Shiho entered the room. He stood in front of the wardrobe with the uniform. He took the cup in his hand and put it in the box. Holding the diploma, he looked at the ringing phone. The hero picked up the receiver to his ear. A question was heard from the phone. He left the sport, and he answered to the master that yes. There were many cups in the box. A request was heard to call him the director, not the master. Such talent must definitely find a use if he wants to earn money. The only way is to open his own kendo club. Holding the phone with his shoulder, the guy said that he needed a regular job. He picked up the box. While the interlocutor was saying that he had his own club, he could arrange for him to be a teacher and would not offend with a salary. The guy answered that it was enough for him, that he had not forgotten about him. There was a photo of his family by the box. The director said that he was boring and asked if he had found a job. The guy answered that his mother could not cope with the restaurant alone. He planned to help her. He held the phone in his fingers. The hero heard what it meant. He needed broth every day at dawn and to work more than 12 hours a day. The hero replied that he needed to pack his things and promised to call back. Shiho threw the photo into the box. The photo was of a young guy in a sports uniform. The hero looked at the photos. One of them was of a woman with 2 children. The girl was smiling next to her brother. The guy was holding the photos. The grown-up girl was posing against the background of her relatives. Shiho looked down. The woman in the photo was smiling. He moved the photo. The next one was of 4 people. The girl was holding a selfie stick and smiling. Indignantly looking at the phone, she asked why her brother always had such a face when he smiled. With a displeased look, she said that he was annoying. No wonder he still hadn't married. The mother looked at her daughter and asked if she really decided to live alone in Seoul. There were people walking around the street. The girl answered that it was safe there and her mother was worrying in vain, because there were a lot of provincial applicants like her, and they found a place for themselves. The guy tore off a piece of paper and said that if something happened, let him draw an infinity sign. The sister turned around and asked again. Shiho was looking down. He was also looking down with abrasions on his face. Sitting down next to the girl, he asked how she was. There were tears in the sister's eyes. She asked why he didn't run away. Shiho smiled and said that because he loved her endlessly. In the present, the guy was looking at the plant. There were 2 small leaves, he explained. The 8 was only horizontal. Folding her arms in displeasure, the sister asked if he was at home with her. Maybe something would happen. What a family they had. The brown-haired girl with a bag turned around when she heard her name being called. Sien pointed at the girl and introduced her to her mother as Sua. She would also be renting a studio and living alone. The girl suggested taking a photo together. The guy held the photo from that moment, and then threw it into the same box. He turned around to see the ringing phone. He took it in his hand. The figurine broke into pieces. Shiho looked at the figurine that he accidentally dropped. It was raining outside. The guy looked at the phone. His eyes became shocked. He remembered the news about attacks on lonely girls. On the phone screen, there was a message to his sister that he should come. The guy brought the phone to his ear. He looked at the smartphone, from which he heard words that this subscriber could not accept his call. The emergency service number was dialed on the screen. He brought the phone to his ear again. It was raining outside. It was dark in the room with a large window. He heard a phone ringing behind the slightly open door. The man was holding it in his palm near the sink. The door was slightly open. A man with a predatory smile appeared from behind her, who said that it was easy and simple. The guy in the cap held a notebook and said that it was strange, the same picture hundreds of times on the pages. He took a step, saying that she was probably crazy, let her forget, grabbed everything valuable, and they left. Her brother was still calling her. There was an incoming call on the screen. The bandit said that he was writing that he would come because she did not answer the calls. The man threw the notebook back and called to leave. The door slammed. Legs were hanging under the ceiling. On the floor near the body lay a notebook with infinity signs. Among the flowers stood a funeral photograph. Below were candles and incense. People were kneeling in a bow. The guy noticed the girl in black. Sua was holding a bag in her hands. Shiho looked at her emotionlessly. In the container there were incense sticks. Coming closer, Shiho asked if she wanted to put incense. The girl answered that no, she just felt really bad right now. The hero turned away. hearing the question of where his mother was, and answered that she had to lie down, her legs couldn't hold her. Adjusting her hair, Sua said that he didn't have to see her off, she would get there herself. The guy came closer. The girl paid attention to the wreath. She looked at the inscription on the white ribbon. Her eyebrows arched. Shiho glanced sideways at the girl. Standing nearby, Sua asked to talk to him, just not here. Her hand was holding a white glass. The hero was standing next to the coffee machine. He approached the girl, asking what she wanted to talk about. Sua looked at him. Shiho's face was still emotionless. Frowning, his sister's friend asked how this was possible. He didn't look sad at all. A shadow fell on the guy's face, who heard Cian mention that he always had the same expression on his face. Like a psycho, now she was convinced that she was right. The hero remembered how his sister asked him why he didn't run away, and how he answered that it was because he loved her. His sister's face wrinkled with tears. She said that she thought he was an insensitive psycho. The hero stroked her head with a smile. Now he silently held the glass. Handing over the coffee, he again asked what she wanted to talk about. A scream was heard that his sister had died. How could he be so calm? Turning away, Shiho said that he would have to go back to work. He was only let out for a short time for the funeral. If she had nothing to say, he would go. The girl got up from the bench. The coffee remained standing on the handle. The brunette walked along the corridor with wreaths. He looked to the side. He read the inscription on one of the wreaths. 3 days later, in a 3-story house. Shiho was sitting on the bed with a book. He was holding a donation report in his hands. On one of the lines, there was a donation of 1 million won from Insom, a sales representative of Flash. The guy was standing by the table with cosmetics. In his hand was a hanger with a dress. He turned around, looking at the box. There was a notebook in it. The hero opened it, looking at the photo. In the photo were Cian and Sua. Shiho looked at it silently. On the next page, there were symbols. The hero's gaze became amazed. The infinity symbol was reflected in his eye. Under the clear sky, there was a 2-story building. Shiho was sitting on a bench. The guy with the guitar turned around and asked who it was. The girl replied that she had not seen him before. The hero noticed something in front of him. Sua approached him. Slightly tilting her head, she asked what he was doing here. Shiho showed the photo and asked where it was taken. He looked at it. The girl replied that in a club. The guy in the hoodie objected that it was not a club. Sua looked at him. Then she looked down. The black signboard said the name Flash. The letters lit up red. Cian stood next to the girl in the elevator. Then she turned around, looking at her phone. On the screen was a message for the guy saying that there would be a bikini event at the bar starting today, and if he came before 6 p.m., he would get a free dinner. Turning away, the girl asked if it was really necessary to advertise the event so vulgarly. Her friend said that it was not nice to peek. Covering her face with her hand, Cian said that she hated writing sales copy. Sua said that it was easy to copy and paste. The white signboard said that this was the staff room. There were several girls in the room. Cian held a camera in front of her and said that she was a beauty today. Sua replied that she was usually a beauty. Taking out a photo, the heroine suggested taking a photo for memory, to which she heard the question, what if someone sees it later? The blonde held the phone, saying that a client gave it to her, why not have fun, and her friend allowed her to take a photo. In the building of a coffee shop. There was a photo on the table. Sua said that she and Cian worked in a nightclub. Shiho sat at the table opposite and asked where the alcohol and cocktails were, to which he heard that yes. The girl touched her head, saying that the owner of the club usually stood behind the counter and talked to the clients. It was he who sent that donation for the funeral. Closing his eye, the guy clarified, so this is a strip bar. The girl looked at him. Looking away again, Sua explained that no, this is not such a place. Their job is just to sit next to the clients and nothing more. They are not allowed to touch them, and any perverts are immediately kicked out of the club. She took this job to pay for her studies. Shiho listened silently. Sitting opposite, he clarified that's all. She did not hide anything from him. The interlocutor bit her nail. A silhouette of a man appeared at the window. The girl's gaze became frightened. Hugging herself with her hands, she answered no. Shiho also looked at her silently. Sua stood up and said that was all. She had to go to school, and said goodbye. The hero looked down. There was a bandage on his fingers. He remembered how he broke his hand with a scream. The sky above the building was painted with the colors of the sunset. Shiho stood by the broken wall. He clenched his teeth, breathing heavily. The page with infinity was torn and covered in blood. The boy was squeezing the scrap in his hand. These wounds on the knuckles were bandaged. The man in the gray hood thought that this was definitely not suicide. Blood flowed from under the bandage again. There were cars in the parking lot. Shiho was sitting opposite the man at the computer. Leaning on his arm, the man asked, was his sister killed? Is there no evidence? The hero sitting next to him answered that he and his sister agreed to warn each other with the infinity sign when in danger. The employee asked how they exchanged this sign. The guy at the police station replied that they had decided to send the number 8 back in high school. The man clarified, Did she warn him and not call the police? Remembering the red symbols, Shiho replied that she couldn't tell him about working at the bar, so she must have just written it down in a notebook. The man looked up at him. Interlacing his fingers, he said that the funeral had already happened. It seemed she was cremated. An autopsy would be needed to determine whether it was a murder or suicide, but when the initial death report came in, they ruled it out as a suicide and opposed an autopsy. The guy sitting across from him explained that his mother was against it. The policeman closed his eyes and said that the cremated person can't be brought back. They can't start an investigation without leads. Looking at him, Shiho said that he thought it had something to do with his sister's work. Maybe they should at least question everyone associated with the bar? The heroes looked at each other in silence. The man sitting at the computer said that this would not do, let him have a good alibi. He continued that now he aroused the most suspicion. Why did not a single muscle twitch on his face? The guy opposite was silent. Leaning back in his chair, the policeman said that he needed more specifics, otherwise they would not start the investigation. Shiho rose from his chair. Resting his head on his hand, the man said that everyone he met already imagined himself as an investigator. The hero was leaving when another man asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. A shadow fell on the guy's eyes. He walked along the corridor of the station. In the evening, the light was on in the building. The guy walked with a phone in his hand. There was a map on the screen. He approached a building with a sign bar flash. Silently stood by the stairs. Then he went down them. At the bottom, he was met by a man who asked if he was alone. The man opened the door and asked if he was looking for someone special. Shiho answered that he was here for the first time. Entering the room, the employee offered to show him the way. The man with the phone in his hand glanced at him, and then turned away. The guy followed the man down the hall. The man with the phone asked the boss if something was wrong. Shiho glanced at him. Turning his head, he thought the basement, about 20 steps down, 5m from the entrance, the owner standing behind the counter. He imagined the interior of the bar, analyzing that in the center there is a hall and a room separated by curtains. For outsiders there is only one entrance. Shiho was sitting on the couch. The girl looked into the room and said that he looks great. Is he here for the first time? She sat down next to him and, hearing confirmation, said that you can only talk at the bar, so let them not touch her. The guy in the cap looked at her and asked if she knew the name Sien. The girl thoughtfully touched her chin and said that she no longer works here. The bar employee smiled when asked if she would tell him more and said no, she had quit a long time ago. The hero looked at her. The girl scratched her nose, and he thought that when she smiled, her eyes showed tension, and the corners of her mouth involuntarily drooped. She knew something. Shiho pointed at the menu in response to the question of what he wanted to drink, and the girl answered that she would be there in a minute. She left the room. The employee looked there and told the owner that he was looking for a roomie, that is, Sien. A sly smile appeared on the man's face. He remembered how the employee saw the guy off when he heard on the phone that there would be no investigation, but he intended to take matters into his own hands. This guy was making him angry, so it would be better to deal with him quickly. In-sung smiled, asking the boss what happened. On the screen was an image of a contact with Investigator Lim. The man silently looked at the screen. He stood up from the table, wondering if it was just one person. The girl said maybe he should just tell him there was no room and send him back. Loosening his tie, In-sung said no need, just tell everyone not to say anything about Sien. And what about Sue? Waving her hand, the employee said that after what happened with Arumi, she no longer came to work. The man smiled. He said that he must have been trying to dig up something, so she should pretend that she didn't know anything. Shiho held a small glass in his hand and asked if she knew anything about Arumi. The brunette pointed and said that she had only been working here for a few days. The next girl propped her cheek and said she didn't know, she was transferred from another branch, so she didn't know at all. The third girl with a glass said she didn't know, and who it was. The fourth one touched her head in irritation and asked who she was, surely not her? There were several empty bottles in front of the guy. His cheeks turned red, thinking that no one knew. A question was heard, was he finished or did he want more? The guy sitting on the couch said that he was leaving. The girl asked how he was going to pay. Shiho handed her the card. Heading to the exit, the girl came out, said that she would go with the payment, let her check the receipt later. Covering her mouth with her hand, she told In-sung that it seemed that he did not find out anything. Holding the phone, she said that it was 1:30 a.m. The owner took the phone out of his pocket. With a sly look, he thought that it would be better to deal with him so that he did not wander around. Shiho went up the stairs, and the employees invited him to come again. He walked along the street illuminated by signs. The drunk guy's cheeks turned red. He stopped, leaning his hand on the pole. Suddenly, the hero noticed something. There were leaflets under his feet. A shadow fell on the guy's eyes. 3 men were nearby. They looked quite sinister. They followed the guy down the street. The bandits walked a little further. Shiho stopped and turned a gloomy gaze on them. Signs illuminated the street. Shiho crouched down by a pole. He covered his mouth with his hand. 3 men were approaching him from behind. They were grinning sinisterly. 3 silhouettes were visible from behind. Shiho touched the leaflet at the bottom with his hand. He picked it up. The guy adjusted his hood. One of the men from behind put his hand on his shoulder. The hero turned and asked who he was. The man turned his head and told him to go there. The bald man turned around. A dim lantern was burning in the alley. And then it went out too. Shiho flew backwards into the wall. The man standing opposite said that he was finished. Would he treat them to a drink at the bar? The guy was silent, pursing his lips. He looked but smiled. All the men thought that there were 3 of them. The alley was about 1.5 meters wide. It would be difficult to deal with them all at once. Smiling, the brunette asked why he was silent. Shiho in the cap thought, is this a regular robbery or do they have their own motives? The bandit swung his hand at him. Looking at him indifferently, the hero said that he had no money. The bald man clenched his fist and said that he had no money. But he was walking around such a neighborhood, let him not talk nonsense. The second one ordered to break his legs so that he could not walk here anymore. Shiho touched his cap, thinking that they were somehow connected with the bar where he tried to find out about Cian. The bandit frowned and said that each blow would cost him 10 won if he survived. The hero reached into his hood with his hands. He pulled out a folded leaflet and held it out in front of him like a kendo sword. The man smirked, saying that he was crazy. It was just a piece of paper. The second one said that he was clearly drunk. How many fingers was he showing? The hero's gaze became wild. He said that he was giving them a chance to escape. The bandit standing in the alley laughed, and the leader ordered to get down to business. Shiho stood in a confident pose. His eyes were narrowed with anger. Insong was sitting at the table with a phone. I wonder if they have decided everything yet? Invented, walking around the room, he told the assistant that he would go check the cameras. His finger touched the combination lock on the door. The director opened it, going inside. Approaching the monitor, he took off his jacket. He rolled up his sleeves, showing his tattoos. In front of him was the image from the cameras. He saw the guy standing in front of the bandits and asked, "Is it all over yet?" Smiling, Insong remembered that he said to break his legs. Why is it taking so long? Suddenly his gaze became questioning. He looked at the object in the guy's hand. The image was blurry. He thought he was holding a knife. In fact, he was holding a rolled-up leaflet. With a furious look, the guy said that he warned him. The thug lunged at him with a fist. Shiho's eye was small with anger. The rolled-up paper cut into the man's neck. Swinging, the hero delivered a few more blows. Then he took off abruptly. Swiftly hit again, rushing past. The second man swung his fist. The guy quickly dodged. And pushing off the wall, swung at the next one. The blow flew into a bald head. Shiho landed next to him. Then he confidently rose. The man standing behind the brunette asked in fear, "What was it?" Shiho turned to him, and the man screamed, "What is this anyway?" The guy in the cap calmly answered that it was paper. The bandit reached into his inside pocket, saying that he himself had started this. He took out a knife and said that it was his own fault that he would be maimed today. Shiho looked at him indifferently. The leg in the black sneaker moved. The man closed his eyes from the blow, and then looked in fear at the knife that had fallen. The bandit looked discouraged. Shiho looked at him ominously. He stood as if he was not holding paper, but a kendo sword. The wind trembled, saying that this was strange. His gaze became furious. Shiho approached, raising his hand back. Insong was sitting in front of the monitor, and his look was extremely tense. The rolled-up paper fell to the ground. The guy stepped on it. Adjusting his cap, he walked out of the alley. Raindrops were falling from above. His fingers were holding the peak of his cap. The hero's silhouette was reflected in the puddles on the road. The bodies of men were visible on the camera image. Shocked, Insong touched his face, wondering what was wrong with his head. He stood up, taking his jacket. Leaving the room, he said on the phone that he needed this person's address right now. Veins stood out on his face and neck from anger. He demanded this very minute. The light was on in the room. The neighbor was sitting on the bed, unwinding a bandage. Remembering the meeting with the girl, he thought that Sua knew something when they met in the cafe. Blood was running down his fingers. There was a cup and dessert on the table. Shiho sat down on one of the chairs. Looking forward, he remembered the frightened look of the girl. Sitting in the same place as her, he thought that she looked out the window. Shiho stood in front of the mirror. Then he pulled back the curtain, thinking that maybe someone was watching her. In front of him, he thought that those hooligans were not a coincidence either. He needed to drag one of them to the police station. The hero's face was reflected in the glass. Looking ahead carefully, he thought that Sua was definitely not telling him something. Was it dangerous to go looking for her again? Clouds were floating above the multi-story building. The man was sleeping, his arms spread out. Suddenly, his phone on the nightstand rang. Insong opened one eye. Bringing the phone to his ear, he heard that the man had made inquiries about Arumi's older brother, that is, Cian. The man sat down and ordered him to speak. The interlocutor said that his name was Shiho. Now he was living in her studio apartment and packing his things, and his mother was in the hospital, and meanwhile he was alone in Seoul. Looking ahead sullenly, the man heard that it seemed that the mother had fallen ill after learning of her daughter's death, and said that it still meant that he was in Sion's apartment. Putting on his robe, the director heard that yes, at first he had planned to pack her things if he left, but now he had decided to stay, and this guy was not easy. Imagining the guy with a sword and a helmet, he heard that he was a kendo champion. Standing in the bedroom with the phone, In-sung heard that kendo was considered an active sport in their country that had no application in life, but still, he was a champion in this sport. The man remembered how the guy held the object in his hand, and heard the question, what to do with it, bury it. The director held the phone to his ear. Holding it in front of him, he said that the investigator said that there was no need to do anything for now, we need to lie low. His finger touched the red reset button. Standing in front of the window, In-sung mentally repeated, Kendo champion. There was a search bar on the screen. The man looked at the phone. A smirk appeared on his face. He said that Kendo is really not popular in Korea. There are only a few short articles about this sport and that's it. He threw the phone on the bed. Putting his hands on his hips, In-sung thought that leaving him alone could be dangerous. He stared ahead tensely and thought about how he could resolve this without making too much noise. Water dripped onto the floor. Drops ran down the guy's face. One dripped from the tip of his nose. Shiho was in a handstand. The veins on his face bulged under the tension. He remembered how he held his sister back while smiling. Sion turned around, saying that she was pressing on her head. Holding her by the shoulder, the guy said that it was over and called her to leave. He turned his head when his sister called him, and heard the question of what if this ever happened again. Getting up, he suggested drawing an infinity symbol or an 8, to do so, leaving such a code. Behind the heroes lay the bodies of the beaten men. The fingers held the hilt. Shiho put his arm around his sister's shoulders. Then he looked ahead in surprise. The sister was scared. He held out the sword and told her not to be afraid, he would deal with them. Standing on his hands, the guy looked down, recalling these words. Suddenly, a knock was heard behind the dark door. The muscular guy stood up, looking at it. Shiho opened the door slightly. In-sung stood at the threshold, pointing his finger, and asked if he was their client yesterday. Standing at the door, Shiho greeted her. The man spread his arms with a smile, saying that they rented this studio for a roomie, that is, for Sion. As a legal entity, he thought that there was no point in extending the lease and made an agreement with the owner. Looking ahead with a slight smile, he said that the owner said that someone lived here. Shiho in a gray t-shirt remained silent. He turned his head and said that he had not finished packing her things yet. The man looked at him indifferently and said that he understood. He closed his eyes and heard the hero say that a donation of 1 million won was made at the funeral in the name of the flash sales representative. Did he do that? The man lowered his head and said that yes, he heard that Sion committed suicide. What a tragedy. Looking at him indifferently, the hero asked, does he think so? The man introduced a smiling girl and said that she was very popular at the club, and other establishments constantly sent her offers to entice her. He tried his best to persuade her, but she was still lured to a place called 10 Pro. The hero put down the pink cup. He sat on the bed opposite the man and asked again. In-sung closed his eyes and said that he must have heard of it. Among entertainment establishments it is something like a boss in a game. Everything is clean there, and the girls just sit and chat with customers. The guy sitting with his back to him was silent. In-sung licked his lips, saying that he heard that a very unpleasant incident happened to her there. Maybe it could have been the reason for suicide. He intertwined his fingers. He looked at him very carefully. Briefly touching his face, the director apologized for not being able to protect her. Shiho sat next to him. He remembered the restless hands. He remembered the licking of his lips. The man looked away, and the hero thought that he was avoiding the gaze. He was lying. The guy frowned. In-sung reached into his inside pocket, saying that it was for him. He held out a white envelope and continued, from the bottom of his heart. Hair hid the eyes of the guy who said that it was his sister. He imagined a crying girl. And with a serious look, he continued that they killed. The man looked at him and asked again. He sat with an anxious look and heard that he requested a forensic examination at the funeral. Her body was not there. The man thought, the examination will show everything. He stared tensely ahead. On the bed, Shiho said that he would pick up her body by tomorrow morning, and the results would be tomorrow too, most likely. The director asked again. He said, was it murder? Looking with a black eye, the guy said that he would go to the police tomorrow and present the results to the investigator. The man in the suit said that if he needed anything, let him tell him. He would help in any way he could. He headed for the exit, saying that he had to go, and the guy thanked him. In-sung went out to the parking lot. Turning around tensely, he thought, was this a bluff or not? He got into the car, thinking that it was unclear. His face was like stone all the time. His finger reached for the button. Frowning in the rearview mirror, the man thought, what if this is true? The black car was parked near the gray building. Bringing the phone to his ear, In-sung ordered to take the guys and bury him in the apartment tonight? Near the anthem, with a look, holding the phone to his mouth, the director answered yes. There was a fire burning in the barrel, An order came from the phone to clean up after himself carefully. He is a kendo champion, so let him take more guys. A bag was hanging over the burning barrel. The bandit said that he knows them. They will make it look like it was suicide. Shiho looked out the window. Then he turned away. He entered the toilet. The guy looked down. In front of him was a broom for cleaning. The frame shows a building in the daytime. A 3-story house is depicted in the evening. The sky above the house has become dark. The night sky is visible against the background of windows and balconies. A car drives up to the house. 4 heroes get out of the car. The guy in the hoodie with a grin declares that it was their lot to finish off not only the sister, but also the brother, and in the same place. The bully opened the trunk and asked why 4 were needed this time. He was told that it does not matter. The guy with a serious look suggests working faster, because he still wants to make it to the restaurant for soup for a hangover. The hero in the hood claims that he will need to remember the tools. The hooligans with a grin are about to get to work. The picture shows the interior of an apartment. The frame shows a view from the window to the room. The guy with a stick in his hands is standing near the window. He looks into the apartment and realizes that the space to the corridor is free. But in some places it is still cluttered and more than 2 people will not be able to pass. There is a wall on the right, so he can only deal with them with a few lunges. The door begins to open. Shiho seriously wonders that they know the password to the electronic lock. In-sung's memory is shown in the frame, who said that they rented this studio for CN as a legal entity. The main character is imperturbably silent. He takes hold of the curtain with his hand. He hides his face with a white curtain. He hides behind them in the middle of the room. A guy in a shirt is talking on the phone about some idiot saying that he ordered a forensic examination, clarifying how he thinks the other person is bluffing. Leaning back in his chair, he hears that it is a bluff, and also the question of whether he sent the guys. The guy answers that if he is not lying, then they are finished. A man walks down the street with a phone and hears that the interlocutor sent them. He replies that it would be better if he quietly held the funeral and got lost in another city, and there was no need to complicate everything. Hansu with a serious look hears that he is waiting for their help. He claims that if everything is done just as cleanly, the police will not be able to do anything and they need to make them scrub everything until it shines. The detective whispers to the question whether it is enough that the interlocutor will attract attention, and it is better to write it down on his account, and later they will give it to him. The man in response thanks him and says that in the morning he will go to Arumi's apartment to allegedly ask her brother for the results, and having found the body, he will report it to the police. In-sung, lounging in a chair, asks if this will arouse suspicion. He replies that there can be no results in the morning and it is better to go afternoon. He thanks him with a grin, hearing that he will only finish work by noon, and there is no need to violate the daily routine. The door handle opens. The hooded bully goes inside and looks around. 3 more participants follow him. He looks ahead questioningly and notices something. The hooded bully furiously asks if he is really not home. The big guy in the cap says that they were watching the house and the guy did not come out. They look around the room, asking where Shiho is then. The hooded bully points to the ceiling and asks to turn on the light, because the blinking motion sensor irritates him. The light turns on brightly. They turn around in shock and see the protagonist in front of them. The hooded bully says that he was scared. The protagonist calmly looks ahead, hearing the question of who he is. The villain in the cap watches him and says that this is not going well. His accomplice says that there is nothing to do and will have to deal with him, and then think about it. Shiho calmly states that if they are going to rob, then there is nothing valuable there. The villain grins ominously. The protagonist watches him with a serious look. He points at the guy and asks about his life. The protagonist is holding a stick. The enemy says that they will not let him out and that he has nowhere to run and does not need to worry, because in the next world he will have better housing. Shiho is squeezing his stick. He furiously claims that he is a master of kendo. The protagonist calmly states that he does not want to use this art to maim people and therefore they have a chance to survive. They look at him with a grin and ask again. Shiho calmly demands to leave. The villain in the cap begins to laugh. They exchange glances and smile. Their hands are raised to the ceiling. The bandits are holding knives in their hands. The hooligan in the hood says that Shiho is about to die, and they will take care of the rest. The protagonist is squeezing a club in his hands and says that it is unfair to beat the weak. He calmly states that for this reason he will finish faster. The bandits pounce on him in rage for the insults he said. The protagonist deftly strikes the villain in the cap right on the head. The shocked bandits see blood splashing. A lamp with a motion sensor is shown in the background. The bandit in the Panama hat asks in fear if it is broken. The villain in the hood shouts in rage that Shiho must be killed. They rush with knives in their hands. The protagonist knocks the weapon out of his hands with a few movements. Shiho swings over the opponent's head. He strikes the enemy's body with a powerful blow, all the while the light is blinking. The guy hits the bully in the Panama hat hard. The protagonist stands calmly in front of the hooded enemy, while his brothers lie unconscious. Shiho holds a club in front of him and looks forward. The light begins to shine brightly. The knife in the bully's hands trembles. He does not understand what it was. The villain turns around in fear. He waves his hand and insults the protagonist in fear. The knife flies across the room. It sticks right into the floor. The protagonist calmly holds a piece of a sharp pipe to the opponent's throat. The light above his head shines brightly. It gradually dims. The lamp lit up brightly. The protagonist stands next to a beaten opponent who is lying on the floor. The frame shows a 4-story building. The beaten hooligans are sitting next to Shiho. The detective seriously addresses the protagonist. The guy answers him. Hansu is sitting at the computer and says that he checked their criminal records and all the bandits are clean. The guy sits opposite and assures that they wanted to kill him. The detective looks at him and asks if he has evidence, for example a video. The protagonist seriously denies it. He replies that then he cannot be sure of the veracity of his words. Hansu holds a piece of paper and says that the guys really broke the rules, but Shiho used force in self-defense, and this is much more serious. The protagonist asks again in surprise. The detective throws papers and states that Shiho used a weapon and assaulted someone and one person was hospitalized with a broken collarbone, and according to the law his crime is much more serious. The hooded hooligan states that he also needs to go to the hospital. Hansu demands to shut up. Shiho silently lowers his head. The detective frowns and hears that the guy does not understand. The guy sits on a chair and says that he was simply defending himself from criminals and he barely managed to get away and report it to the police. The detective with a folder in his hand says that in Korea the law does not work that way and at the moment the main character himself is a suspect in the case. Shiho clenches his fists and asks again. Hansu seriously states that he had a weapon. This is considered an aggravated assault, and this is a serious crime. The police take the guys away. They let the hero into the cell. The policeman closes the lock. Shiho silently hears the address to himself. The detective stands opposite and claims that he is registered in one city, but lives in Seoul, which means that he does not have a permanent place of residence, and this is the reason for the imprisonment. The protagonist silently watches as Hansu leaves. The guy looks at the cage. The man behind him asks how he got here. The protagonist turns around. Behind him lies a man in glasses. Kyungu with a smile declares that he can assume that that fool got involved personally, namely director In-sung. The protagonist turns around to look at him. The guy in glasses smilingly says that he is in cahoots with the police, and it is not surprising that this is the squad on duty, and they have already made a deal to cover for the director. The protagonist listens silently. Kyungu sits and asks to tell him everything, and he will help him get out. He clarifies if it is true that he knows the director. The guy in the black shirt says that it is so, because once they were a family. The guy with scars on his face says that he turned out to be a real fool. Shiho silently looks down. Kyungu looks away and says that he contacted a lawyer, and he will be there soon, and if the protagonist behaves well, he will help him get out, specifying how he got here. They exchange glances. The protagonist, with his head down, begins to tell. The detective stands on the balcony and asks on the phone what they are doing, because Hansu sent him to the detention center, but they cannot keep him for long. He goes down the stairs, stating that he does not know anything and that they can simply not create problems, because he has already clearly stated that he cannot cover for him. Kyungu, sitting on the floor, looks at the guy opposite. The guy in glasses watches him. Shiho watches silently. Frowning, Kyungu realizes that this seems to be the truth. He coughs. The interlocutor adjusts his glasses and tells Shiho that he apparently ran into the wrong enemy and that an ordinary person is not capable of such a thing. Against the background of the villain's shadow, it is said that the director has many connections. Shiho looks ahead and clarifies what to do if this is not an easy person. Taking off his glasses, Kyungu replies that he will have to break the law, because there is no other way out. The protagonist silently hears this. He spreads his hands and asks to tell him more. He replies that he completely forgot to introduce himself. The guy gets up and says his name, noting that he owns a small karaoke bar. He leans against the cage with a grin and says that he is a bit of a robber. Shiho calmly comes to the conclusion that he is a bandit. Kyungu laughingly asks why he says this easily, noting that he was a member of one group. The guy turns and says that he is there on a false charge, because the director's henchmen interfered with his business. Kyungu explains with a grin that they often snitch, framing him as an illegal business or even planting drugs, and then he is caught, and he proves his innocence and is released. Then everything repeats itself. The protagonist looks at the interlocutor and clarifies that in this case In-sung is also a criminal, and it turns out that they are not on the best terms now. The guy turns around and claims that the director is not the main problem. The picture shows a bloody fighter. It is said that there is a guy who is usually called the director's representative, and he defeated the boss whom they previously served and seized all power. Against the background of a crowd of hooligans opposite the beaten opponents, it is explained that then their paths diverged, because he could not stay with traitors. Kyungu stands in a cage with his arms crossed. The protagonist calmly asks that he killed a man, but was not punished. The interlocutor spreads his hands and explains that he is still an important person, while offering to switch to you, because they are almost like friends. The protagonist, sitting on the floor, says that he is older than him and that everything is fine. The frame shows a sign saying cell number 2 above the cage. They are sitting next to each other. Kyung-gu asks why everyone is keeping quiet about his sister's death. The guy in glasses looks up and says that the director's representative is involved in this, and this is not the first time he gets rid of unwanted people. Shiho asks where they can meet him. He turns around and asks again. He holds back his laughter. Kyung-gu starts laughing loudly. Shiho turns and looks at him. The interlocutor apologizes with a smile, saying that this is impossible, because only people of a certain level can meet him, and he has only one way out. Shiho looks at him and asks which one. Kyung-gu says with a serious look that he will have to go straight ahead. He watches the guy. Adjusting his glasses, Kyung-gu states that he should be prepared to go to jail if someone gets hurt, and he would not recommend getting involved in this, because he has his own life, and he needs to accept the fact of suicide and move on. The protagonist silently looks down. The detective opens the door to the cell. Hansu looks at them and tells Kyung-gu to go out. The guy with glasses turns to the protagonist and says that apparently the lawyer has arrived and he needs to wait. The frame shows a city building. Kyung-gu walks with Shiho and says what a morning it has been. The guy seriously thanks him for his help. The hero with glasses notes that there is no need, because he was forcibly locked there, and if his guesses are correct, they will not be able to continue the case, since the director is involved. Kyung-gu opens his wallet and takes out a business card. He hands it to the protagonist and invites him to drop by if he wants a drink. He says thank you. He holds up his wallet with a smile and says that he only took this one, noting that he is starving and whether the protagonist has some money. Shiho takes some banknotes out of his wallet. He hands them over. Kyung-gu takes one. The guy with glasses leaves with a smile, saying that this is enough. The frame shows a tall skyscraper. The picture shows a sign inside an office. A fighter in great physical shape holds a bottle. The director is standing at the counter. The pumped-up guy says that if you look from above, he asks again. He calmly says that people really are like ants. In-sung stands behind him and says that they are. The guy turns around and says that at any moment. The director looks at him fearfully. The guy comes up to him. He sits down in his place and throws his feet on the table and says that it is possible to trample people. In-sung swallows fearfully. The guy asks with a frightening look what to do in that case. The protagonist looks at the interlocutor leaving. He is watching closely. The frame shows the business card of the director of Kyung-gu. The fighter looks forward with a crazy look. The director looks away with excitement. The frame shows the faces of the director's representative and Shiho. The picture shows a tall building. In-sung says excitedly that Detective Hansu says that he can no longer cover for them and he asks them to lie low, so there is no way out. The fighter with crazy eyes asks if he shouldn't have done the job properly in the first place. The pumped-up warrior sits in a chair and clarifies that in Korea, such injuries are not counted as self-defense. He suggests that in that case, then officially sue. Crossing his arms, the representative suggests that if he is exposed in the process. Against the background of the sign, he turns to the director. The fighter in the chair says that he is 5 years younger than him. A frightened In-sung hears the question of whether he should always be spoon-fed. He opens the drawer and says that he needs to talk to Hansu and sort this out as soon as possible, and he will do everything if he is given 2 million won, while specifying where his house is. He takes out a cigar and asks if his mother is alone. He replies that she is in the hospital. The fighter holds the cigar in his fingers and asks that in that case there is no one there and any neighbor children can climb in to smoke. He specifies with a frightening look that the house can catch fire. He orders with crazy eyes to take a photo of his mother with a knife to her throat and then send it. The frightened director exclaims. The fighter takes the device and asks if he has enemies. In-sung replies that he does not, because it is just a bar for get-togethers and she never even asks for prepayment. He cuts the cigar, specifying that he can run up debts and tell his mother to pay, and who cares if she is dead. The worried director asks again. The fighter frowns and wants to say something else. He cuts off the end of the cigar and asks that losers are useless. The frightened director looks at him. The representative takes the phone and dials a number. Sitting in a chair, he asks how everything went. The interlocutor answers that they are now pumping out blood. A question is heard from the telephone receiver whether all 4 are still alive and whether they need to be killed. The fighter lights a cigar, claiming that he does not need them. Loud screams are heard on the phone. The guy with the cigar hangs up. He looks at the frightened In-sung. The director looks down guiltily, saying that he will go to another city and sort it out personally. In-sung bows to the boss with the cigar. He quickly runs down the corridor. The pumped-up fighter looks ahead. The car is driving along the highway at high speed. The director looks out the window and asks the driver to go faster. He replies that this is the maximum. In-sung is furious and orders to go even faster. The white car is racing along the road. The frame shows a hospital. A woman is lying on a hospital bed. She looks at the ceiling with an unhappy look. A girl with a tray enters the ward and says that it is time for lunch. A woman in a hospital bed closes her eyes. The girl puts down food and says that she will starve to death, asking if she knows how many days have passed and when her son will come, because he has not said a word since leaving for the capital. The surprised woman turns around and sees In-sung entering the room. He says with a serious look that he knows her daughter and heard that her mother is in the hospital. A surprised Soon-yeon looks at him from her pillow. A nurse stands next to her and says that she is too shocked to speak. He hands over a yellow box and tells her to accept the gift, asking if the worker could leave them because they need to talk. The woman steps away and says that the patient is unable to speak. He replies that he will just pass on something. She turns around excitedly to see the happy woman. The worker leaves the room. The director watches the door close with a smile. A surprised Soon-yeon looks at him. He turns his gaze to her with a crazy look. He puts his hand in his pocket and says that he will get straight to the point, since her daughter owes him money on a contract. The woman is shocked when she sees the paper he shows her. He angrily points at it and claims that she borrowed 200 million won from him, but since he is dead, she can't take anything from him. The woman is shocked and starts crying. The director frowns and says that Soon-yeon is unable to say a word. He shows the paper and says that it is a contract with the saloon, asking if she knows what it is. He smirks and says that her daughter sold her body for money and she left at his expense. Soon-yeon, frightened, cries loudly. The director, looking mad, demands his money back. The patient, lying in bed, cries loudly. Surprised, In-sung asks what she is doing. The woman, lowering her head, says that Seon is not that kind of girl. She clutches the blanket and hears the question, "What is she saying?" The woman, furious, declares that her daughter is not like that. The director grabs her by the hair. He hurts her with a grin and claims that she is exactly like that, cheap, sleeping with everyone for money. Soon-yeon clenches a trembling fist, objecting that her daughter would never do such a thing. The director, grinning, says terrible things about her daughter in her ear. Tears flow down the cheeks of the sick mother. Her look is miserable and pitiful. She rolls her eyes with tears. Her body is shaking. The director looks at her and does not understand what is happening. He lets go of her head. Her hand hits the bed. In-sung, shocked, sees a woman lying unconscious. The frame shows the main character's house. Shiho looks at the business card she received. He holds it in his hands. He understands with a serious expression that he still cannot compete with the mafia alone. He calmly wonders whether he should give up everything and what about Seon. He turns to the ringing phone. The protagonist picks up the phone and hears that the city hospital is calling him, asking if he is Seon's guardian. The guy is sitting on the bed. He presses his lips together. The picture shows an evening road. In-sung is driving in a car and explains on the phone that his mother suddenly died. The question is whether he killed her. The director holds his head and says no, because he just wanted to scare her and at first she trembled and then died. Sang-tae is sitting in a chair and orders him to demand a debt from his older brother, who in response says that he knows something. The big guy in the shirt asks what's wrong with that. The director holds his head and says that he will figure it out, with the apartment too. He looks at the phone and sees a completed conversation with the boss. In-sung lies down on the seat and does not understand what to do now. The driver turns to him and asks if Director Choi lives in this area and maybe he should call him. The director is surprised by what he said. He says with a sly smile that he can help. The frame shows a photo of the main character's mother among the flowers. The guy is sitting next to them. A man in glasses approaches Shiho and says that he has a visitor. The main character turns around. The woman from the hospital silently looks at him. They bow to each other. The main character looks at her and asks how she knows his mother. She replies that she took care of her in the hospital. He extends his hand to the side and says that they need to remember. They sit at the table with food. The woman sadly looks away. The main character, looking at her, thanks her for coming because he asked the administration for her contact information and they agreed, so he sees her for the first time. She guiltily says that some people came to see his mother that day. Shiho calmly clarifies which ones. She clenches her fingers, explaining that one of them asked the woman to leave the room to talk to her alone. In the memory, she left the ward. The woman was frightened when she saw a big guy at the entrance. He looked at her fiercely and advised her to go as far away as possible. It is explained that the man who came to his mother's ward was a decent-looking man in a suit, and outside stood a big guy with a criminal face. The woman walks down the corridor and turns around. It is said that while she was walking away, screams began to be heard from the ward. The woman turned around in fear, hearing screams about the debt. The big guy looks back. She sadly lowers her gaze. The woman, looking guilty, states that she walked away and returned 10 minutes later, and his mother was already dead and had no appetite for about a week and ate poorly. The protagonist looks down and hears that those men were no longer in the ward. Shiho clenches his fists. He turns around, hearing footsteps. The villains enter the ritual hall. One of them smashes wreaths and shouts that he came to the funeral of a dishonest woman. The protagonist turns around and looks there. Guys in shirts are walking down the corridor. Shiho stands in front of them and asks who let them in. The interlocutor mimics him in response. The long-haired villain is doing his hair. He takes the guy's hand with a grin and asks if the deceased is his mother. Their eyes meet. The villain slaps his face with his palm and says that people usually get angry when they say bad words about their mothers. The villains surrounded him. One of them says that the guy must have chickened out. He asks with a grin if his sister's name is really Cian. The guy in the green shirt explains to him that she stole money from a club in the capital, and he bought out the debt, 200 million plus interest, a total of 300 million. He clarifies that they will take all the donations. The protagonist calmly claims that she could not have done this. The villain opposite him kicks the table. The long-haired guy looks at him and asks again. He lightly hits him on the cheek again and clarifies if it is true that she could not. He continues to hit him, stating that his little sister apparently did not tell her family anything. He takes the protagonist by the tie and says that she was ashamed. He pulls Shiho's tie towards himself and asks how the guy is going to pay off the debt. He replies that he can take the house. Against the background of scattered food, it is said that he knows everything about their property. The villain stands with a grin against the background of the fire and claims that his house is now burning and it can no longer be saved. They exchange glances. The guy in the green shirt looks at him and wonders what's wrong with this idiot, because he has a face like a robot. The other one says that some people lose their sensitivity from shock. The bandit frowns and asks if that's why he's like that. Shiho looks at them and says that he has money in the safe, asking where his address is, because he'll bring it. The villain asks with a grin about the 300 million and when he'll bring it. He replies that after the funeral. The villain takes Shiho by the neck. He asks with a frightening look if the guy really doesn't understand what's going on and whether he should open the coffin. The main character, looking down, says that he'll bring everything by midnight today. The villain throws his business card. It's on the floor. The long-haired hooligan leaves. His whole gang leaves, leaving Shiho alone. The guy stands with his back to them. The frame shows a corridor and a clock. The clock shows 11:50. Shiho is walking in the rain in a hoodie and a cap. He is wearing sneakers. The frame shows a building with a glowing floor. The protagonist opens his bag. He throws it on the ground. Shiho in a hood calmly takes out a sword. He looks frantically ahead. Youngcheol is sleeping while sitting. He looks at his smartphone and says that there is 1 minute left, asking if the funeral home is closed. The assistant in a white sweater says that the lights are out in the windows and the restaurant is closed, asking how the boss thinks whether Shiho will come. He sits in a chair with a grin and says that if he doesn't come, they have the opportunity to close his eyes. The bald hooligan asks why they would be there in full force then. A bunch of bandits in white sweaters and with clubs in their hands are standing around them. Youngcheol looks away and asks if the idiot really doesn't know why they gathered. He apologizes. The scoundrel takes the phone in his hands. He says with a sinister grin that the protagonist should be scared when he sees them, and this is called intimidation. The guy in the hoodie goes up the stairs. Holding a sword in his hands, he goes. Shiho picks up a smartphone. He puts it to his ear and starts talking on the phone. Walking down the corridor, he hears someone apologizing for being in Japan, because he was invited to be a judge at the kendo championship and he hopes that the funeral has not taken place yet, because he was looking for tickets and the closest one is only tomorrow morning and he apologizes very much that he could not. The frame shows the corridor. The protagonist asks not to worry, because everything is fine, but he will call later. He presses the call rejection button. The guy with the sword goes forward, realizing that tomorrow they may not see each other and never again, mentally thanking the teacher for everything he did for him. Youngcheol picks up the smartphone and sees that Shiho is 3 minutes late. He wonders with a grin that the protagonist will not come, because it is already midnight. The assistant turns around and asks if the main character has escaped. He replies that according to him, the funeral home is already closed, and most likely the guy has already escaped. The hooligan scratches his head and apologizes to the boss, who says that they are all making fun of him. He picks up a smartphone and starts calling. Youngcheol holds the smartphone and says that the guy ran away because he did not come with money. In response, he hears that he was asked to deal with him. Against the background of rainy weather, a question is heard about the fact that there are witnesses in the funeral home, and do they know how many cameras there are? In response, he asks how he could even believe that he would bring money. Youngcheol smirks and says that this is his area and he is free from video surveillance, so he has already taken care of everything and besides, it is better to get at least some money. The bandits are surprised to hear some sound. The long-haired boss hangs up, saying that he will call back. He looks up. The assistant opens the door and looks forward. In front of him stands Shiho, wearing a hood and holding a sword. The bald big guy looks at him silently. The guy goes inside. A bunch of hooligans are around him. Youngcheol laughingly says that he thought he had already run away, asking where the money is. The protagonist calmly states that there is no money. Frowning, the boss says that the guy is being evasive. The protagonist with a serious look asks who the scoundrel works for. He asks again in bewilderment. Youngcheol leaves and says that the guy is asking for trouble, so the fighters should teach him a lesson. The hooligans run to attack. On the other side, the guys are also running to Shiho. They are holding weapons in their hands with a grin. The scoundrels are shown behind Shiho. They are standing with metal pipes in their hands. Young-cheol sits down in a chair and asks if the protagonist really takes them for liars. The guy stands silently. The scoundrel with a mad look declares that he is definitely finished now, the door is closed, and he has nowhere to run. The guy is holding a sword in his hands. The frame shows a sign on the building. The man raises a red flag. It says that Shiho has finished each round in no more than 20 seconds, and he has seen many fencers, but never like him. A guy in a suit stands in front of a defeated opponent. A voice says that the protagonist has achieved the highest skill. The guy stands with a serious look in a helmet. Shiho in a hood looks at his enemies. The bald villain swings a metal pipe with a scream. The protagonist swings his sword. Their weapons touch. The big guy holds his hand in pain. The pipe falls to the floor. He winces and sees something flying in front of him. The protagonist delivers a powerful blow to his jaw. The guy deftly hits him with a sword. Other hooligans rush to help. The protagonist sees them in front of him. He deftly runs between them, striking each one. The frightened bandits see how one of them has blood pouring from the head. The guy continues to move. He hits each villain in turn. The bandit sees his crippled brothers lying in front of him. Suddenly, Shiho appears in front of him, swinging his weapon. The bandit receives a powerful blow to the head. An opponent with a pipe in his hands flies behind the main character. The guy deftly counterattacks him in the neck. Shiho frantically throws the opponent aside. The others stand in shock. The bully opens his mouth in fear. Shiho delivers another blow to his face. The surprised gang members see how the main character has scattered many opponents. Young-cheol opens his mouth in shock. The other members watch in amazement. They watch in fear. The rest of the bandits line up in front of the main character. Young-cheol looks at the guy in fear. The main character watches calmly. The frightened boss shouts at his charges to kill him. The guy holds a sword in front of him. He calmly prepares to fight. Shiho makes a sharp lunge forward. The frame shows a building in rainy weather. The light is on the top floor. It's raining heavily. Suddenly, a villain flies out of a building window. He lands head first on the asphalt. Blood is pouring from his body. The frame shows shelves inside the building. The defeated villain lies unconscious. Beaten bandits are lying on the floor. The protagonist stands in front of Young-cheol with a mad look. He fearfully begs not to touch him. The protagonist with a frantic look asks again who he works for. Young-cheol starts to say something. The guy points a gun at him. He screams that he was set up. Shiho looks at him and asks again. The long-haired hooligan looks away and explains that he was told that they would give him bonds for 2 billion for 5,000, and he thought they were real and he knows nothing more. Shiho looks at him and asks who this deceiver is. A frightened Young-cheol says that he runs a couple of bars in the capital and that's all he knows. The guy looks down and remembers the director, wondering how he is involved. The protagonist holds a weapon in his hands. The guy turns around and says that he got an answer, so he will go further. Young-cheol looks at the protagonist leaving and wonders if this is a joke. The villain gets up from his chair. The protagonist takes hold of the door handle. He suddenly turns around. Young-cheol, holding a knife in his hands, rushes at him in rage, screaming die. Shiho knocks the knife out of his hands with a deft blow. The long-haired guy turns around. Shiho swings his sword. He delivers a series of powerful blows to the villain, who screams in pain. The protagonist stands calmly in place, holding a sword in his hands. Blood drips from the end of the wooden blade. He looks down with crazy eyes. The frame shows a city in the daytime. A man in a suit is standing in the corridor. He carefully looks ahead. The photo shows the mother of the protagonist. The man looks away. He holds a smartphone in his hands and sees sent messages with apologies. A man stands in front of flowers and wonders what kind of guy he is. The protagonist walks along the evening streets. He turns around. Behind him are the lights of the night city. Shiho walks along the sidewalk. He looks at the white business card in his hands. The guy turns around. The protagonist stands in front of the entrance to the establishment with the business card. The door opens. A man in glasses stands behind the counter and greets him. The protagonist stands in front of him and says that he promised to treat him to a drink, while the interlocutor is glad to meet him. Kyung-gu points his finger to the side and tells him to sit down, and he will bring him the best girl. Shiho is sitting on the couch. The bespectacled man is carrying a drink in his hands and asks why he is so early, because the girls will not be here until 8. The protagonist in a cap asks him to forget about them, claiming that he has a favor to ask. Kyung-gu sits down next to him and asks if he is here. The protagonist, looking at him, declares that he wants to work there. The hero in glasses with a slight smile says that they have no vacancies. The guy sees him pouring alcohol and says that he just needs food and a place to sleep. Without a salary, he asks where he is in a hurry. The protagonist sits silently. Kyung-gu looks at him with a serious expression. He put whiskey on the rocks and says that he has problems, but he can't really help. Shiho looks down and says that he suggested something then. The man glances and asks again. In the memories, Kyung-gu said that you need to go ahead, You need to be ready to go to jail if someone gets hurt. The hero with glasses begins to understand. Shiho silently looks ahead. He pours more whiskey with a smile and says that he can't believe it, because he advised to just move on with life, and in the end everything turned out like this. Shiho turns and says that since Kyangu also considers the director a traitor, he is on his side, because they have different motives, but the same goal. Kyangu laughs and says that it's better to drink, because the protagonist is talking nonsense. The guy turns to his interlocutor. Frowning, Kyangu drinks whiskey and says that he has gone crazy. Shiho sits on the couch and looks down. The man in glasses leaves and says that there is nothing for ordinary people to do here, and if someone hears him, then it's the end. The protagonist sits silently at the table with whiskey. He looks down. The protagonist starts drinking from the bottle. Gradually, the picture becomes cloudy. Kyangu and the girl stand over him and ask if he is okay, assuming that the guy emptied the whole bottle alone. The protagonist opens his eyes with difficulty. In front of him is the image of a beautiful girl. Shiho reaches out and calls her Shien. She asks how he knows her name. He starts stroking her. The protagonist sees a bright image in front of him and says that she is alive. The girl turns around and looks at Kyangu. She silently looks down. The girl takes the protagonist's hand. The protagonist lies on the couch. He opens his eyes with difficulty. The guy jumps up abruptly. He is surprised to hear the question whether he has recovered. Kyangu looks at him with a displeased expression. Shiho is sitting on the couch and says that he is sorry. He replies that he did not think that it would be so easy to knock him down. The guy silently looks down. The hero in glasses gets up from his chair and says that he has to go. Kyangu is leaving, when suddenly he hears the word mom. The main character looks down and says that she died. Kyangu, without turning around, offers his condolences. Shiho, sitting on the couch, explains that she was killed. He looks away and says that they were just mocking a sick woman. Kyangu turns around and looks at him. The guy clenches his fists and says that she could not stand it. Kyangu looks at him carefully. The guy puts on his cap and apologizes for the trouble. He goes to the door and says that they will see each other later. He starts to pull the handle. The interlocutor asks him to stop. Kyangu scratches his head and calls him a scoundrel. He sits down on a chair and asks if he has somewhere to go. He says no. Kyangu closes his eyes and says he doesn't know why he suddenly became kind, but the guy can work for him, and if he has nowhere to go, then let him sleep here. They usually hide here during raids. The main character stands opposite and asks again. He answers that there shouldn't be raids now. The guy in glasses sits on a chair and turns to Shiho. The frame shows attributes for playing billiards. The guy is told not to stare. Kyangu seriously states that if Shiho starts pestering Sancte with stupid phrases, he might die. He points his finger at him, declaring that you need to listen only to him and not take other people's orders. The protagonist stands opposite him and says that he understands, and he asks how he knows her name. The guy stands silently. Shiho asks again. The girl sits on the couch and says that her name is Shien, asking if he is starting work today, and he says that he is. She looks at him with a smile. The guy in the black suit says that he made a mistake yesterday and that he is sorry. She happily states that everything is fine and suggests that Shiho confused her with his ex. The protagonist looks at her and apologizes, saying that he will be more careful with his words. She looks ahead in shock. The guy calmly asks what is going on. She hugs herself and states that he speaks like an old man, asking if he is really from the 21st century. The guy silently looks down. The girl approaches him with a smile and states that he is not at all fashionable. She makes a gesture with her fingers and states that all weaklings will be eaten by predators, and he thanks her for his concern. The girl leans on the counter and asks what kind of phrases these are. The frame shows a watch. Kyangu grabs the guy by the shoulder and announces that they have a new employee and they need to introduce themselves. Waiter Hoon greets him with a smile. Waiter Chiol says that he is glad to meet you. Manager Ryan calls him handsome with a smile. Shion happily waves, saying that they have already greeted each other. Blonde Yesung greets Shiho. Aaron asks how old he is with a smile. Happy Yunji exclaims that they finally have a cute manager. Though he looks at him questioningly with a phone. Embarrassed assistant Yinwa says that she is glad to meet him. Kyangu whispers in the protagonist's ear for him to come up with a name. The man pats the guy on the back and says that this is manager Shiho, and he hopes that everyone will get along. The workers happily exclaim that they will. The bespectacled boss stands in front of him and says that if anything happens, they can ask Shion. Kyangu kicks the air and shouts for work. Aaron looks at his girlfriend and asks if the manager is cute. She notices that he is very cautious. The protagonist silently looks away. They say that he will probably cry when he faces harsh reality. The events take place a month later. The protagonist is sitting at a table. A waiter is standing next to him. Hoon says on the phone that he understood everything. Shiho gets up and asks him what happened. He replies that today is the day to close. Shion turns around and clarifies if it is true today. The protagonist looks ahead questioningly. The girl, crossing her arms, says that every month there are false denunciations and at such times the boss is sent to custody. The frame shows memories of what Kyangu said in the cage that the director's henchmen interfere with his business. He explained with a grin that they often snitch, framing him as an illegal business or even planting drugs, then he is caught, released and so on in a circle. The protagonist looks at the girl and asks why they can't just continue working. She replies that without the boss there will be confusion. The frame shows hooligans with metal pipes. The girl explains that strange people constantly come and demand money and threaten. The girl in glasses looks out from behind the corner and says that the guy is new here and therefore does not know everything. Ryan, closing his eyes, suggests getting ready for closing. The workers watch as the guests leave. It is said that they do not even issue a check for drinks. Questions are heard about which bars close at 10 p.m. Shiho watches silently. The frame shows the night sign of the again establishment. It turned off. The girl gets into a taxi and shouts to her colleagues that they will see each other tomorrow. Another replies that earning money is not an easy task. There is no one at the place of the establishment. The frame shows a close-up of the bar sign. It lit up. The inscription burns brighter and brighter. The main character calmly looks ahead. He has a pair of batons in his hands. The picture shows the bar sign. In-sung asks on the phone if they really left the door open, telling him that they did not turn off the lights either. The director smirks and asks if their boss is really still in the detention center. They tell him yes. He asks again warily. The director opens the combination lock on the door. He enters the room with monitors. The director opens a drawer in his desk. He sits down at the computer and says that he has an urgent message. The light is left on in again, and Kyangu has been in the detention center for a long time. Sangtae is sitting with a girl and says on the phone that the director really thinks that he can call this number for any nonsense. The boss, with the phone in his hands, hears apologies and the question of whether he should go there. He exclaims that In-sung should wake up because the business is left under his responsibility, and he should be able to resolve such situations himself. The girl next to the boss asks why he swears so much. The boss looks at her with a frightening look. She looks away. Sangtae asks on the phone what is happening with the guy who escaped. He replies that his whereabouts are still unknown. The boss picks up a bottle and declares that he would kill the protagonist with his own hands, clarifying what is going on with again. He brings the neck to his lips and asks how they can cope without Kyangu. He seriously realizes that the only subordinate who had any value was Kyangu. But how can again work now if he himself is in the isolation ward? The director asks what to do. The fighter furiously smashes the bottle and shouts for him to shut up, because he is still thinking. In-sung agrees with him on the phone. He excitedly realizes that despite his explosive character, Sangtae is not a fool at all, and if he were, he would not be able to outsmart Pyeonwook, and perhaps he figured out something. In-sung sits in a chair and hears that Taechang needs to be sent. He thoughtfully wonders that he will have to hit sparrows with a cannon, and has he really already suspected something? The protagonist sits on the couch with his head down. He turns around and hears something. Several cars pull up to the again bar. The fighters get out of the cars. One of them turns around and looks around. The bandits run forward. Dozens of armed fighters gather at the entrance to the bar. They put up barrier signs. The men in suits throw out passers-by. Dozens of fighters with bats stand near a car and say that they are ready. The door opens slightly. A cigarette falls onto the asphalt. The bald thug gets out of the car. Taechang calmly looks ahead. The picture shows his face from the side. He walks past the fighters. The big guy goes to the again bar sign. He puts gum in his mouth and says unbelievable. He blows up a balloon out of gum and says that they lived their life, did business, but some fly bit them. One of the fighters asks if they are coming in. He replies that maybe they just forgot to turn off the lights and let two people check if the club is open or not. The men in suits go inside. The protagonist sits on the couch with his head down. Next to him lies a phone and a cue. A big guy stands next to his comrade and asks if this is a newbie. Another one asks if the club is open or not. Shiho looks at them silently. He calmly states that yes, but today only food and drinks. The scoundrels grin. They leave the bar and tell the boss that there is a guy there saying that the club is open and only this employee they have never seen. Taechang states that then it is clear that he does not understand what is going on. One of the assistants looks away and asks what they will do. The big guy with a grin declares that they will teach him a lesson. The gum falls to the ground. The bald boss stands surrounded by assistants. One of them offers to take a metal pipe. He takes it in his hand. They arm themselves, go to the entrance. The frame shows a light switch. The guy turns it off. The protagonist with two batons stands in the frame. He realizes with a serious expression that he does not know since when and how such an attitude towards the owner appeared. Constant denunciations, life in fear and walking through a minefield so as not to run into any danger. The door opens slightly. It is said that once such an attitude is established, it is not easy to change. The hooligans enter inside with a grin. It is explained that one day the thought arises that nothing can be changed. Taechang enters inside. The bald boss turns to the assistant and demands to close the door. He locks the door. The bald boss with his assistant stands in front of Shiho. It is said that he will change this attitude forever. The main character holds a fighting stance with 2 sticks. The fighter squeezes his hand and wonders what the guy is going to fight, and he was not going to kill anyone. But now he will definitely kill. Taechong asks with a grin that he does not understand that he is now like a rat in a trap. The guy calmly replies that they are rats that got into a trap. The bald boss frowns and asks again. The protagonist looks at him. The guy in the kimono walks into the hall. He looks forward furiously. The guy takes 2 wooden clubs. The events take place 4 years ago. The fighters in the black kimono stand opposite. The bald guy with a club and in a white robe stands nearby. The protagonist is surrounded by rivals. It is explained that Shiho from the university sports section is entering the arena and now he will conduct a demonstration. The guy holds a weapon in front of him. It is said that he is not quite an ordinary swordsman, and such gifted people are born once in several centuries, and in Japan there is also a talented kendo master. His name is Shinsuke. The fighters run to attack. The difference between them is explained. The main character deftly parries blows. It is explained that this is Nito-ryu, and Shiho has honed to perfection not only Ito-ryu. The guy fights deftly. It is said that Shinsuke does not own Nito-ryu. The main character runs to attack. The question is asked what Nito-ryu is. He is told that it is the art of fencing with 2 swords of different sizes. The guy is currently running at bandits. It is explained that it is suitable for fighting with multiple opponents. Shiho delivers a strong blow to the neck. It is said that with his Sito he seems to cut his way through the crowd, and indeed, Nito-ryu provides greater mobility during a fight with multiple opponents. The guy fights furiously. It is said that Sito is followed by Daito and does not allow the enemy to get to him from behind. The villain flies away with a scream. The protagonist delivers a series of blows. It is said that sometimes synchronous blows follow. Behind Shiho, a bully swings a pipe. It is said that one breakthrough from behind. The guy fights back. It is explained that the protagonist hits the opponent's wrist with a Sito, and this is a defensive technique. In Nito-ryu, defense takes the main place. Shiho hits his opponents. An exclamation of Chudansei sounds. The protagonist hits the legs. It is said that he strikes the opponent who has come up from behind and makes a sweep with the sword. The bullies fly to the side. Taechong sees his ward flying at him. He pushes them aside and insults. The protagonist runs to the attack with 2 sticks. He delivers a series of crushing blows to the enemies. He hits the opponent's body with a stick. The frightened bullies fly to the sides. He turns around furiously. The protagonist runs after the frightened enemies. It is said that Shiho changes position. The guy leaves bloody marks on the heads of the villains. While it is incredible how agile he is, and the audience is simply delighted. The guy stands against the background of beaten enemies. It is said that he knocked everyone out. An excited Taechong looks at this. It is explained that it is not over yet, because the strongest enemy has just entered the fight. He holds a club in his hands and asks where the mercenary came from. Shiho silently looks forward. Taechong swings and demands an answer. The protagonist blocks the blow with one hand. It is said that Shiho takes the blow with a Daito and delivers a counterattack. The guy holds back the enemy's metal pipe. Taechong looks forward and smirks. He is shocked to see how the protagonist holds him back. The guy prepares a blow. It is said that he attacks the Sito. Taechong looks at this in shock. He is shocked to see the protagonist. The guy hits the boss. There is an exclamation that it was a feint, and Shiho distracted attention. Blood is gushing from Taechong's head. He is standing on his knee in pain and holding his head. The protagonist calmly hangs over him. Taechong is shocked to see blood running down his face. The guy delivers a powerful blow to the big guy's face. Blood is flowing from the boss's head. Shiho is standing with a baton in his hands against the backdrop of a defeated enemy. He is standing with his back turned. He stood in the same pose during training 4 years ago. The guy with 2 batons is standing surrounded by defeated opponents. He extends his hand to his partner. It is said that the audience exploded with loud applause at this magnificent demonstration. The guy with a weapon in his hands and in a kimono is standing opposite the stands. Shiho in a black suit looks forward. He exhales. Sweat is running down his face. He calmly wipes it away. A guy is standing in the hallway. Dozens of enemy bodies are lying around him. The frame shows a tall skyscraper. Sangtae, arms crossed, looks ahead. He asks in a calm voice if it is true that Taechong was killed and that 20 people could not cope with him either. There is a smartphone on the table. The call says that this is true and it looks like Kyangu took his people. He looks down and asks again. Folding his arms, he thinks. He silently looks down and realizes that the guys who were sitting in silence suddenly decided to rebel, and perhaps they have much more trump cards. The boss hears the question of whether to deal with them. He answers that they are most likely waiting for the attack. Sangtae, arms folded, declares that this is a trap and they know that they will come for revenge, clarifying whether the interlocutor is in his right mind. He folds his hands on the table and hears an apology. Gritting his teeth, the boss realizes that first he needs to assess the situation. He clenches his fist and demands to convey his words. The frame shows the sign of the again bar. Kyangu looks ahead in shock. He looks at the guy with the mop and asks if it's all true. He replies that a group of guys attacked him last night, and he defended himself. The man with glasses grabs his head and asks why he didn't close the door, and wasn't he warned. He replies that he himself told him not to listen to anyone else and to do his job. Kyung-gu, holding his head, asks again. A memory appears in the frame where he said that if he were to pester the girl, he could die and that he was just a worker, so he just needed to work. He pointed his finger and said that there was no need to listen to other people's orders. Kyung-gu, lowering his head, says that everything is clear now. The protagonist looks away and says that the furniture is almost undamaged, and he cleaned up everything else. The man with glasses seriously objects that it doesn't matter now. The boss sits on the couch and says that even his blood pressure has jumped. The protagonist with a mop in his hand says that here is the phone. He hands over a broken smartphone and says that he will compensate for everything. The guy with glasses takes it and says that it is Xian's phone. The man with glasses says that a war is about to start because of it. The guy looks at him and asks again. The boss with glasses, sitting on the couch, invites him to come over and they will talk. There are boxes and a mop behind the protagonist. Shiho is sitting opposite the boss. He hands over a card and says that he opened a bank account and put the money he earned into it, and let him withdraw it himself. He hands over a box with a phone and says that it will be his phone. He opened it in his name and linked it to the account, and the fee will be debited automatically. He thanks. Kyung-gu looks down and says that this is all he can do for him, and he needs to leave. The protagonist asks again in surprise. The man with glasses says that the director's henchmen have already called him and said that if they give it to him, they will forget everything, but he cannot hand it over. The protagonist silently lowers his head. Kyung-gu grabs his head and states that if he leaves him, they will have a reason to pester him, so they will have to say goodbye and he can say that he ran away while they were trying to hand him over. The boss looks away and states that this is the only way out now. Shiho seriously says that there is another way out. The man in glasses asks which one. The guy sitting on the chair states that they can say that they will not leave it like this, and if they touch them even once more, and now they will dictate the terms. The boss leans back on the couch. Shiho looks at him and asks what is wrong. He takes off his glasses and states that you need to think sensibly, and if he acts like a schoolboy, it is more like a baby trying to intimidate a fighter. Against the background of the bar interior, it is said that they will see. A guy with two batons stands in the mountains. It is explained that several years ago he held the highest position in a certain field. Kyung-gu, closing his eyes, states that kendo is not a professional sport, but entertainment. The guy says with a serious look that he means the whole world. Kyung-gu looks at him with a serious look. The main character, standing in the background, declares that he has reached the top. Shiho calmly says that some opponents are not worth running from and that they need to be fought back. Kyung-gu lowers his head. He sits on the couch opposite and asks the guy to do it alone. He agrees. He puts on his glasses and says that since Shiho is so arrogant, he will explain what is what. The frame shows two men. It is explained that not long ago Seoul was divided between the Sangchan and Donghae groups. The man holds the fighter by the shoulder. It is explained that suddenly the leader of the group nominated his successor. The picture shows hooligans filming the victim on a phone. It is said that during the unification of the capital, the assistant was killed by the group. The man looks at the girl and says that the redistribution of power will begin soon, and all the shares will be distributed. It is explained that Ji-hee inherited his shares, and although she prevented the unification of the capital, the Do-hyun group did not arrange a funeral. The girl looks in front of her. It is said that the group divided the captured territory, and Ji-hee received gold lands in recognition of her father's merits. The girl sits with papers in front of the man. It is said that she was even promised independence, but she stated that she is not a bandit and tried to transfer all the affairs to Pyeonwook. The man looks in front of himself. It is explained that he was Dae-man's comrade and he was only concerned about the well-being of her daughter. The fighters look after him. It is said that this is why he did not interfere until the subsidiaries paid the rent on time, and then a problem arose in one of the sub-organizations. The picture shows a building. It is explained that he himself worked in this company. Kyung-gu is sitting with a glass of drink. The man opens the door and goes inside. A fierce Sangtae looks at him, saying that he was also involved in this. The people were sitting on the couches and it was said that one day Sangtae gathered the boss, the deputy, and Shiho and was going to tell them something. The dark-haired man looked away, saying that Pyeongwook only seemed to care about money and suggested taking over the lower groups. The man looked forward and asked what then, saying that they would hand him over and make way for Do-hyun. The representative tapped his finger on the table and said that he was occupying Seoul, so they would expand their influence, and they just needed to keep paying the guy and attack the enemy, taking over the entire city. The senior looked away and asked to be realistic, noting that it was not that easy. Sangtae frowned. The director leaned back and asked him to stop talking nonsense, then noted that it was better to focus on business, to which he asked if everyone agreed with that. The guy with glasses put his head on his fist. Gunwoo put his hands in his pockets and said that since the boss said so, they should listen, and then noted that there was nothing more to say. In-sung held the phone and asked if that was true while it was being said that he was in a higher position than Sangtae. He lowered his head, saying that they were cowards. The director leaned over and asked again. He looked towards the slammed door and said that he was an idiot. The bearded man looked away, asking what the director knew, and then said that if he was pacified, he would quickly apologize like a guilty child. The interlocutor bared his teeth, putting his hand on his forehead. The action took place in a house at night, and someone was making sounds of pain. In-sung was leaving the building and asking what was going on. A man with a stick stood in front of him while he asked who it was. He turned around, noticing an armed group of people. The dark-haired man twirled the weapon, saying that he had ambitions, to which the man asked again. He took a step forward. The fighter rushed to attack. The man swung at the owner of the house. There was a blow to the head and drops of blood flew to the sides. The victim crouched, losing consciousness. He was on his knees, stretching his hand forward, and was about to say something. Sangtae grinned, looking away. He struck the face of the owner of the house. Kyung-gu grinned, saying that the intruder quickly overthrew the boss and, not suspecting anything, Gun-woo rejected the offer to join forces and fled to the director in one of the 17 lower organizations of Pyeongwook, and then followed his brother. The interlocutor looked at the man, asking what was going on. Is there someone higher than the president of the company? To which he replied that the dark-haired man rallied the remaining people and quickly expanded his influence. The villain sat on the chair while he was saying that out of 17 groups, 13 were already in his hands. The hero lowered his head, asking when the director joined. Gun-woo stood in front of the bully while he was saying that the day after the boss died, he went to Sangtae, whom he had previously looked down on. The protagonist was calm, asking what 3 more groups he had not yet led. Kyung-gu frowned and asked why he was so curious. MC grinned, saying that they first needed to join forces. The guy raised his hand, asking not to say stupid things and asked what kind of jokes these were. Shiho lowered his head. The man with glasses sat on the couch and asked when he would leave, while the girl asked what was going on. The guys looked towards the girl. The brown-haired girl was holding a phone in her hands and looked worried. She fell to the floor, talking about her phone, while the man asked why she was back already. The hero looked back, asking what was wrong with the phone and apologized, promising to pay for the repair. Shion leaned on the table and asked if it was true, to which he said yes. She approached the guy and said that she bought this phone 3 years ago. The protagonist lowered his head, saying that he was sorry. The sister looked at her brother with interest. She looked at him and asked him to write a promise, noting that she needed proof. Kyung-gu said that now was not the time for this, because they had to go. People left him, while he realized that they were not listening at all. The building towered upwards and someone asked if they had escaped. Sangtae stood in the office and the caller said that they were unable to catch them and Kyung-gu was waiting for a personal apology. The dark-haired man held the phone, thinking that he did not understand anything. The guy was silent while they were asking him what to do. The villain was furious and said that they needed to go straight ahead. The protagonist was sitting in front of his relative, looking at the tablet. A piece of paper was attached to the tablet, on which was written a promise to compensate for the damage. Shion put her hands behind her back and carefully watched her brother. Shiho held out the paper to the girl. She stretched her hand to the side and said that it was here. The hero looked at the girl's finger, which was touching his cheek. The sister laughed, saying that he was caught. The dark-haired man held his hand on his face and was silent. The brown-haired girl tore up the promise and said that everything was fine, to which he replied that he would compensate anyway. The interlocutor threw the papers in the trash, saying that she just wanted to see his reaction, and then asked where he was going, to which he replied that they had not decided yet. Shion looked back and asked if he would be back soon. Kyung-gu burst into the room and called out to the techs. He was holding onto the door frame and asking them to act quickly, because people from State Gangnam would arrive in an hour, to which he asked what it was. The man in glasses turned his head to the side and said that one of the 14 Sangtae groups, and they provide labor, and asked what he was even explaining. The sister put her hand on her jaw and was excited while he said that if they were curious, they could look it up on the internet, and asked again. The interlocutor bared his teeth, asking her to go too and promising that he would tell her later too. Shiho was looking at his phone, leaning on a chair. A request for information about a labor agency was written in the browser. The hero looked away, noticing Shion. She was very excited and ready to cry. The protagonist left, saying that they would be here soon, to which she asked again. The girl followed the gaze of her departing relative. Kyung-gu sat on a chair in front of the cameras. His gaze went to the phone. He picked it up and called out to his boss. The scene was in a shopping mall. Someone's office was visible through the windows. Gun-woo held the phone, saying that it looked like him, noting that the other man had said that there was a problem. The man lowered his head, saying that he would deal with him soon and apologized for causing trouble, to which the other man asked if Taechan hadn't dealt with the problem. The dark-haired man was serious, saying that that was what they said, but he couldn't be sure. The other man leaned over, asking what he thought. The deputy leaned on the windowsill and said that one person couldn't stand up to a crowd of armed bandits, and asked if he hadn't. There was a katana on the table while the caller asked what forces Sancte had at its disposal, saying 14 business groups, each with several subsidiaries, noting that the criminal was a monster and had gathered his own kind around him. The weapon stood in a rack while Gunwoo asked when he had managed to rise up like that, to which he replied that they should lay low and keep a low profile now, so as not to get hit. The man froze, asking why he had to wait for the debt to be paid for killing the boss and betraying him. Kyangu looked away. He lowered his head, saying that not right now, but it would be necessary. The bearded man smiled, saying that he had thought about it and wanted to know more, and then asked to bring him to him. The guy with glasses grinned and asked again, while he was wondering why he needed it. The deputy closed his eyes, saying that he understood and was sorry, while the other was saying that he sent the guy away because he was afraid of a big mess, and if Sancte wanted to get to him, there would be nothing left of them. Gunwoo was walking away from the window, while the subscriber was saying that he would try to mislead the criminal and find out what he needed, to which he asked when the bandit would return and received the answer that time had already passed and he still had not returned. The man was sitting on a chair and playing on the phone. The doors to the office were open. The figure was standing in front of the building. Shiho looked away and thought that he could not circle everything on the way every time. The guy was going up the stairs. The door to the room opened slightly. The hero entered the room, in which there were many people. The bald man leaned over, asking how he could help. The protagonist looked away. There were golf clubs in the backpack. MC was visible in the window, telling his interlocutor that he was looking for a job. The landline phone screen lit up, indicating a call. The employee leaned on the table and, picking up the phone, said that he understood. He approached the stranger and asked him to come back later, saying that they were going to have a meeting now. Shiho was examining the clubs and said that he had just gotten out of the Again club. The interlocutor frowned and asked again. The guy bared his teeth, saying that he was just a security guard, but people came and started a fight, and then noted that they wanted to transfer him to some other place, but he did not want to, and therefore ran away. The man turned around, asking what he meant. He met Taechang, and then asked to wait a second. He picked up the phone. The bald man was talking on the phone, asking the other man to go up, because he needed to see it, to which the caller asked why. Because they would soon be leaving here. MC looked away while he said that he wanted them to come later than Sangchal at all costs, to which the other replied that a guy came here who claimed to have met the bearded man, and then noted that he came safe and sound, on his own 2 feet. The bandit looked back while he asked him if he was thinking with his head and whether he believed it, to which he replied that he needed to check, to which the caller asked to wait, expressing dissatisfaction. The man was sitting indoors and playing on the phone. He looked up, hearing a strange sound from above. The player bared his teeth, asking what that noise was. He went outside, while strange sounds were heard from above. The employee was climbing the stairs. He ran into the room, asking what was going on. The mustachioed man froze and became wary. Horror settled in his eyes. Shiho was holding a bloody hockey stick. Dead bodies of people were lying everywhere. The floor was stained with blood. The bandits were lying unconscious on the floor. The hero was standing in front of the wounded man, who was making strange sounds. There was calm on his face. The observer panicked and asked again. The stick was spinning, approaching the target. It hit the fleeing man in the back and he made a sound of pain. The man fell onto the staircase. The protagonist stood next to the bald man and ordered him to be dragged here, to which he agreed. The wounded man ran to the doorway. The guy in glasses leaned on the table and looked at his phone. Kyangu opened the door, asking where he had disappeared to. He was climbing the stairs, putting his hands in his pockets. The employee frowned and became wary, thinking that he had heard of such a case in Gangnam, but what was this? There was a large group of people standing around him. The man put his hand on his head. His face showed determination. It was raining outside and the clouds hid the sun. Drops of water broke on the cold asphalt. His glasses showed his opponents. Sangchio was leading the group. The dark-haired man bowed his head and asked the name of the guest. The bandit put his hands in his pockets and greeted him, saying that he was sorry that they met under such circumstances, noting that they were once a family. Kyangu lowered his head and asked, interestingly, what circumstances he meant. The gray-haired man smiled, asking that he probably knew that only Chang-su, the director of Sate Gangnam, wanted to come. He turned to the group, saying that he could see for himself. His face showed aggression and he said that there were more people willing to help than expected. The guy with glasses put his hands on his hips and said that he didn't expect those. Sangchio was calm and asked if he was really that naive and noted that he knew who the mafia were, asking if that was true. The bandit raised his eyebrows, asking if he was alone, saying that they could kill him and then his older brother, since he couldn't do anything. The dark-haired guy was wary as he said that this way Sancte could expand its influence. A smile appeared on his interlocutor's face as he said that everything was simple, and then asked if it was true. The fighter bared his teeth, asking what do you mean they came to kill him, but didn't finish. The mafia member smiled and said that he would die today. Shiohi wiped the blood from his face with a rag while the captured one was kneeling. The guy looked away and pushed for an answer. The mustachioed man looked away, saying that he was right, because at first he thought that Kyung-gu hired people to protect himself, and he wanted to see what would happen next, but he asked for mercy and a delay, to which he wanted to follow this, but did not finish. The hero sat on the couch and asked that he sent people again, to which he received the answer that yes, and there were about 40 or 50 of them already, and then added that they were going there to deal with the guy. The clubs were in the backpack and the protagonist asked what role he played, to which he received the answer that he was just bait. The dark-haired man frowned, asking why he did not run away. The criminal looked down and wanted to say something. It was raining outside. He was scared and said that they were from the same family, and despite the fact that he was higher in rank than him, he still treated him with respect, and then noted that he was a little ashamed, so he decided to stay. MC looked at the captured and was silent. Kyung-gu burst into the room. His hand grabbed the switch. He lifted the sofa, wanting to barricade the door. The man grinned, saying that they were freaks. He watched as the criminals tried to break into the building. A crack formed in the opening and the barricade gave in to the pressure from the outside. The mafia burst into the room, waving their weapons. They leaned on the sofa and looked around. Glasses fell to the floor. The fighter stood in a stance, wanting to defend himself from the threat. Sang-chul pounded on the table and asked if he was sure he could survive this fight, noting that he had never seen anyone like this. Kyung-gu smiled, saying that he still had things to do in this world. The enemy stood in front of him and asked him not to have any illusions. He bowed his head. His men rushed to attack. It was pouring rain outside. Shiohi covered himself with his hand from the drops of water. He ran along the road, making splashes in the puddles. The victims were cleaning up while the main one looked at his phone. The bald one approached his interlocutor and asked if they should go there, to which he asked again and clarified whether he wanted to become an enemy of Sancte and die painfully. He put his hand on his face, saying that he had no choice, because he was a small-time bandit and he needed money and did not want to betray. The beaten one looked skeptically to the side and asked again. The man's hand was shaking and he was trying to say something. He closed his eyes and resigned himself. Gunwoo's contact was open on his phone. Something abrupt happened in the building. The fist crashed into the opponent's face. The fighter performed an uppercut. Kyung-gu threw a punch and his head turned around by inertia. The man took a stance and turned around. The crowd was approaching the opponent. The fighter performed a side kick, accurately hitting the opponent's teeth. The employee crouched, dodging the crushing blow. The striker delivered a powerful jab to the bandit's face, disorienting him. Sang-chul moved his hand to the side and said that he was crazy. He waved his hand and looked wary. The defender looked back. He dodged the baton flying at him. Kyung-gu slipped on a pool of blood. The mafia member struck the guy's back. The group members began to gather around and began beating the victim. The fighter was covered in blood and made sounds of pain, absorbing the damage. He pressed himself against the door, being surrounded. The leader of the group ran towards the opponent. He kicked the guy and blood gushed from his nose. The dark-haired man fell to the floor. His foot stepped on the victim's head. The man smiled, calling him insignificant. The man passed the stick to another. Sang-chul swung, preparing to deliver a finishing blow. The phone rushed to the side, spinning in the air. The main one noticed the threat from the side. The device crashed into his face with great force. He covered himself with his hand and made a sound of pain. Kyung-gu was lying on the floor, his gaze fixed on the phone. He remembered how the guy passed the smartphone, saying that the number was registered to him. The victim became wary. The gray-haired man turned around and asked who did this. The officer looked around and thought that it could be him. A powerful blow occurred and several hooligans fell back. Hope froze on the face of the beaten man. Shiohi moved on, looking towards the target. He remembered how he stood behind the bars and asked how he got there. The dark-haired man sat on the couch and said that he only needed a place to sleep and something to eat, noting that he didn't need a salary. The hero lowered his head, saying that they were just making fun of a sick man. His hand clenched into a fist, and he said that it was eating him up. Kyung-gu leaned back, asking him not to even think about doing something stupid, saying that he was just a worker and asked him to just work. The protagonist stood on the mountain. While he had been the best for several years and everything was available to him, and these idiots just needed to be put in their place. MC grinned, saying that he would make them obey. His hands held weapons. The bandits received blows and disappeared into space. The boss kept his foot on his head, while his charges were losing to the savior without a chance. The comrade was stained with blood and thought about that guy. Shiohi fought the crowd, doing a great job. The guy was looking ahead from under his brows while he thought that this was from a completely different league. The action took place in the building of the company organization. The figure was walking down the street. People were standing with umbrellas. The bearded man looked tired and looked away. Gunwoo entered the room and asked what the hell was going on. He looked at the unconscious bodies that were lying on the stairs. There was a sign with the company name on the table. Sancte was standing in the room and holding a phone in his hands. He looked down and asked if it was his partner calling. The man picked up the phone and asked if he was switching to his side. The interlocutor smiled and said that the manager's guys were everywhere again, asking what to do about it. The dark-haired man froze and asked again. The man looked back, saying that he would let them live. He smiled, saying that their property had been damaged, so they would have to compensate for the losses. The criminal put his hand on his head and asked if he had eaten something bad. Gunwoo moved the smartphone away from his ear. His face changed and he called out to the manager. The deputy froze, saying that it was none of his business and noted that when he betrayed the boss, he ran to seek shelter in the organization and was only entrusted with one branch. Sangtae grinned and said meaningfully, "There was a large group of people behind the interlocutor, and he said that he had not captured this group yet, and they were not afraid of him." The bearded man frowned, asking if he wanted a war, while he was thinking that if his interlocutor was from here. They stood opposite each other and Gunwoo asked to prepare to compensate for the losses. His thumb reached for the end call button. The employee looked around, asking what they should do and saying that Sangcheol was hurt. The deputy put his hand on the guy's shoulder and asked him to leave him, to which he repeated. The man went downstairs, asking him not to be petty, saying that he was not a threat to them. He put his foot on the head of the leader and said that if they did not get rid of him, then Sangtae would think that they had nothing left. The chair fell to the floor. The dark-haired man swung, smashing the entire office. He broke the table in half and screamed. The criminal lowered his head. He bared his teeth, thinking that he needed to think carefully about this. The bald man stood in front of the organization, while he thought that Gunwoo was in custody, but the bar continued to operate. The head was bleeding and he said that he sent Tae-chan, but he was defeated. The bandit frowned, thinking that he thought that they had something ready to strike him, because he was too accommodating, so he kicked him out. He closed his eyes and remembered the previous episodes and thought that his guys got their asses kicked and then the deputy showed up. The bearded man looked down, and he assumed that he had thought it all out in advance. The dark-haired man looked ahead and thought that there was a traitor among those comrades. Shiohi looked at the man. Gunwoo held a glass in his hands and asked what was new here, assuming that he had been kicked out. The hero lowered his head and said that he had nowhere to go, so he came back. The bearded man was calm and asked that he dealt with them himself. The fighter looked ahead from under his brows, saying that no, because half of those present had fled. The interlocutor drank the contents of the glass. He put the vessel on the table, saying it was impressive and noted that he had heard that Sangtae was involved in the murder of the family. The deputy leaned his hands on the table. The man took a step. The bearded man approached the interlocutor and said that he was interested in him, and then asked if he would say something himself. He extended his hand. The man lowered his head and offered to catch the bandit together. Shiohi stared at one point and was silent. They shook hands. The action took place in a building. The hooligan held a stick and sat on a chair. He looked down. The girl opened the door and said that the director was here. The man entered the room and asked him to sit down. The wounded man moved the chair away. The killer looked at the guest and said that he had just arrived, so he asked to sit closer. They sat opposite each other. The hand reached for the handle, saying that he would ask again, and then said that of the 4 groups that he sent, Seat Gangnam was the only one that held out to the end without giving up. The man lowered his head and said that some guy just burst in and stirred everything up, and they sorted everything out and moved out late. Sangtae grinned, asking how so? The victim remembered how people stood at the establishment, and said that he had already been like that at that time and the part that had left earlier was already crippled, and then they decided that there was no chance of winning and retreated. The dark-haired man looked away. The short-haired man looked tense. The criminal lowered his head and called out to Changsu. He opened his mouth wide and answered, to which he asked how old he was. The man was excited and said 45. The bandit smiled and asked that he was 10 years older than the director. The ward sat nearby and denied it. The killer stood up and asked, "Really?" The figure stood in front of the man. Sangtae pointed the bat at him and asked him why he had sucked up to Gunwoo. The wounded man froze and was scared. The guy put the blunt weapon on his head and asked if he would follow his orders or want to die. The victim closed his eyes and promised to follow all instructions. The action took place in the house. The partners were standing near the apartment. The guy stood behind the door and asked to come in. The bearded man entered the room and looked around. He stood at the entrance and said that this was not the usual hospital, noting that they come to such places because doctors in regular hospitals report on them. The man was lying on a bed. The guest showed his palm and asked him to lie down, saying that everything was fine. The patient stood up and asked what was wrong. Gunwoo looked at his interlocutor and said that the manager had told him everything, to which he asked again. He remembered Changsu talking on the phone and saying that let him side with Sangtae. He still had warm feelings for them, because they were once a family and he was thinking about how to go on strike and join them after Sangcheol finished work. The victim looked at the other man and asked if he couldn't just switch sides, to which he replied that this was the plan, noting that it was dangerous to stay there. Shiohi was calm and meaningfully silent. The manager ran out of the criminals' organization building. He leaned on a pillar and stopped. The man was excited and looked down. The bandit smiled, saying that Gunwoo would trust him, so let him make an appointment and say that he wanted to commit treason, and then said that the appointed place was Namyangju. Chansu looked at the other man and asked again. Sangtae hit the table. The man present fell into a stupor and froze. The killer looked at his protege and said that he was using him to get rid of the enemy and asked if he understood. His hands were shaking and he said yes. The bat was dented and the villain asked to contact them and say that he was suspected of treason. The guy swung and said that if he started acting up, he himself knew what would happen. There was a powerful blow. Blood splashed the walls. A wound appeared on his cheek and the manager froze. He put his hand in his inside pocket, thinking that he had to do this for the sake of life. The bandit took out his phone. The phone showed a call from him. Gunwoo looked at the screen and asked if he heard their conversation, saying that there was a call. The bearded man picked up the phone and answered. The patient watched the guest while the subscriber said that he wanted to commit treason, to which the other asked again. A smile appeared on the man's face. The director stood next to the hero and said that he just wanted to contact that one for this. The interlocutors held the phone to their ear and he said that he was welcome. The guest held the receiver while he said that he also participated in the spread of reputation, asking if he knew what he was talking about. That is why he was complaining not to him, but to the head of the reputation spreading department. The wounded man looked down and said that then he was saying goodbye to him and would contact him a little later, having found out the place. Gunwoo smiled, saying that he was waiting for a call. Sangtae looked out the window while sitting on a chair. He reached for his smartphone. The guy held the phone to his ear and said, addressing President Park, that it was him. The action took place in the building. People were standing in the elevator and the gray-haired man asked who it was, saying that he was just waiting for a call, to which he replied that it seemed that their guys made a mistake regarding the again company. The elevator was going up to the 7th floor. The old man stood next to the bodyguards and he said that they wanted to improve and restore relations, to which he replied that wow, we've lived to see it, he tells him such a thing, and then noted that life never ceases to amaze. The dark-haired man lowered his head and said that they were thinking about compensation of about 100 million, asking what it was like, to which he asked again. The bandit held the smartphone to his ear and was silent. People entered the building and he asked what it was all about. The employees were in the office while the criminal asked how much he wanted. The mustachioed man looked up and said a price of 300 million, noting that it all had to be in cash. The killer sat opposite the window and asked again. The president entered the office, saying that it seemed reasonable to him, and then asked whether it was better to have 500 million in bonds or as collateral. Sangtae looked at the floor and said that they would prepare 300 million in cash because he needed to launder the money, so he would deliver it personally, and then asked where he should go. Park smiled and said that he would notify the location that day, and then asked by what time he could prepare everything. The bandit put his hand on his face and asked to give him 3 days, and then said that then in 3 days at 7 o'clock in the evening and asked to send him the location immediately. The criminal held the phone next to him, and the call ended. He stood up from the chair. The dark-haired man brought the smartphone to his ear and they introduced themselves. He grinned and said that the meeting would take place in 3 days at 7 o'clock in the evening. Sangtae looked ahead and said that at that time he had to be elsewhere on important business, and that was the only way to agree, to which he noted that he understood. The end of the call was shown on the phone. He put his hand to his face and leaned on the glass. The guy looked ahead from under his brows and smiled. The action took place at the Again organization. The employees held the sofa while Shiohi watched it. She unfolded her arms and asked what happened and what happened to the director. The hero looked away and said that he was injured, so control was temporarily transferred to him. The brown-haired girl put her hand on the table and asked what he was saying, that he would not be able to work for 3 days, and then asked for compensation for the damage. The protagonist lowered his head. The girl smiled and asked if it was nice. MC turned towards the interlocutor. She stood in front of him and asked him to compensate for the damage, to which he replied that he had no money, and she asked who was asking for money, and then the guy became interested, as she then suggested going on a date. Shion looked at Shiohi and said that she was very bored today, to which the guy asked again. The girl smiled and suggested that he was moving to the store, to which he noted that too. Night fell outside. The old man stood at the table and asked what this was a complaint, to which Gunwoo said that they used to be a family. The deputy reached for the cup and said that he thought Sangtae had some business in 3 days in the evening, and he would be able to leave only at that time, and the meeting place was far away. The president opened the refrigerator and said that at the same time he would have a deal with someone, to which he asked that he trusted him. The liquid poured into the glass and Park said that the criminal promised to come in person. The interlocutor introduced the killer and said that he was a snake, so he would bring his fighters. Gray-haired sat down and asked that his interlocutor would bring Chansu, and if so, there would be enough fighters. The bodyguards were standing nearby and he said that he had Minyak and Jinsik. Gunwoo looked at the cup and said that just in case he would take one more person with him, because he turned out to be a good friend. Yuzadi smiled and asked who it was, to which he replied that it was a man who was eager to tear off Sangtae's head, because he had lost his family. Park looked at the liquid in the glass and assumed that he lived in some cave. The deputy drank the contents of the cup and said that he thought that life was unbearable for him. The man looked at one point and was silent. Shiohi sat opposite him. All the pain he had endured in life was written on his face, and he thought that he was in eternal torment and could only wait for death. The action took place in a pink building. The couple sat at the table, and the waitress said that it was delicious. The hero lowered his head and said that it was delicious. The girl extended her hands and wished him a pleasant appetite, and he thought, what if he was finished off? Shion pulled a fork with food towards the guy, while Gunwoo thought that he had nothing to lose, because he did not know happiness, so if he was sacrificed, then no one would be bad, but he did not finish. The girl laughed and cried with laughter, while the man thought that he could blame everything on fate. The protagonist lowered his head and became embarrassed. The couple walked down the street. The brown-haired woman looked away while the fighter spoke on the phone. MC lowered his head and asked to send a list of names in 3 days. He looked away and she called out to him. The girlfriend folded her hands behind her back and asked if they could go for a walk tomorrow. Shiohi stood opposite and asked again, to which she asked that he said that it would take 3 days, and then asked to entertain her for these 3 days. The dark-haired man froze. He stood with a backpack and the girl called out to him. The hero turned around. Shion looked at him. She held his hand. The twins stood nearby. The guy stroked his girlfriend's head. The couple passed by the establishment. The figure stood near the doors. The brown-haired girl turned around and became interested. The protagonist was calm and said that it seemed to him that she had chosen the wrong person. The companion froze and asked again. People were passing by them. Lanterns illuminated the street, and she asked what he meant. She stood opposite the guy and asked what he could have done to displease her, and asked him to tell her, and not run away like a coward. He took her hand. Shiohi pulled her along with him. The couple sat on a bench next to the playground. They looked upset. The hero was tired and said that he killed a man. Shion looked away and asked again. He looked at the floor and said that he insulted his late mother with words that should not have been spoken. The brunette was stunned while he was saying that she was killed, and even earlier his younger brother was killed. The protagonist sat on a bench and said that he was looking for the killer to take revenge, and then turn himself into the police, and then they would not meet again, but did not finish. The girl looked forward and said that this is how it should be. MC turned to his interlocutor. She looked at the guy and said that such people should be killed and asked what he thought she would believe, and then asked why he said such things if he knew that she would report to the police. Shiohi lowered his head and said that she said what she felt, and he constantly held back, and then noted that her actions were conducive. The companion sat next to him and suggested summing it up by asking what he wanted to say, that he shouldn't be loved because he would end up in prison anyway. The guy was calm and apologized for what if he misunderstood. Shion smiled and asked if he really liked her. The protagonist looked away and said that he didn't really. Her finger hit his lips. The companion smiled and said that she was happy with the fact that he didn't hate her, and that she would think about the bad things when they happened. It was night outside and he wanted to talk about the future, but he was interrupted, to which she asked him to forget about the future and enjoy the moment. The protagonist lowered his head and was meaningfully silent. The street lamp was illuminating the street, and she was saying that with him she was becoming a fool and she didn't care about the future, so she would just love the one she already liked, while he was saying that he shouldn't love anyone at all, to which she replied that she was an expert in unrequited feelings and later, when it hurts, she was ready to cry a lot, but not now. But she didn't finish, and he said that the result was obvious. The brunette looked at the guy and said that she just wanted to enjoy the relationship and asked him not to push her away. Shiohi turned his head to the interlocutor. She put her head on his shoulder. The hero opened his mouth. His hand lay on Shion's hair. She lowered her head and smiled slightly. People were standing in the technical room 3 days later. The man appeared next to him and headed towards the chair. The gray-haired man was followed by bodyguards, and the fighters formed a corridor. One of the guards noticed the protagonist. Jinsik looked at the guy and asked what kind of hack work this was. Park sat on a chair and said that this was a friend sent to help Gunwoo, noting that Sangtae would never pay much for anything. The employee turned his head and asked that he sent one person for show, noting that if he died here by accident, it would be a death in vain for the sake of another family, and asked if he was deaf. MC looked at the guy. The man left, saying that he would not help here in any way and asked to leave, to which the other asked, "What is it like that?" Minhyuk pointed his finger to the side and said that they would take the criminal on themselves, but if anyone was going to run away, then let Shiohi beat him with a baton, standing outside, and asked if he could handle it. The hero looked at the exit and said that he understood. He began to move to the side. The bodyguards looked back. The protagonist stopped at the entrance while the other one asked him that he looked tough, but obediently slunk off to stand behind the door while the other one said that they would tie everyone up themselves and asked what else was needed, hoping that no one would beg for mercy. MC stood at the entrance and was silent. The boss sits on a chair surrounded by his henchmen. He looks at his watch and asks why he hasn't arrived yet. The thugs laugh after one of them says he's scared. The car drives inside. The guy with the metal pipe looks away and wonders if he'll show up after all. The car drives on. The fighter gets out. The headlights blind the hooligans. The fighter walks towards them. Sancte, looking menacing, declares that he came alone, as agreed, asking who the two were. The old man in the jacket says he was playing it safe and apologizes for being so cautious. The guy smirks. The old man looks at him and asks where the money is. The fighter stands opposite and explains that he just came in, and although the parking lot on the first floor is empty, there are several dozen people hiding on the second. The bandits move forward, and the question is asked that they wanted to lock the exit from above and drive him into a corner. Sancte, with a bloody hand, claims that he started there. The old man jumps up from his chair in shock. The mad Sancte declares that there is no need to apologize, because he came to rip their throats out. The man shouts in rage that he is a fool. Minhyuk, holding a metal pipe in his hands, runs to the attack, shouting that he will get it. Dozens of bandits run at each other. They almost meet. The frame shows an evening house in the middle of the forest. A car drove up to a man. They say that he is here. A man in a jacket gets into the car. Gunwoo looks away and says that everything needs to be done quickly, because he came because there is no one else, and he cannot leave the chairman alone. The worried interlocutor apologizes, declaring that he thought that now that Sancte has gone blind in one eye, this is his last chance. The car moves forward. A question is asked about the family. He answers that he is alone. Gunwoo frowns at the mirror. He glances at the passenger in the front seat. Dozens of fighters fight each other fiercely using metal pipes. Minhyuk delivers a powerful blow to the enemy. Sancte rolls up his sleeves and asks if they really offer him to take matters into his own hands. He runs at the enemy shouting Minhyuk. The fighter swings his fist, seeing a frightened opponent in front of him. He delivers a powerful blow to the opponent's face. Minhyuk flies to the side and falls. He holds his bloody nose and insults Sancte. Minhyuk runs towards him and tries to counterattack. The fighter is surprised to see a fist flying in front of him. They meet their fists. Minhyuk screams in pain, holding his hand. It is clear that his fingers are broken. Sancte rushes at him, wanting to use the move. The fighter in the shirt deftly throws him above himself. He slams the opponent's head into the floor. The hooligans turn around in surprise and see what is happening. Jinsik and the old man see this. The man closes his eyes in fear. Sancte, with his head down, declares that he will go first and lead the way. He calls for them to follow him with a mad look. He goes forward. The fighter starts to run. The frightened old man sees Sancte approaching. The fighter, with a terrifying grin, flies to attack. The old man turns around and runs away, shouting for the other to get up. Sancte deftly jumps over the bodyguard and pursues the old man. He does a sweep and he flies to the floor. Jinsik turns around in shock. Insong appears in front of him. Sancte holds the old man by the neck and tells him to put the seal, and then the old man's sins will become his. He begs and says that he will put it. The fighter, with a mad look, bends down and asks if he really wants mercy. Only 4 fingers are enough to put the seal. The frightened old man with his hands on his head screams no. The fighter squeezes his flesh with his powerful hands. He tears out a part of his enemy's body. The car's headlights are on. Sancte stands over the old man with a bloody hand. Blood is dripping from his neck. It flows and reaches his hand. Sancte looks at his palm in shock. The fighter hangs over the dead enemy. Jinsik watches in shock. The shocked bandits ask if this is really the end and what to do now. Sancte looks ahead and declares that he will spare those who go over to their side and kill the rest. Insong hears the appeal and exclaims yes. The fighter gets up from the body of the dead enemy and tells the director to cut off his thumb for him and immediately sit down to draw up the documents, and then go to Pyeongwook. Sancte turns around and clarifies who in the hierarchy comes after the director. The excited man runs forward, declaring that it is he, Wang. Sancte passes by and orders him to finish off those who are not with them. The fighter in the shirt gets into the car. He looks at the seat on which there are stacks of papers. The guy looks away with a serious expression. Insong cuts off the old man's finger. He harshly runs the knife along his hand. Sancte sees this and smirks. The assistant wraps the finger in a bag. He runs up to the car with it. Insong hands it to the boss and says, "Here you go." The boss, with glassy eyes, unpacks the bag. He touches the severed finger to the device. He sits opposite the papers. The boss asks the frightened Insong why he froze and why he doesn't get behind the wheel. The car quickly drives out of the parking lot. Huang turns around and watches them. He turns around and declares that everyone who surrenders should drop their weapons and kneel. A metal pipe falls to the floor. The bandits in suits kneel. Huang turns around with a grin and asks who is in front of him. Jinsik looks at him with hatred. The fat man smiles and orders to kill him. Jinsik suddenly takes off and runs away. He quickly walks towards the exit. Huang, with the bandits running in the background, shouts to pursue him. A white car drives along a forest road. Gunwoo is driving, Next to him is a man in a suit. They look ahead, the driver asks questioningly. Several cars drive out in front of them. Gunwoo calmly gets out of the car. In front of him are bandits with metal pipes in their hands. Beck with a grin tells him to get out, because Kyung-gu has come and they will organize a funeral for him, clarifying whether he understands that he will not survive. Gunwoo turns around and sees a frightened companion. He asks with a smile that they must have also threatened the boss. The man puts his fists in front of him. Jinsik quickly runs away from his pursuers. He opens the doors tiredly. He climbs the stairs where the protagonist is standing and shouts for him to open the emergency exit. Jinsik looks ahead in shock. Several sticks fly to the side. One of them hits him on the head. He falls to the ground, the metal stick clanging. Dozens of bandits with guns hear this and enter the stairs. Jinsik screams with a bloody forehead that he will die a dog's death. He looks down questioningly, while Shiho raises the stick. He looks up with hatred and asks what he is doing. The protagonist turns around and declares that he is following his order. In the flashback, Miyap told him that they are taking sanctity on themselves, but if someone runs away, they must meet them with a baton, standing outside. They exchange glances with a smirk. The protagonist, with a pipe in his hands, declares that apparently the moment has come. He calmly looks down at his opponent. The frame shows an evening forest. Gunwoo hits his opponent in the face. He deals powerful blows to the enemies. Beck looks on in amazement along with his henchmen. The fighter in the suit takes a fighting stance against the villains. Beck loudly orders them to disperse. Gunwoo turns around. The villain with a grin and a knife in his hands offers to fight one-on-one. Gunwoo holding his head declares that a knife against fists is unfair. The other replies that if he is not satisfied, he can also take a blade. The man with a grin takes off his jacket. He puts it on the hood of the car. Gunwoo calmly takes a fighting stance with his fists. Beck runs to attack with a mad look. He approaches the enemy opposite. Beck gets hit in the face with a jacket and sees nothing. He pulls it off his face in rage. The villain in shock sees a fist in front of him. Gunwoo strikes, but he dodges. Their eyes meet. Gunwoo skillfully dodges all the attacks. They look at each other. The man slides on the ground. He puts his feet together. He slides on the ground. Gunwoo falls to the ground. Beck notices this, laughing. Gunwoo is lying on the ground, surrounded by his enemies with weapons. He sees them approaching him. The man grabs the ledge. Beck, furious, shouts at his henchman to hit him. He swings his knife with a smirk. The frame shows a table with an exit sign. Shiho is standing in front of Jinsik. The bandits are climbing the stairs. Huang looks up and clarifies that he is going to fight them. The protagonist holds his weapon in front of him with both hands. Jinsik turns around and runs up the stairs, shouting that he clearly told him to run. Huang, laughing, turns around at his accomplices and says, "Let's run away." A scoundrel with a pipe in his hands insults Shiho. He stands in front of him and asks why the guy is standing. The protagonist frantically holds a pipe in front of him. The enemy swings and screams for him to die. The guy puts the pipe in front of him and prepares to meet the blow. He deftly hits his opponent in the face. The enemy drops the weapon in shock and tries to breathe. Shiho delivers another powerful blow to his head. He falls to the ground with a broken head. Jinsik looks at what is happening in shock. Huang and the others look on in surprise. He extends his hand to the assistant. Shiho frantically tells him to ask politely. He turns around with a mad look and says that in that case he will spare him. Huang giggles excitedly. He turns around and waves his hand to the others. Dozens of fighters rush up the stairs. Huang orders the fierce fighters to finish off the protagonist. They run up higher. Shiho deftly kicks them. He deals strong blows with his club. The bandits fly apart. The discouraged villains see this. The protagonist holds a stick with both hands and wields it. The frightened fighters stand in front and scream. One of them receives a powerful blow to the head. The other screams in shock from the damage received. Shiho turns around in front of the beaten opponents who are lying on the ground. An excited Huang stands next to his accomplices and watches what is happening. The protagonist stands with his head turned. He calmly holds the pipe out in front of him and looks ahead. Jinsik runs higher. With a wounded eye, he sighs in shock. Huang stands discouraged and looks ahead. The bodies of beaten bandits lie on the floor. Dozens of fighters lie on the steps. Shiho, holding a metal pipe in his hands, goes down below. He calmly turns around. A bandit with a gun runs and says, "Damn." The picture shows a staircase with smoke. Shiho climbs it. He looks away. The protagonist walks toward the enemy, who declares that you can't beat people like that. The guy holds a metal pipe out in front of him. A frightened Huang stands opposite and repeats that you can't do that. He touches the wall with his back in shock. The protagonist silently looks at him. The metal stick falls to the floor. He kneels down and declares that he surrenders. The frame shows the lights of a night city. A black car drives down the street. Sangtae is sitting in the back seat and says that he is quite tired, asking how much longer the drive will be. The car is driving near a skyscraper. They say that they are almost there. The fighter is holding a rag over his eye, declaring that everything must be passed on to Pyonwook and whoever he is. It is a shame that he has to grovel before this worthless person. The picture shows a tall building. The lights are still on the top floor. The frame shows a stylish office with people sitting in it. The picture shows a spacious, bright room. The inscription Pyonwook is engraved on the table. A man is sitting at the table. Next to him a man is on the couch. Pyonwook folded his arms and looks forward. The black car stopped, and they get out. Sancte puts on a burgundy jacket. He tightens his tie. The fighter is standing against the backdrop of a tall building. He goes inside. A girl is standing at the entrance. She sees the big guy off further. Sancte, entering the office, bows and greets the representative. Pyonwook moves his hand away and talks about the documents. Sancte hands the papers to the secretary. The man sees her bring them to his desk. Sancte looks at the boss in silence. The man is sitting on a white sofa. He looks ahead in shock. The hero with the beard gives him a serious look. He looks at Sancte with hatred. Someone sticks a knife into the ground. Beck climbs higher with a smirk, seeing Gunwoo in front of him. Suddenly, he runs away, pushing aside the bandits. They see him jump over and head for the bushes. Beck smirks and asks where he is going. Gunwoo deftly slides down the rock and goes down below. He trips. The man falls down and hits the rocks. He turns around with a beaten look and says damn. Gunwoo sees guys in black suits running after him. He turns around and notices a white car on the road. Chansu sits behind the wheel and orders him to get in faster. Gunwoo watches in shock as his rivals approach him. Chansu, behind the wheel, loudly declares that they need to hurry. Gunwoo sighs with a serious expression. He approaches the open door of the car. Dozens of hooligans jumped out onto the road and saw them drive away. Pyonwook sits in his chair and looks at the papers. He notices blood on the corner of the documents. He looks at Sancte and clarifies that he received all the authority from the director, who agrees. Pyonwook, holding his hand to his face, asks what the documents are dirty with. Sancte looks at his interlocutor and says that it is a seal, because the director put a seal and there are traces of it. Pyonwook looks at him calmly. Sancte, wearing a burgundy jacket, watches, wondering if he really wants to scare him, because he is still lenient. The fighter looks away. Pyonwook smiles. He sits in the chair opposite him and asks if the rumors about the representative are true. He asks again. Pyonwook explains with a grin what they say. He has been recruiting people from his subordinates lately. Sancte stands in front of him, holding his hands behind his back. The fighter says with a smile that these are just rumors and they are familiar with him. Sometimes they even drink. The boss holds his head with his hand and smiles. He folds his hands in front of himself and says to remember that if he crosses the line. He declares with a frightening look that he will find him. Sancte listens to him silently. The fighter with long hair grins. He says with a smile that he provides them with a good life and therefore he will be careful, because he would not want to get it from him. The bearded man looks away. Pyonwook hands the papers to the secretary and declares that the Sancte representative has already lured everyone to his side and he has good talent, specifying that he can go now. The secretary follows the bearded man. She shows Sancte the way, he in turn thanks her. The fighter in the maroon suit leaves the room. Pyonwook sits in a chair, the man next to him on the couch. The boss asks with a smile if he saw his face, because he is really afraid. The bearded man silently looks away. Pyonwook sprawls in the chair and asks if such a fighter really made so much noise, and he is grateful for tracking his movements around his territory and the desire to help, but he is not very pleased about it. The interlocutor gets up from the couch and says that he understands. Pyonwook gets up from the chair, seeing him leaving. The bearded man walks forward and remains silent. He turns around and declares that a wolf, even in sheep's clothing, remains a wolf. A black car rushes along the night road. Sancte sits thoughtfully. He wonders with a grin if only the chosen ones can rule worthy, and now he cannot be stopped. He looks at the smartphone, realizing that Pyonwook is nothing, the problem is something else. The frame shows a call from Huang. The protagonist holds the phone to his ear. Shiho is standing with a pipe opposite Huang, who is sitting, and he asks if he has finished. Shiho calmly denies it. Sancte is in the car holding the phone to his ear. He asks with a smile who he is and why he is interfering with his work. Shiho calmly advises him to get used to it, because he will always interfere with him from now on. Sancte is riding in the back seat and asks if he is too impudent, and if he is suicidal, then they will help him die. Sancte is shocked to hear the words that they will still watch. The protagonist calmly declares that he will finish him off. Huang and Jinsik look up in shock. Insom swallows saliva from excitement in the car. Shiho is standing opposite Sancte. They look at each other. The frame shows a working projector. Fighters in kimonos are fighting. It is said that Sancte was called differently at that time, and at the age of 20 he was already a member of the national judo team in the 90-kilogram category. He chokes an opponent. It is explained that at the age of 21 he accidentally killed a classmate while practicing a choke hold and his sports career was ruined, but they managed to come to an agreement with the family of the deceased. In the picture, Sangtae is arrested. It is said that he was sentenced to 4 years in prison and was released at the age of 25. He beat up his opponent in the ring with a crazy look. It is explained that after that he changes his name to Sangtae and continues to practice martial arts, makes his debut at the professional level, received recognition when he knocked out 5 opponents in a row. In the frame, a fighter in glasses and a suit, it is said that a year later he became the head of security at Gold. The girl shows a presentation on the projector, explaining that the rest that everyone knows is that he betrays the boss and calmly expands his influence. Men in a conference room watching a presentation. Choi from Seoyang looks at the audience and says that's all. A man sits in a chair, saying that such a person in gold must have been a big hindrance, clarifying how they came up with the idea of making Sangtae the key figure of the group. The bearded man says that he did not touch anyone, either colleagues, nor family, nor acquaintances, but he killed an authority figure for his own ambitions, and he believes that it is not worth opening the road to success for such people. The long-haired interlocutor says with a smile that he is as serious as always, and he thought so too. Choi looks at them. The worried man wants to say something. Crossing his arms, he says that they need to deal with Pyonwook before he becomes a threat, and his abilities are impressive, but for them he is too small. The bearded man says that Taechang and Sangcheol suffered colossal losses. The frame shows their bloody photos. He calmly says that Taechang now has difficulty walking. The interlocutor turns his head questioningly. The frame shows the images of the heroes. It is said that, judging by everything, a revolution has begun in the Sangtae Empire. The man, looking at the presentation, says that it is not bad and it is better not to interfere and quietly disappear. He points his finger at Sangtae and talks about this guy. Covering his face with his hands, he asks that it is unlikely that any of the lower-ranking ones will take him on. The bearded man calmly says that he and Hisu are ready to watch him. The long-haired guy thanks him with a grin, stating that they will figure out how to act themselves and he will no longer give instructions and ask questions on this matter. He seriously orders them to report on everything as soon as it is resolved. The word good sounds against the background of the conference room sign. The long-haired guy is the chairman of the company. His name is Indium. In the frame, a bright sign of the Again establishment. Inside, there are many workers and guests. The girl asks how long they have not worked in normal mode. The waiter turns to Ryan and asks when the boss will arrive. She replies that he has already arrived. The manager turns and says that he is in the office and he is now having an important conversation. The frame shows the corridors of the establishment. The picture shows a wall. Kyangu is standing behind it with his arms crossed. Several participants in the conversation are sitting around him. Gunwoo, sitting on the couch, says that all rights to the brand are transferred to them as well as the rights to the business. The boss exclaims that he just got out of the hospital, and then this happened. The main character, sitting next to them, says that after his call, Sangtae has not been heard. The deputy, with a serious look, says that he has gone into hiding and, although he looks stupid, he is actually cunning, and the quieter he is, the harder he will hit. Kyangu, with his arms crossed, asks what they should do, clarifying what Changsu thinks about this. The man scratches his head and says that after his betrayal, he does not even know what to say. Gunwoo, smiling, says that he began to suspect Sangtae when he said that he left his family and is now alone. Changsu looks at him and says that he successfully deceived him and has nothing to say. He replies that he did not know about it. Shiho looks at the accomplices and asks if he can express his opinion. They say yes. The protagonist with a serious look states that Seoul is dominated by a powerful organization. In the frame, there are silhouettes of people. It is said that its board of directors includes 12 people, each of whom has power. In the picture Pyonwook, it is explained that he is one of them, created 17 subordinate organizations, and such large companies are under the control of 3 to 4 more subordinates. The frame shows an old man and a man. Gunwoo looks at him and says the truth. The protagonist stands near the boss and states that even if Sangtae deceives Pyonwook and expands its influence further, he only has 2 places to choose from where he can go. Shiho looks at them and states that the other board members are more experienced than Pyonwook. Shiho calmly says that then Sangtae will turn his attention to the province. Gunwoo looks at the boss and states that the villain is capable of such a thing, asking if he remembers what he said before the attack. In the frame, Sangtae said that the capital is occupied and therefore he will expand his influence in other cities. And for now he will simply pay Pyonwook, and when the time comes, he will capture Seoul. Kyangu, gritting his teeth, declares that this is just nonsense. Shiho sits surrounded by his teammates, and says that they must be the first to capture the cities. The surprised boss declares that this is madness. The main character, with a serious look, says that in Seoul, Duhyun will be an obstacle for Sangtae, and they must block his escape routes. He holds a dart in his hands and claims that then they will use his own methods, cut off his flow of capital, and ultimately, the dart hits the center of the target. The guy points his finger and declares that they will eliminate him. Gunwoo asks with a smile, "So how is it?" The boss exclaims the elder. He puts out his hand with a grin and declares that he should put it down if he is ready for madness. Shiho puts his hand down. Chan-su excitedly touches their palms. Kyung-gu asks in surprise that he seriously wants to say that they will compete with Sangtae, because they are not comparable in strength, and it is too risky. The dissatisfied teammates hold each other's hands and wait for the boss's turn. The bespectacled man grabs his head and says that he is delighted. He puts his hand on top and declares that he is in. Gunwoo looks on with a smile. Shiho watches calmly. Chan-su looks on excitedly. Kyung-gu closes his eyes with a grin. 4 hands hold each other as one. The frame shows a tall building at night. The picture shows doors. A girl with papers stands next to another and asks why it is so quiet, and if she is worried, she replies that he has not moved for 3 days and maybe something happened. Sangtae silently looks out the window. He sits calmly in a chair. The work phone began to ring. He pokes his fingers at the buttons. Sangtae seriously asks who is there. The phone says Mr. In-sung is calling in the background. Sangtae calmly tells him to connect. The boss sits in a chair and hears that the director is currently inspecting the company. Again refused, and they say they have a different form of share distribution. He smirks. Sangtae asks with a smirk if Kyung-gu is really there now. He sits in a chair and clarifies how the form is different. It says that he trusted the director and received the business, and the difference is that the key share package was in the subsidiary company again, and he just bought it out. The boss, sitting in a chair, asks what's in it. Sangtae hears with a smile that after comparing the date of their contract with the date of purchase of the shares, he answers that he chooses not to interfere. A question is heard in the background of the phone. The boss, looking out the window, says that there is no need to interfere because it looks like they agreed to return Huang there. In-sung is driving with a sad face. He looks ahead and realizes that Beck was not punished for the incident with Gun-woo, and Sangtae is still holding on to Huang, and it is obvious that something is not being agreed upon. In the frame, the boss is sitting with a surprised face. Against the background of a man and many silhouettes, it is said that in 17 divisions of Pyeongwook, only 2 candidates were found. These are Gwanghyung and Kyeonma. Against the background of Gunwoo, it is said that the team will meet them at one of the designated places, and they will probably need outside help. And when they gather, Sangtae laughs. It is explained that something interesting will begin. In the frame, the night city of Namyangju. The protagonist walks along the street with the boss. A bespectacled man points his finger. They approach a white car. They examine the building. Kyung-gu asks why it is so empty and whether they are really going there. The protagonist seriously offers to go in. Kyung-gu opens the door of the HR department. They go in and see a lot of people inside. A man in a white sweater sits in a chair and does not understand what is happening. Kyung-gu asks with a smile if Director Ji-hong is here. The surprised man asks who the new guys are. A phone is shown in the frame. He calls on it and clarifies that the director is at Ultra Karaoke, stating that he will do something. The big guy on the couch points his finger and says that they need to go there. The blonde looks at Shiho and calls him cute. The main character looks away with a serious expression. The assistant waves his hand and says that if he does not want to get punched in the face, then he should leave. Kyung-gu takes off his glasses with a smile and says that they are here on business. The interlocutor laughingly asks if they are opening karaoke, because they could have just called. Kyung-gu smilingly says no. The main character stands next to the shocked boss and says that they want to expand their influence in Seoul and are looking for someone to crush. The surprised interlocutor asks again. Kyung-gu looks away and clarifies what is wrong with him. The protagonist looks at the men and thinks that the bandits, who intimidate others, can also be intimidated. The interlocutor warms up his hands and clarifies that they came to take over their business. Shiho calmly declares that this is so. The man begins to laugh loudly. He hangs over the guy and claims that this will only be over his dead body. The protagonist sees rivals in front of him. He watches closely. The frame shows a night alley near the building. Suddenly, the big guy flies out the window. He lands on his back on the asphalt. The bald fat man holds his back and screams in pain. Kyung-gu without glasses watches what is happening. Shiho is standing in front of him. The protagonist calmly looks around. The interlocutor hides behind the girls and asks what they want. The protagonist sits next to the boss on the couch. The door opens. An assistant in a white sweater goes inside. A crowd of bandits in black suits came in with him. The man turns to the protagonist and says that it is them. Ji-hyun pushes the assistant away and asks what kind of suckers they are. He sits down on the couch with a smirk, asking if they really want to form an alliance. He lights a cigarette and says he's listening. Kyung-gu says with a smile that they own a small bar. The protagonist suddenly declares that this is not an alliance. Surprised, Ji-hyun asks what? The boss in glasses looks at what is happening with an excited expression. He turns to Shiho and asks what he is doing. The man opposite him raises his hand. He asks with a smirk what they are creating then. The protagonist calmly declares that this is a warning. The man breaks the cigarette in his hands and asks again. Shiho seriously declares that from now on he obeys them. Ji-hyun looks at him with crazy eyes. The protagonist watches calmly. It is said that it is stupid to waste time on pleasantries and concluding agreements. The heroes sit surrounded by bandits. It is said that they are savages. The hooligans in suits begin to laugh. The protagonist with a serious face understands that it is necessary to subdue them and instantly expand his possessions. Kyangu watches as Shiho gets up from the couch. In the picture there is a bright sign of the Again bar. The door opens. Gunwoo with a smile says welcome. He looks ahead in shock. He with a smile specifies that the fateful day is already today. Sangtae in glasses says that he came alone to talk. Gunwoo points his finger to the side and declares that in the bar they only talk, specifying how much he wants. Sangtae with a grin declares that he does not need ladies, but needs him. The interlocutor with a smile says wow. Sangtae smiles. He walks down the corridor. The fighter in the burgundy suit sits down on the couch. Gunwoo comes to him. He also sits down and says that it is quite brave to penetrate the enemy camp alone, specifying what they will talk about. Sangtae says with a smile that he worked in gold and there each element was subordinate to the other. The interlocutor sitting opposite asks what's in it. The fighter, grinning, declares that the world has already been created, order has been established, and everyone obeys it. Sangtae in glasses says that there was a split at the top and power was divided. Gunwoo frowned and listened silently. Against the background of guys in suits, it is said that at the top they are fighting for power over the world, and they are simply obeying the new master. Gunwoo, with a serious look, clarifies what he wants to say by this. Sangtae in glasses is depicted against the background of guys in suits. The fighter takes off his glasses and says the same. He is depicted with glassy eyes against the background of bosses and declares that he would also like to become the master of the world. The interlocutor, frowning, hears this. He looks at him and asks again. Sangtae smiles and asks why not. He looks at the man in front of him and asks why only they have the right to rule the world. Gunwoo opens his eyes in shock. Sangtae laughs and says that his whole soul demands power. A drop of sweat drips down Gunwoo's neck. He lowers his head and asks what he wants to surpass the two largest organizations in the capital. The fighter says with a grin that in order to get what he wants, he needs to risk his life and that there is nothing more important to a man. Gunwoo looks at him and asks why he is telling him this. Sangtae smiles and invites him to join. The man in the white sweater asks what. The interlocutor says with a sly smile that they will create a new world together. Gunwoo smiles. He seriously states that no matter what he says, he is a traitor. Sangtae puts on his glasses and says that for the future, this is a bygone stage and can't the path to domination be paved with blood? Gunwoo lowers his head and says yes. A man is reflected in the fighter's glasses. He asks why he obeys the order created by others and why he condemns the one who wants to build a new one. Gunwoo says with a serious look that there is a traitor sitting in front of him and he can barely restrain himself from killing him on the spot. Sangtae smirks. He sits opposite him and says that he is delirious. The interlocutor asks again. Sangtae leaves and says that blackmail is a method of the strong. He leaves the room. Gunwoo watches him warily. Shion looks at his smartphone and understands that he is at it again. She is shocked to see Sangtae walking in front of her. He passes her. He asks with a smirk if she wants to live, suggesting that she quit her job in that case. She turns around and is perplexed. Shion looks at him excitedly. The picture shows a bloody microphone. Hooligans in black suits are lying unconscious on the floor. The protagonist is holding his assistant by the hair. Shiho turns around with a crazy look. The frightened boss crawls along the couch. He looks up in shock and sees a guy in front of him. The protagonist hangs over him and orders him to bow his head. He immediately lowers his head. Shiho, holding a microphone in his hands, declares that this is their relationship. They rule and he obeys. He says that he understands. Kyangu sits on the couch with his arms crossed. He looks up with a displeased face. The guy goes to the exit and tells the boss that they need to sign the equity participation agreement and leave. The boss in glasses sits on the couch and says that the protagonist intimidates people. Shiho turns around and declares that he is simply demonstrating the difference in strength, and quickly subdues. The distraught Kyangu says that he has become like Sangtae. The surprised protagonist looks at him. A white car rushes along the night road. Kyangu sits behind the wheel with a serious look. The protagonist sits in the passenger seat and looks out the window. Shiho apologizes to him. The boss clarifies why. The main character with a serious face says that he is not released by his words about the similarity with Sangtae. Kyangu closes his eyes and sighs. They are driving in a car. The boss sits next to him and asks if he remembers how he said about how Do-hyun attacked Sankum and Teachio before declaring himself in the capital. He says yes. In the frame, a man with a crazy look says that Sang-chan is just a street fighter and with great strength and impartiality he quickly crushed enemies and gained influence. In the frame, businessmen in suits are explained that Teachio was a country bumpkin and still made it to Seoul. The young guy smiles, explains that he met Jinsik and he specially gave simpletons very difficult missions. He grinned and ordered to return his karaoke. In the background of the building it is said that there was a karaoke, and originally belonged to the company to which Jasik belongs. Against the background of the interior, it is explained that things were going badly and the owner lost the establishment. A man is standing with assistants. It is said that Techiel and them quickly figured out what happened and returned the business to Jinsik in one day. The guy with a grin said that he would figure it out, but in exchange it would become their base and they would be freed from the lease. Kyungu, sitting behind the wheel, says that Jasik looked at the villagers in surprise and Techiel put his life on the line then. The protagonist turns around and listens to him. Against the background of a green traffic light, it is said that after that, his influence increased sharply and he earned the authority of local sellers and his main strategy in winning people's trust. The car is driving among others. It is explained that if someone attacks someone, he will always act as a defender and will never start a fight first. A man with gray hair is standing on the stage. It is explained that many organizations of the East Sea said that they were famous for their respect for opponents. The boss holds the steering wheel and asks if the guy understood. The protagonist turns around and asks what. Kyungu says with a serious expression that power is needed to win the trust of followers, and it captures hearts, and only in this way can he expand real power. The boss in glasses asks that he can't wait to take revenge on Sangtae through battle. Shiho silently looks down. Kyungu calmly states that it is better not to use him and Gunwoo for personal revenge because he will not forgive this. The car drives on. The protagonist says that he understands everything. In the frame is a sign of the Again establishment. The boss in glasses asks what. He sits near Gunwoo and Shiho and asks that Sangtae really came. He clenches his fists. The man in a shirt replies that he knows his nature well and he is not a criminal and will not beat up a loner, and yet his behavior was brave. The boss, crossing his arms, clarifies whether he understood what he wanted. Gunwoo states that he switched places with Huang, and this is not very like him. Gunwoo looks away and says that he wants to get an excuse for the opportunity, and will probably come back. The boss takes off his glasses and says that the matter in another city has been decided and the representative has agreed to cooperate, and next week he will meet with another company. The guy opens his eyes in shock. Shiho with a serious face says that this is a trap. Gunwoo turns around and clarifies that Ji-hyung set a trap. The protagonist sits nearby and says that he means Sangtae because there is something fishy here. They ask him if he is lying. Against the background of fighters with swords, it is said that usually such sudden conversations serve as bait. The excited man clarifies that Sangtae really needs to lure them into a trap. Shiho in a calm voice says that it is not them. The surprised interlocutors hear about those who want to cooperate with them. The protagonist looks at them and says that the fighter's visit will sow anxiety, and because of which they can rush with an alliance agreement. Gunwoo thinks. The main character looks and says this. In the frame there is a fierce warrior. It is explained that this is a calculation to get rid of everyone at once. Kyungu looks at the interlocutor and clarifies whether he really went so far. He answers that it makes sense, wondering what to do in this case. Shiho with a serious face says that when the director is removed, two will remain. Gunwoo thoughtfully talks about Gwanghyun and Kianma. The guy sits on the couch and says that most likely they already know about Sangtae and are aware of his activities. Gunwoo says that they must have already felt the threat. The man sits with his arms folded and asks if it is possible to contact Gwanghyun. He says that it is not worth it. The guy sits next to the accomplices and says that they plan to eliminate everyone who contacts their targets, and it is better not to interfere. Kyungu clarifies that if they start to press them themselves then they really will just sit and wait for death. The main character, against the background of a fighter, says that for Sangtae they are an empty space and if they sit out then he will sweep away Gwanghyun and Kianma earlier. In the frame there is a bloody hand against the background of corpses. It is explained that it is necessary to have a convincing justification for people, therefore it is necessary to reconsider the project. Gunwoo sits in the center of the table and says that now they are at the beginning. The main character calmly states that this means they can win somewhere 1 or 2 weeks, and during this time it is necessary to form as many alliances as possible in the suburbs and begin to control public opinion. Against the background of a smiling scoundrel it is said that Sangtae should think that they do not yet have enough strength to challenge him. Gunwoo with a serious look clarifies what is next. The guy holds a pipe standing in front of the villain and says that when he attacks Gwanghyun and Kianma, they will help them and then they will show strength. Gunwoo asks again in surprise about their strength. Kyungu looks at the guy in bewilderment. Shiho silently looks down. In the flashback, the boss in glasses talked about strength in order to win the trust of allies. The protagonist says with a smile that they must ignite the hearts of the allies and then they will trust them completely, because trust is the only way to true power. In the frame, a gray building. The sign says Gwanghyun. In the frame, the representative's door. A girl in a red dress walks past the men and says that this is true. They apologize. She throws everything off the table in rage. They close in shock. The evil representative of Hamin holds a sign in her hands. In the picture, a photo with children, it is said that the father said before his death that he is the only one who can be trusted. She points the sign at the man's face and asks what she needs to trust him with. He apologizes. She sits down in a chair and furiously says that rumors are circulating everywhere that Sangtae leaked information to Park, asking why he hasn't figured it out yet. She orders them to find the fighter's house and eliminate him. The bald man excitedly states that the difficulty is that he has 3 houses and the same car leaves from all of them at the same time, and besides, Sancte himself is very strong, and it's not that easy to get to him. An angry Haman asks that they wait until he surrenders to them himself. The men are nervously silent. She furiously asks why the Kyanma representative doesn't want to cooperate with them, because he is in the same position as them and they need to stop this before it's too late. The excited interlocutor sits opposite her and says that he said that he doesn't work with women. She throws the sign on the table and declares that this is just great. She grabs her head and says that sexism is rampant in this country. Another man with a serious look assures that there is no need to worry, and even if Sancte does gain strength, his people are a crowd of disorganized slobs, specifying that he can ask Pyeonwook for help. Haman closes her eyes and says that he does everything for money and perhaps it would be better to talk to others. The frightened interlocutor says that interfering in the affairs that are happening under the leadership of Pyeonwook is somehow ugly. She tears her hair and does not understand what to do, ordering them to hire someone. The frightened ward says that there is also Kyunggu. Sancte leaves the again bar. The question arises why he does not touch his business. The picture shows the main character with a partner. It is explained that Kyunggu has recruited a bunch of strong mercenaries and therefore Sancte does not touch him. Haman calls his name in rage. She shouts loudly that they need to contact him urgently. The shot shows the establishment. Gunwoo is standing next to the boss and orders 2 noodles. Kyunggu looks away and says that the guy is a devil, and so easily trumps him with words. Gunwoo looks at him and asks who. The boss takes a glass and says that he means Shiho. He drinks the drink and says that since we are talking about it, he is too careful about it. The boss, sitting at the counter, says that 3 days ago he said that Sancte will soon attack the remaining 2 districts and that they should get ahead of it and capture it, but now he changed his mind. Gunwoo smirks. He looks at Kyunggu and asks what's wrong. Kyunggu, glass in hand, declares that the protagonist uses them for his own purposes and thinks only of himself, clarifying why he listens to him. The worried boss hears the question of how he sees Sancte. Gunwoo is shown with a smirk in front of the fighter, saying that he thought about it when he came to again and that he is a difficult guy, so confident in himself that he came all alone. He says with a serious look that he just knows that he will not be touched. Gunwoo says with a smile that it takes courage, and even if he thought it all through. Kyunggu turns around and asks again. The happy chef pulls them 2 servings of noodles. The frame shows a plate of delicious food. Gunwoo sits at the table and says that Sancte really wanted to put pressure on him. He taps his chopsticks on the table and says that he wanted him to beg Gwanghyun and Kiyama for help. The boss looks away and clarifies if he really thinks so. The man looks at the chopsticks and says that he will later say who he chose, because he gave a chance to survive, and in the end he will kill him. Kyunggu eats the dish and says that Sancte likes this. He throws his chopsticks into his bowl and asks why he's acting like a jerk while trying to make them look bad. Gunwoo sits next to him and says that Shiho's plan is to form an alliance on the outskirts, and when Sancte attacks, they'll help. The boss turns around and asks how they'll know when that will happen. Gunwoo looks ahead and says that things might not go as planned by the protagonist. He looks at the wall and states that his predictions will start to crumble, and if they follow his plan, there will be losses. Kyunggu turns his head and asks if he understands all of this, then why. Gunwoo moves his chopsticks around his bowl and says that Shiho won't listen to him now. He grabs the noodles and states that as soon as the guy experiences the consequences of his mistake himself, he calmly looks ahead. Kyunggu glances to the side. Gunwoo smirks and says that in that case, Shiho will become his weapon. The boss hears this in shock. The action took place in the Again organization. The man was in the room. The agent looked serious. The girl was sitting on the couch, while bodyguards were next to her. Shiohi looked at the confused Changsu. Gunwoo opened the door, looking at the interlocutor. The deputy looked at the hero and said that the workers can rest, to which the leader thanked him. The bearded man turned around and asked again. The woman folded her arms and was silent. The man looked at the guest and asked who it was. She took off her glasses and asked if he knew his father, and then introduced herself as Gwanghyun. The interlocutor smiled and asked that she was the new president of the company, to which she replied that dad died 3 years ago, and then asked that he was still surprised by the new face. The protagonist stood behind Gunwoo, who apologized and asked what was the matter, to which she replied that enough of the lyrics and she would speak directly. The girl took the ear of the glasses with her teeth and said that she wanted to strike Sancte before he struck them, and then noted that the date was next Wednesday. The hero looked down and froze. Kyunggu was wary of him and asked why they were in such a hurry. Gwanghyun looked at the guy and asked him to hurry, noting that they were late, and asked if he had heard about the recent story, to which he clarified which one. The brunette closed her eyes, saying that Youngbu had to guard Seijo and he, deciding that this was a chance, was going to strike, but Sammun left him with the words that now was not the time, and if he had just swung his sword then everything would have been over, but they were all waiting for the moment, hesitating like the last cretins, wasting time, and in the end they were exposed and killed. The employee looked away, thinking that it was better not to mess with them. The girl put her hand on her head and said that she was too carried away by the Joseon dynasty. She took a step. Gwang-hyun stamped her foot. Her foot rested on something behind Gun-woo, and she suggested that they create their own story. The bearded man smiled and asked how they could help her. The brown-haired man grinned, asking that he had a mercenary, and then said that they would look at him. Shiohi stood behind while the man said that he did not have a special mercenary. The woman was angry and asked what was really happening and assumed that he did not want to cooperate. The old man looked at the woman and said that she should contact Gyeonma, to which she said that he did not like that she was a woman. She put her foot on the floor and said that they would deal with him, but now it was Sangtae's turn, and then noted that his refusal would greatly disappoint her. Gun-woo closed his eyes, apologizing and saying that they really couldn't help, because they could hardly compare to the scale of those, and then added that the criminal would not mess with Namgung and Chanjail. Gwang-hyun frowned, saying that the more people the better, asking that he still intended to refuse. She turned away while he said that it was not that he did not want to, but that they simply did not have the strength, noting that they themselves were trying to survive, to which she called him a coward. The woman left, showing an obscene gesture. The action took place in a large office. The phone was lying on the desk. The man opened a chat in which information about the meeting and the relationships of other gang leaders was written. Sangtae looked at the smartphone and smiled. He pressed a button on the landline phone. The man leaned over and asked that people be gathered for him by next Tuesday, to which he said that he understood. The criminal hung up. He was holding the device in his hands, standing next to the window. The bandit brought it to his ear and contacted the subscriber, saying that on the same issue, noting that he asked to find a swordsman. The dark-haired man looked out over the city as he was told that the man had arrived today with contraband and would be heading to Seoul soon, and then noted that they would be able to meet soon. The girl was holding a katana and he said that her name was Watanabe and that she used a weapon called a sachikito. Sangtae smiled, asking if he could see her in action, to which the other man asked about him becoming a big boy. The guy looked away and asked him to do as he asked, and then asked if he understood. The phone was pressed to his ear and the other man remained silent. The bandit looked ahead and the other man asked what he wanted. He looked ahead and asked to go to Namyangju. The action took place in the Again building. Shiohi was standing next to Gun-woo and, talking about next Wednesday, asked if he could take part in that fight with Sangtae. The bearded man closed his eyes and said that he said they wouldn't interfere. The hero lowered his head and wanted to object, to which he asked that he wanted to catch him, and then added that he understood everything, but you can't change your own plans every day. The man put his hand on the interlocutor's shoulder and offered to meet the clients better and asked to work. A smile appeared on his face, and he lowered his head. The protagonist looked ahead. The action took place in a shopping center. Watanabe held a sword in her hands. She was calm and said that she had no complaints about them, but she just needed to show her skills on someone. The man frowned and asked if anyone knew Japanese, and what she said. The bearded man turned to the side and offered to drive her away, saying that he didn't understand a word, but it was already disgusting. She took the katana out of its sheath. The weapon rose up, exposing the blade. The fencer held the murder weapon above herself. The man got up from the couch and did not understand what was happening. The dark-haired woman looked ahead from under her brows. A powerful blow occurred, which the bearded man watched. Everything around was stained with blood. The action took place in a building. Screams were heard from the room. There were decapitated corpses in the corridor. Watanabe was examining glasses and was dirty. She was wiping the accessory. The walls were smeared with liquid. There were corpses on the floor. The men's eyes were rolled up. A hand was on the cold floor. The doors were slightly open. A man stood next to his partner and asked that the director wanted to introduce him to Gun-woo, saying that he knew him. There was a blow to the lying head. The figure was standing in the room. The boss and the commander looked down. The corpse was lying on the floor and horror was frozen on his face. The man jumped and was scared, while his partner could not find the words. The action took place in the Again organization. Gun-woo held the phone to his ear. He looked at the guys and said that he and the director urgently needed to go somewhere. The people bumped hands in the doorway. Kyung-gu looked at the people leaving and asked where they were going, to which he received the answer that they would be back soon. The guy looked back. Shiohi looked away. The employee in glasses put the cleaning product on the table and remarked that it was surprising that there were still no customers, and then asked how one could make a living like that. Ryan looked at the director and asked if Erin had told him that she was going somewhere else, to which he asked again. The man put out his cigarette. The girl sat on a chair and waved her hand. The man stood in the doorway and asked where she was suddenly going, to which she replied that she needed money, and business was no longer going well here. Kyung-gu frowned, promising to try to do something, and then asked her to think about it, noting that they were a family. The dark-haired girl sat next to the stunned Xian and asked if he would give her 200 million. The brown-haired girl looked back. The guy looked worried and asked again about the amount. The woman sitting opposite him said that he wouldn't give it, to which he asked why she needed so much. Erin closed her eyes and said that she had just dropped in to say hello, noting that they weren't strangers after all. The man smiled and asked where she was going, expressing a desire to see this establishment and how it worked. The dark-haired guy looked back, saying that she didn't know either, noting that this club had a share in K Entertainment. The director froze, repeating the name of the organization. The girl looked away, saying that it was a VIP club and that it was mostly visited by investors from the entertainment industry, and then added that they earned 500 million a day there. The guy was serious and thought about Sancte managing such a secret club and openly cooperating with the organization. Aaron left, saying that in any case, thanks for everything, to which he said that they should at least arrange a corporate party, otherwise it would be very sad to just let him go here. She looked back, saying goodbye to the hero. The guy looked away and said goodbye, while the employee asked if she was really leaving. The dark-haired girl opened the door and said that she would treat him richly if he earned a lot, to which he replied that he definitely would. She smiled and said goodbye. The door was closed. She unfolded her hands and asked what she needed to do to earn 500 a day. The car was driving quickly through the forest. The rear lights were red. Chansu held his hand and apologized, saying that the speed was too high. Gunwoo looked at the road, asking if he knew that he had contacted Namyangju. The man looked in the rearview mirror and asked if any of their people knew about this matter. The manager was wary and asked again, to which he wanted to tell what he knew, but did not finish. The bearded man looked to the side and said that the director of that company was killed. Chansu was wary and fell into a stupor. The driver was serious and asked if he really wanted to betray him, and then ordered him to answer, to which he meaningfully remained silent. The mustachioed man sat in the passenger seat and looked ahead. The bent bat fell to the floor. Sancte was standing by the seat. Horror was frozen on the man's face. The criminal put his hands on the other man's shoulders and said that the interlocutor's task was to infiltrate him and pass on information about him from the inside. A smile appeared on the killer's face, and he asked him to pretend to be a traitor first. Chansu raised his head and asked again. He remembered how he shouted from the car, and the other man asked him to pretend that he had changed his mind and was really cooperating with him. The bandits ran after the car, while the criminal said that Sanghwa would create the right atmosphere. The fighter held the knife in his hands, while Sancte asked if there were any questions. The wounded man looked up, asking why it was necessary to use such a trick twice. The dark-haired man looked askance and said that even if no one fell for it the first time, then for sure the second time, but did not finish. The car moved through the forest. Gunwoo looked away angrily. Chansu closed his eyes, saying that he also did not like that he, like a bat, clings to everything as best he can, noting that he is simply fighting for survival. The bearded man looked ahead and asked up to what point he had conveyed everything and assumed that all plans had already been revealed. The mustachioed man froze and said nothing meaningfully. The gray-eyed man turned to him and became interested. His partner was very scared. In his hand lay a knife, which was taking a combat position. The blade was approaching the angry driver. The weapon pierced the man's palm. Gunwoo turned the steering wheel to the side. The car veered off the road, blinding the area with bright headlights. The manager frowned and apologized, saying that he also wanted to live. The car crashed into the guardrail. The vehicle flew off the road. It stopped at a cliff, making a U-turn. The body was dented and cracks were visible on the glass. The wheels were on the edge of a ledge. A steep and deep cliff was visible under the trunk of the car. The director opened the door, wanting to get out of the car. The wounded driver left the vehicle. He watched as Chansu held his leg and grinned. The ground under the wheels began to crack and was about to collapse. Gunwoo extended his hand to the killer and ordered him to grab hold. Confusion froze on his face. The rescuer frowned and said that he was not serious, because he was simply listening to Sancte because he wanted to live, and then ordered him to grab on, noting that otherwise he would die. The mustachioed man looked at the helping hand. He closed his eyes, asking for forgiveness and saying that he was very ashamed. The director was furious and asked to act faster, saying that everything was fine. The soil began to crumble down, giving in to the pressure of the machine. The passenger stayed put and said that this would be a punishment. Tears appeared on his face while he said that he wanted to live and was now paying for it. The boss frowned and asked for it, stopping his nonsense. Chansu opened his mouth wide and said next Tuesday. He frowned, saying that in fact Gwanghyun would make his move on Wednesday. The bearded man froze and asked again. The assailant frowned, saying that he should hit too. The car began to roll into the cliff. Gunwoo looked to the side and gasped. A hand touched the other's torso. The man fell out of the car and watched as the vehicle tilted into the cliff. It was sliding down. Tears appeared on the bastard's face, and he asked to take into account that it would be next Tuesday. The dark-haired man watched the car with his eyes. It fell onto the road from below, roof down. There was a powerful explosion that lit up the area around. The director's face was illuminated by the fire, and he fell into a stupor. The action was transferred to Sinsadong. A black car was entering the parking lot. He hid in the opening. The car entered the underground parking lot. Erin got out of the passenger seat. The figure was watching her. The woman put her hand on her hip and asked for a name. The newcomer smiled and confirmed. The interlocutor turned around and asked to follow her. They were standing in a parking space in front of a wall. The dark-haired woman watched her companion doing something on her phone. The wall moved apart, and the newcomer fell into a stupor. They entered a long hidden corridor. The partner looked around and asked to come here. The guest held her hand in front of her and agreed. The girl in glasses folded her hands and said that their clients were influential people and that her job was to serve them, and then asked if that was clear, adding that under any circumstances. Erin looked around and made it clear that she agreed. The statues were on stands and she said that they would sign a contract first, noting that it was impossible to just leave here, telling that she had recently brought one guy, but he was very rowdy and had to be thrown out, and after a while he died, and then asked what she thought, was it suicide? The newcomer was scared and asked again. The man was hanging in the room and the employee said that he was driven to suicide. The lips of the interlocutor were pressed together. The woman looked away and asked if there were any questions. The girl in the dress looked at the statues and asked if K Entertainment really ran this place. The employee adjusted her glasses, saying that only on the surface and when there was time, they would go on stage, to which she meaningfully remained silent. The woman introduced Sancte, saying that he was just a sign. She turned around, saying that they were much wider and stronger. The guest lowered her head and asked if such a salary was true. The companion looked back and said that if the client liked her, he could give her more, and then added that for them she should be defenseless and innocent, asking if this was clear, to which she said yes. The stone sculpture looked down while she was talking about not having to show off her pride here, noting that she was a servant, and that the surveillance cameras saw everything, so if there were problems, they would solve them. Erin was scared and said that it was good. The employee took her glasses and said that everything that happens here stays here and if she wanted to threaten the police, nothing would come of it, but did not finish. The statue was headless and armless while she was talking about how she would pay with her life. The dark-haired one lowered her head and was confused. They stopped at the door. The hand touched the letter. The light went out, and the guest was scared. A bright warm light appeared from the doors. She covered her face with her hand. The companion looked back and said that this was the waiting room, and then asked to come in. Fear appeared on Erin's face while she said that you are welcome. The chandeliers were decorated with crystal. The girls stood at the railing in masks. There were workers behind the dark-haired girl and she said that this was Club B. Catherine looked at the new employee. The action took place in the Again organization, while someone asked again. Gunwoo was sitting next to Shiohi, who was bandaging his wounds and asking the interlocutor about what needed to be repeated. Kyongu looked down, saying that he could not believe that the director did this. The bearded man looked at the interlocutor and said that he was a weak person and sang to use this, to which he said that apparently so. The wounded man recalled the previous episodes, talking about the imminent attack on Gwanghyeom, and they must take action. The protagonist froze, stupefied. The deputy looked down and said that they would not open on Tuesday and asked to tell the employees not to come to work on Tuesday, noting that they would hide. There was a knock at the door. The employee looked into the office and asked that they had come from Namyangju. Gunwoo looked through the doorway and asked the protagonist to stay at the checkout and Kyongu to go with him, to which they said that they understood. The protagonist stood behind the employees. He was serious and thought that they might be able to catch Sancte next Tuesday. People were standing by the car next to the establishment. The deputy went outside with his partner. Sang-hoon smiled, looking back. The people present bowed to each other. The boss closed his eyes, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. The bearded man smiled and asked how to address him, sir or representative. They shook hands and he said that they could address him in any convenient way, and then offered to continue the conversation in his car. Night enveloped the city. The car drove along the road. Gunwoo looked away and thanked them for telling him. The interlocutor closed his eyes and said that once the representative saved him. He was excited and said that the director was supposed to introduce them, and he went to the place to drink and talk, and then accidentally saw something he should not have. He remembered how the corpse's face was frozen in horror. The deputy looked away and asked if he could tell more about it. Sang-hoon sat next to him and said that in fact, nothing special happened. People were lying in the corridor, and he said that there were about 10 severed heads lying on the floor. The people defended themselves from the sword, while he said that it was mixed with arms and legs. The interlocutor lowered his head and said that the killer's blade was obviously very sharp. Gunwoo was wary and asked again about the blade. Kyongu looked around, asking again about the weapon, which the narrator confirmed, noting that it was long, saying that they practically turned people into sashimi with it. The man sat behind the driver and said that he sometimes uses blades, and then asked him to tell what else he noticed, to which he replied that there was something else. Amo sat next to the corpses, saying that he dug through them. The guy froze, saying that they really were turned into sashimi. Watanabe pointed her katana at the victim, while he said that there were almost no traces of punctures, only a little on the neck. The tip was stained with blood, while the victim opened her mouth wide and he said that he suspected that the killer only used slashing blows. The sword lay in her hand. Her fingers lay on the blade. A powerful cut occurred and the man lost a limb. Gunwoo grinned, asking if the killers owned a condo. The blonde man was excited and said that it was the work of one person. Kyung-gu looked at the driver and asked again, while the bearded man asked where Sang-tae got such a fighter. The employee looked at the back seat and suggested that he could have hired someone, asking how long there had been rumors about mercenaries. The deputy lowered his head and said that he did not like this. The man looked away. Sang-hoon squinted, looking away. The criminal was standing behind Gunwoo, who said that he had become more influential than expected. The action took place in the Again organization. People were standing at the entrance, next to Shiohei. Shion was worried and asked what he wanted to say, that next Tuesday was a day off again, to which he noted that she understood correctly. Hoon approached the girl and asked when they switched to the informal form of address, to which she replied that it was none of his business. Ryan put her hand on her hip and said that they had more frequent days off and asked if this was how they could make money. The protagonist looked away and asked to just finish the workday. The girl stood behind him with her back turned. The workers were standing in the locker room and were about to leave. The brunette looked at her phone worriedly. She opened the chat and wrote a message asking if she could go to her. The girl put her thumb to her lip. Everyone left while she remained at the locker. She sat down on a chair. The employee adjusted her hair, asking what was wrong, assuming that she was so busy that she did not even answer. Shiohei stood nearby and asked if she was coming. Shion smiled and asked him to ask her. The protagonist looked away and said goodbye. The interlocutor flew into a rage and asked to call her by name, to which he apologized, noting that he could not remember it. She looked out from behind the corner and asked why he did not call her by name. The girl pouted, becoming calmer. Horror was frozen on her face. A notification came to her phone that she could come. The brown-eyed girl looked at the floor. The doors were open. The body was hanging in the room. The man was reaching up. Catherine looked at her phone. She looked at the correspondence and answered for the dead Aaron. A message came to her smartphone and it was written that next Tuesday. The woman looked at the screen. She began to type a message in which she was going to send the address. The head of Club B pressed the user icon. Her finger pressed the screen. The photo was of Shion. A smile appeared on the employee's face and she said that everything was fine. The girl looked at the new employee who was being photographed by the man and asked how not even a day had passed and already a suicide attempt. The action took place in Bugak Skyway. People were standing on the tower, looking into the distance. Sang-hoon closed his eyes, asking if he was not a blade specialist. Gunwoo leaned on the fence and asked when that happened, noting that he hadn't held them in his hands for a long time and hadn't even looked in their direction. The interlocutor turned his head, saying that he had heard that he had a real katana. He remembered how there were weapons on the table in the office. The swords were in a rack and he said that he had them. His bandaged hand was lying on the fence, and he said that it was in the wine cellar, probably, and then noted that he hadn't picked it up for a long time. The partner approached him and asked him to ask an indiscreet question, to which he gave permission. Sang-hoon frowned, saying that Sang-tae was going to attack Gwang-hyun next Tuesday, and at that time K Entertainment would be empty. He frowned and said that it meant that it was worth taking advantage of this. Gunwoo looked at the interlocutor, asking about the fact that he wanted to strike at an empty lair. The comrade smiled, saying that he would help him and they would gather 70 people, and then asked if they should be enough. The deputy frowned, thinking that they couldn't wait forever, because inaction would not change anything. The action moved to a cafe. The woman sat in a chair and said that she had received a call from a man and information that Sang-tae was going to attack them a day earlier than planned. The bodyguard looked down, saying that he didn't know that they knew and suggested that they finish it quickly. Gwang-hyun closed her eyes and said that from today on she would pretend to be very busy and would also come to work on Tuesday, pretending to be alone. The sky was reflected in the windows, while she suggested attacking from the 5th floor, and reinforcements would come from the 3rd. The man smiled, saying that attacking from 2 floors at the same time was a great idea. The fighters looked ahead as the officer said that the perpetrator would probably be in the vanguard and they needed to place Gun-won on the 5th floor and Chanyeol outside, then asked to contact her when ready, noting that she would come later. The bodyguards looked at the girl warily. She smiled and said that she would finally get rid of the unwanted one. The sun was setting behind the horizon. Cars were moving along the road. The guy was sitting indoors at a laptop. The phone screen in his pocket lit up. The spy picked up the phone and said that there was no suspicious activity, noting that a group of people came in and out. He was hiding his face under a cap and the caller said that this was suspicious activity. The man adjusted his hat and apologized. Hisa was serious and asked how much they could interfere. The guy looked out the window and the interlocutor said that this was basically Pyeonwook's land and if they found out that they were spying on that one's territory, they would not like it at all. The spy brought the mug to his mouth while the subscriber was saying that that's why they only interfere when he doesn't pose a threat. The guy looked away and said that I understand, calling out to the interlocutor, who asked again. Clouds were gathering in the sky and the observer said that it had been sunny just recently, and then suddenly clouds. Drops of rain were falling from the sky. The scout left the place and asked what it was, not remembering that it had rained during lunch on Tuesday, saying that he had not even taken an umbrella. The rain was heavy. Sang-tae was sitting indoors and looking ahead. Looked at the photograph. Sheehan was standing indoors and examining the photograph. She was calm, holding the frame with the photograph in her hands. Shiohei was closing the building while a figure stood behind him. He looked back. Gun-woo and the other people looked at him, hiding under the umbrella. The hero was approaching the group. The car was driving into the underground parking lot. The girl was getting out of the car and thanking the driver. Catherine was standing next to the guest. She was removing her glasses from her face. The girl smiled and asked her name. There were statues in the corridor. The dark-haired one walked in front and said that first they had to sign the contract. Since she had entered here, she simply would not leave. She did not turn around and said that she had recently taken one and it had gotten so upset that she had to kick it out, and then it had died altogether, and asked that maybe it was suicide. The worker was scared and asked again. The sculptures decorated the room and she asked that she had been forced to commit suicide. Sheehan stopped. The woman turned around and asked why. The brown-haired woman was wary and said that she had not seen anything yet, and then asked if she could leave. The employee walked ahead and said what she had already said, that it was not so easy to leave here, to which she pointedly remained silent. Catherine walked to the entrance and said that it was necessary to fulfill obligations and that this was also a kind of freedom. The girl lowered her gaze and looked worried, pointedly remaining silent. The dark-haired girl looked back, asking if they would go. Sheehan stood behind, looking at the floor. She turned her head to the side. It was raining outside. Cars were driving up to the entrance of the building. A fighter was putting up a sign apologizing for the inconvenience. A group of people got out of their cars. There was an apology sign on the car. The guy was putting on his jacket and called out to the deputy, to which he asked again. He approached the interlocutor and said that he did not see Shiohei, although he was definitely there when they left, to which he repeated the name. The fighter looked back, assuming that he went to Sang-tae and was planning to cross to the other side. Gunwoo lowered his head. He turned around and said that they didn't need the hero here, and if the protagonist did give something to the criminal, it wouldn't be critical. Kyung-gu looked at his comrade, trying to say something about subordination, but he didn't finish because he said that they would discuss it later and asked to stay here. Sang-hoon looked back. The bearded man was dissatisfied and frowned. The boss raised his hand, giving a signal. The fighters rushed to attack. The glass shattered in different directions from the impact. The organization's employees looked at what was happening in horror. The crowd was approaching those. The gray-haired man held the phone and said that they had an alarm and needed to evacuate. The blow landed on the employee's head. The attackers moved on. They beat everyone in their path. Gunwoo looked back and asked his partner to control the lobby, to which he agreed. The woman stood behind Sang-tae. Aaron and Sheehan were scared. The brunette stood opposite the criminal and addressed him, to which he said that they were free. The girl looked at him and asked again. The bandit was furious and repeated what he had said earlier. They left the room and obeyed. The girls froze and became wary. The agents went up to the floor. The deputy walked behind and was calm. The employees closed the doors. The brunette turned around and asked what to do. The killer lowered his head and said that the width of the corridor was slightly more than 2 meters and more than 2 at a time would not enter here, so he asked both to crawl under the table and not stick their heads out until he said so. The man left the office. Gunwoo froze and became wary. He looked at Sang-tae and asked if he hadn't gone to attack Gwang-hyun. The dark-haired man lowered his head and asked what he liked empty houses, noting that his guys would deal with that one, asking why he should interfere. They looked at each other, and the bearded man said that this was a chance given by heaven, to which he asked again. Mo looked away. The fighters rushed to attack. The guy swung, getting ready to strike. The criminal met him with his fist, and the stick fell. The gray-haired man looked down. The enemy's hand grabbed him. He threw the attacker over himself. The body crashed into the others. The agent stood next to the beaten man. The killer took the stick. He rushed to attack and swung. There was a powerful blow and blood gushed from the eye. The man's head was bleeding. The man frowned, experiencing severe pain. The fighter raised his head up and red liquid gushed from his head. The bandit opened his eye wide and looked down. He stood among a pile of bodies. The main ones fell into a stupor, watching what was happening. Sang-tae shook his head. The rest stood in stances, getting ready to defend themselves. He took off his tie and promised to kill. A smile appeared on his face. Gunwoo looked ahead, thinking that he was not a human. The man looked ahead with a smile, saying that he would kill everyone. The action took place in a building. People were standing in front of an organization, in which lights were on in several windows. Manhwa smiled, studying the building. The man closed his eyes and lowered his head. Behind the crowd was a hotel. Lights were on in the windows. Gwang-hyun sat in a chair and watched the action through binoculars. The screen of her phone lit up. She picked up the phone and said hello. The caller was saying that the door had been left ajar on purpose, and they would lure him into the large hall on the 4th floor and then have a showdown. The woman was looking through binoculars and asking if the main target was visible, to which he replied that he was running late. The main one looked away and asked if it was him who had arrived. The car drove up to the people. Watanabe got out of the car. The observer was examining the person and assumed that she had arrived instead of the main target. The latecomer was holding a briefcase. The corridor was stained with blood. Liquid gushed out to the sides. The stick was dirty, and someone was making sounds of pain. Bodies were lying on the floor. The remaining fighters were retreating back, not taking their eyes off them. Mo was walking towards them and asking them to disperse. He took out a knife. The fair-haired man took a stance and said that there were enough senseless sacrifices, and then suggested going one-on-one. Sancte lowered his head and asked again. He threw down his weapon. There was a smile on his face, and he expressed surprise. The commander rushed to attack, swinging his weapon. There was a powerful cut, which the opponent dodged. The guy threw the weapon to his other hand. The fighter tried to strike again. He swung. There was a powerful cut, and he dodged the attack. The enemy somersaulted and landed on his feet. Mo smiled and asked what was going on, assuming that he lacked strength. The opponent smiled, saying that he could only talk. He threw his tie to the side. Sang-hoon leaned over and, saying that he was open, asked him to go forward. A smile appeared on the killer's face. Gunwoo froze, thinking that he would fight empty-handed. The fair-haired man rushed to attack, saying that this was the end for him. The blade was approaching its target. Sancte dodged the thrust. He grabbed his arm. The guy was caught and dropped his weapon. They fell to the floor, and he hit him with his elbow. The criminal switched to a painful arm lever. Horror froze in the eyes of the short-haired man. He felt a sharp pain and opened his mouth wide. Those present watched what was happening. The killer twisted the commander's neck. His expression froze and he fell. The corpse hit the floor with his head. The dark-haired man looked at the frightened fighters. A figure appeared in the corridor. The guys stood in a stance, preparing to defend themselves. Sang-hoon opened his mouth wide and said that he was alone, ordering them not to retreat. The bearded man raised his stick and said that this was not true. The jacket fell from his shoulders and he said that only now he realized something and he needed to make sure. Gunwoo stood in a stance. Determination was written on his face. Sancte smiled and assumed it was kendo, asking that he hadn't done it for over 10 years. The deputy smiled and said that he had left it when he first took this path and that he couldn't stain the sacred sword with dirty fights. His hands were holding the stick tightly and he wanted to say that now was the time, but he didn't finish. He frowned, saying that he was thirsty for his blood. The psycho smiled and laughed. The guy took a stance. The bearded man pointed his weapon at him and asked him if he thought he could handle him with his bare hands. The dark-haired man stood opposite him and mocked what he had said. Sancte looked at his opponent and said that he didn't know yet how strong the former national team member was. The action moved to a cafe. There was a downpour on a rainy street. A taxi was parked behind the cars. A man got out of it. Shiohi was looking out from under an umbrella. There were screams coming from the building. He was approaching the entrance. It was raining outside. A crowd of people could be seen in the windows. A group of fighters stood in the conference room. Watanabe looked ahead. She was killing, holding a sword in her hands, while the victim was clutching his throat. Manhwa watched what was happening and smiled. Curly looked ahead and asked what the hell was going on. He looked to the side and asked what the Japanese woman was helping them and said that they were lured here, and then suggested that this was the target's assembly hall. The group stood opposite each other, and the opponent's representative asked what they thought there were few of them. The black-haired one narrowed his eyes, saying that it was a trap. The bandit smiled and asked again. The comrades were holding the wounded, and he said that it looked like something had gone wrong, and then added that they would fight to the end, not to the death, but to the death. The man showed his palm and noted that he could go over to their side and fame and fortune would await him with them. Curly looked at his commander. The short-haired man crouched down and asked what he thought, that he was capable of betraying the boss. He smiled and noted that like Sancte. The interlocutor frowned and smiled. The dark-haired woman looked back and asked if the conversation was over. He waved his hand and asked again, and then said that yes. The woman took a step forward. Curly stepped forward and asked to wait. He put his hand on his chest and asked if anything had been said about him. The man went into a stupor and bared his teeth. Manhwa spread his hands and said that nothing had been said about that. He got angry and said that it couldn't be. The commander looked at Chan Jail and asked what he was doing. The guy pointed the blade at him and said that he could be killed for a long time and noted that life was more important, to which he wanted to say something. Watanabe smiled, lowering her head. She kicked the blade. The girl aimed the sword. Her hand touched the handle. The blade sank into the neck of the traitor of the opposing side. The commander grinned while he was covered in blood. She smiled, saying that she would start first. The gray-eyed man became furious, harboring a grudge against her. The walls were stained with liquid. Gunwoo struck while the opponent dodged. The dark-haired man smiled and asked what was still holding on. The man pointed the weapon towards him, while Sangtae thought that they say that a dan in kendo is 3 times more important than in other martial arts, and even if it is not a real sword, the bearded man wields it with very destructive force. The criminal dodged the attack, thinking that in kendo it is good to attack at a distance, and then reduce it. The opponent swung, while he thought that upper attacks visually increase the distance between the opponents, and if he gets closer, then it's all over. But he didn't finish. He approached, thinking that he raised his hands. The killer grabbed him by the body. He swung his body, getting ready to throw him to the side. The hand grabbed his clothes tightly. The dark-haired man lowered his head. The opponent hit the wall. The stick fell to the floor. The man lay nearby and groaned. Sangtae adjusted his shirt and asked him to pick up the weapon. Sang-hoon closed his eyes and called out to his partner. He froze, thinking that everything happened very quickly. The bearded man stood up, holding the weapon in his hands. Gunwoo examined his hand, thinking that he was very strong. The hand was wounded, and the moment when he received the wound flashed in his hand. He looked to the side and thought that the upper blow exposed the body, which meant he had to attack straight. The man froze and became wary. The opponent approached him. His hand was on the weapon. The enemy rushed to attack, holding the weapon. The hand was preparing to attack. He grabbed the director by the neck. The body crashed into the floor. Saliva sprayed from the old man's mouth and he began to grunt. The dark-haired man strangled him, saying that he had said that he was far from the level of the national team. The observer looked back and, asking what they were worth, ordered them to attack. He froze and became wary. The fighters stood still and their fighting spirit fell. The criminal looked to the side and promised to strangle him. The boss looked back and was alarmed. The old man looked at his comrade and asked him to run faster. Sang-hoon was excited and called out to the captain. Gunwoo held his hand and said that while he was busy with him, and while there was time, and he was still alive. The representative bared his teeth and lowered his head. The dark-haired man smiled, saying that he was right, because after the old man, he would do that, and then noted that he would not die and the best solution would be to run. The director was out of breath and asked for it to be faster. The man extended his hand and ordered them to retreat. People were calling the elevators. Sangtae looked away, hearing a strange sound. He lowered his head and said that he had already said that blackmail is a privilege of the strong, because they are worthy of dreaming. He smiled and said that he was a non-entity. The old man did not breathe and his gaze froze. People ran into the elevator. Kyung-gu looked back. The fighters were running away. He became wary. His face showed incomprehension, and he did not know what had happened. Sang-hoon was approaching the turnstiles and asked them to run faster. The guy turned around and asked about the director, to which he replied that they would talk about it later. The dark-haired man watched him run away. The comrade looked back and said nothing meaningfully. The girl was looking out of the office. Gunwoo looked up. He was lying on the floor and showed no signs of life, while Sangtae looked back. Sheehan was scared and froze. She ran towards the table and screamed. The girl crawled to her friend and looked back. The man looked at her through the glass doors. A bloody hand opened the door. He was approaching the shelter. The criminal looked down. The girl covered herself with her hand and asked not to kill, while the other screamed. The killer knelt down and asked who was going to kill, noting that he told them to hide, and then asked what they saw. The girls looked at each other with relief. The dark-haired man put his hand on his cheek and said that they had seen it and that nothing could be done. His hand reached for the girl who had called out to the guy. The bodies lay on the floor, lifeless. Sangtae wiped his hands and didn't understand how to settle this. The windows of the building were empty. There were traces of blood on the wall. The bodies lay on the floor. The opponents stood opposite each other, among the corpses. The gray-haired man looked ahead and thought about what the hell was killing everyone. There was a powerful cut, and drops of blood fell from the blade. Watanabe put the weapon on her hand. The tip was at his face. Sanghwa smiled and asked to leave him alive, saying that he would be bait for Haman. The Japanese woman looked away and became interested. The boss was saying what he was suggesting into the phone and the translator was repeating it in Japanese. The girl stood in front of him, lowering her sword. The villain smiled and asked to tell her that they had won and to come here. The fighter frowned and asked what he thought he would do, then added that he would be better off killing him right away. Screams were heard from the door. The man became wary and asked what it was. He looked around and there was an explosion. The body was lying on the floor and bleeding. The fighters ran inside. A figure appeared outside the room. Shiohi looked ahead. The bandit grinned and asked who else it was, noting that they had caught everyone. The gray-haired man lowered his head and did not know who it was. The hero looked away, asking where Sangtae was. Sanghwa raised an eyebrow and ordered her to kill the guy. She swung. Watanabe was about to strike. The blade was approaching him. He had a stick in his hands. The protagonist blocked the attack. The tip slid along the object. The blue-eyed man froze after seeing his opponent. He swung and lowered the blade to the floor. The fighter was stunned. The woman looked away, shocked. MC was calm and did not show any emotion. The villain grinned and thought. The dark-haired woman waved her hand to the leader. The fighters began to leave the room. She tilted the weapon to the side and it began to reflect the light. MC looked at the opponent and asked if they would take 3 steps back. The girl smiled and suggested taking 4 steps, and then asked what Japanese he knew. Shiohi was calm and said that a few kendo terms. Watanabe lowered her head and understood. They maintained eye contact and she asked if he understood that he would not leave, to which he did not answer. His hands held the stick tightly. The hero looked forward and said that he did not understand it. The opponent swung. The tip approached the warrior's eye. The walls were stained with blood. The sword slid along the owner's hand. The fighter parried the attacks, parrying them with ease. The dark-haired woman looked at the guy. She hit the blade with her hand. The attack was approaching the opponent's head. He put a stick under the blow. The enemy was calm, thinking what it was, noting that he did not recognize the weapon. Sangwa reached for the knife, which was hidden in the sheath. The Japanese woman stood on her toes. She blocked the passage with her sword. The woman looked back and asked to stop. The man held the blade and said that he wanted to help. She was stunned, saying that this was her fight and if he interfered, she would cut off his head. The fighter watched as he stood next to her and asked what she was carrying and why she was interfering. The survivor rushed to the window and the bandit noticed this. The body jumped out of the opening, breaking the glass. He landed on the asphalt. The guy was running away from the building. Sangwa ran to his subordinates and asked why they were standing there, ordering them to run after him. The employee looked into the room and asked how the guy was. The commander put his hand on his head and said that the Japanese woman would cope and asked not to interfere. The crowd rushed in pursuit of the escapee. The protagonist watched as Watanabe swung her katana. She smiled, saying that such a sword was hard to find even in Japan. MC was calm and held his stick at the ready. The woman relaxed, admiring his composure and asked if he was into martial arts. She opened her eyes wide and asked to let him teach him real combat. The blue-eyed man was calm and did not look away. The action moved to the same place a year ago. The guy was sitting in the training room. Shiohi was reading a book while the guy was watching him. The bearded man was serious and asked if he was coming, saying it was already 11 o'clock in the evening. The dark-haired man turned and said he was studying kendo. The trainer raised an eyebrow and asked again. The teenager lowered his head, asking that there were many styles. The teacher approached him and confirmed this, noting that although it depended on the tournament. The man was holding a cold weapon in his hands, while he was saying that someone even entered the arena with spears, asking if he could. The book was open and the mentor asked what it was. The protagonist put his hand on his jaw and said that he was reading about a style that used katanas, and then added that he doubted its practicality. The teacher held his hands in front of him and said that in a fight it was easy to change the direction of this sword with one blow to the blade and offered to try. MC stood in a stance, holding a stick in his hands. The bearded man took the object and looked back. He stood in front of the student and asked him to imagine that it was a standard-length katana and asked to begin. Shiohi approached him, intending to strike. The coach dodged, making an effort. He looked at his successor and asked what if he knocked him down, and then asked him to slow down. The hero was calm and agreed. The mentor pointed his finger at the weapon and said that if you handle such a weapon incorrectly, you can get hurt. The teenager examined the tool, saying that you need to practice. The blue-eyed man looked up and suggested trying again. Sparring partners stood opposite each other. They crossed swords. The bearded man lowered the guy's sword, saying that defense is a way to shift the opponent's center of gravity, and if he opens up for a moment, then he will have an advantage, but did not finish. He swung, saying that then you need to quickly hit the wrist to neutralize the opponent. The stick was approaching the guy's head, while the mentor said that then you need to strike. Shiohi put his sword under the blow. The bearded man raised an eyebrow and asked what he had blocked. The hero lowered his head and apologized, saying that it was automatic. The man closed his eyes and said that he had deliberately attacked slowly. The successor looked at the teacher with displeasure. The mentor looked away and asked why he was so serious, because he was joking. The teacher leaned over and asked him to smile, and then asked where he was looking. The blue-eyed man was calm and his gaze was directed into the distance. The action moved to the present. Watanabe frowned and screamed. The protagonist parried the attack. He shifted, hitting the enemy's sword on the floor. MC rushed to attack, keeping the enemy's weapon under control. He swung, preparing to strike. A powerful blow occurred and a fragment of the blade flew to the side. The Japanese woman froze, in a stupor. Shiohi held the weapon in his hands and thought that this was the teacher's method. He stood in a stance, thinking that in the confrontation between a pipe and a katana, he had destructive power on his side. The opponent began to retreat. She examined the place where her weapon was destroyed. The rival looked away and said that she remembered. The hero froze and became interested. They stood opposite each other, and she said that he was replacing Utah at the tournament. There was a sign hanging above the spectators and she said that one of the teams had an outstanding result, namely 7 victories in a row. The man was holding a sword in his hands and it was said that, however, The player quit kendo for personal reasons, and because of his absence they lost their chances of success. The man entered the arena while she was saying that a replacement was needed, and they called someone who matched in strength, and in the Korean arena it was the protagonist. The girl looked down carefully. A guy in gear appeared on the battlefield. A smile appeared on Watanabe's face, and she said that it was him. The man took off his mask and she said that he was a guy from Korea who demonstrated the highest level in the arena. The athlete took off his protective helmet. MC looked away while she called him the god of katana. He stood in front of her and was calm. In the frame, a hotel sign in the rain. The girl looks through binoculars. The man flies out of the third-floor window. She sees through the binoculars how he lands. The fighter runs along the sidewalk. The guy with the phone runs away. Hamin is shocked and asks what is happening. The guy turns into an alley. He stands behind the wall and tells the director on the phone that it is still raining outside and there is no need to go anywhere. Hamin is furious and asks what he means, ordering him to speak normally. He looks around and declares that the mission has failed and the plan with the third and fifth floors. Gritting his teeth, he says that they did not work. Hamin is shocked when she imagines the girl with the suitcase. She looks out the window and clarifies what happened to their people. The girl holds a red smartphone to her ear and hears that everyone is dead and that she needs to stay put. She clenches her teeth in rage, hearing that her protege will contact her soon. Several bandits in black suits run out into the street. Beck stops his comrades and asks them to wait. Namgung peeks out from around the corner. He turns around in shock and sees a guy nearby asking if he can go out. A mysterious stranger comes out of a dark alley. He points back with a smile and says that he is being followed and if he stays in the corner, he will not be noticed in the dark, but he urgently needs to go to the toilet. Namgung looks at him in shock. He looks at his smartphone. Beck and his gang are examining the alley. The villain asks with a grin who is there. The frame shows a window in which bloody footprints are visible. The protagonist with a steel pipe stands opposite a girl with a katana. Shiho calmly watches his opponent. The opponent touches the blade and realizes that although he was good at the competition, kendo is far from a real fight and if she drags out, she can lose. Watanabe frowns and realizes that he needs to catch the right moment and finish. The protagonist stands with a calm face. She begins to attack, screaming loudly. The girl strikes with a katana. The protagonist calmly parries it with his metal pipe. Watanabe strikes with a series of hard blows. Shiho blocks each of them. Suddenly, the katana breaks on the pipe. The frame shows buildings in the rain. Namgung stands in front of the stranger. He is shocked to see him stretching out his hand. The guy with a grin reaches for the phone and says that he will figure it out himself. Beck walks with armed assistance, stating that it was quick. He holds the smartphone in front of him and asks if it is really Namgung. The guy in the hood passes by. Beck, confused, asks what is going on. The guy with a grin turns around and asks that they are looking for the owner of the phone, specifying that he just threw it and ran in the other direction. The boss in a rage shouts at his wards to catch up with him. The bandits with pipes in their hands run away from there. The guy holds a smartphone and says that if he interferes, he will be in trouble and will just pretend that he did not see anything. Beck snatches the smartphone from his hands and says that he saw nothing and if he reports it to the police, he will be finished. He agrees. The stranger in the hood leaves. The protagonist fights Watanabe. Her glasses are on the floor. They deftly move opposite each other. In the frame, the broken tip of the katana. She is tired, holding the weapon and looking forward. The girl swings in rage, shouting that she needs to act now. The protagonist deftly dodges a strong blow. The guy blocks each lunge with a pipe. She is furiously squeezing a piece of glass. Blood is pouring from her hand. Watanabe deftly throws the glass towards Shiho. The protagonist knocks her down and swings a metal pipe. He calmly looks in her direction. She covers herself with her hand in shock and says that this can't be. Shiho strikes. He hits the girl on the shoulder. She screams in pain. In the frame, a sign for the again bar. Near it, there is a car and many people. It says that they closed the door and ran away. A man in a suit stands under an umbrella and tells another to look to the side because someone is coming. A man in a suit approaches them. The interlocutor says with a smile that he thought that they ran away. Younga looks at him and wonders if he really decided to send them in exchange for the right to resell again. The villain says with a grin that they should all just die. The boss stands near them, declaring that he is in a bad mood and he just needs to leave, because if he touches him now, trouble can happen. Huang smilingly calls him a loser, specifying why he is pretending to be tough. Younga frowns. There is a broken katana on the floor. The protagonist is clutching a steel pipe in his hands. He hangs over the lying Watanabe. She looks at Shiho in fear. He watches with a straight face. The frame shows a building with a sign. The protagonist leads the girl behind him. He approaches a white SUV. Hamin, driving, tells him to get in. The protagonist looks at her questioningly. He looks down and hears a question asking if he is really going to drag her along with him. Hamin shouts that they will talk later. The protagonist nods with a straight face. The car shines its headlights on the building. Gyunga breaks the car window with his opponent's head. Blood flows from his forehead. The boss finishes him off with his foot. He delivers a powerful blow to the opponent's head. The beaten scoundrel loses consciousness. Gyunga grabs him by the tie. The boss hits him with his fists. The surprised hooligans stand nearby and do nothing. Gyunga brutally beats the opponent, shouting that he asked him to leave him alone in a nice way. With a bloody face, he furiously asks what the hell. The boss furiously swings his fist. He delivers a powerful blow to the enemy's nose. His hand is covered in blood. A beaten man lies on the ground. Gyunga turns around with a mad look and orders everyone to leave before he kills everyone. The bandits look at him in fear. It is raining. A white SUV is driving down the road. In the frame is a country house. Watanabe is lying on the floor. Sweat is dripping from her forehead. She is trying to come to her senses. The protagonist is standing next to Hamin, who says on the phone that they have a wounded woman and she needs help. She frowns and tells Shiho that the doctor will arrive soon, and if there are any questions, he replies that she is Japanese and needs a translator. Watanabe says with a grin that she watches anime and one day realized that she understands Japanese. Watanabe opened her eyes and begs her to kill her as soon as possible. Hamin looks at her with a grin and says that she will not die until she says something useful, and if she wants to do it without suffering, she must tell. Watanabe scoffs at her words with his eyes closed. Hamin turns around and furiously asks if she really thinks she's joking. The girl opens the drawer with the hammer in it. She grabs Watanabe by the face and says that she's going to make her suffer. Shiho watches what's happening silently. He looks down and hears a ringing sound. There's a message on his smartphone saying that his sister can no longer work at the store and has left. He puts his phone away and another message comes in. He looks at the screen and sees a message saying that they probably won't meet again soon. The protagonist types a message saying that if something happens, he should send an infinity sign or the number 8. The protagonist looks at the screen and she thanks him. Shiho looks away. In the frame, a man is walking with a girl along the red carpet. The girl in the mask hears that this is the first client, and if he wants her, the situation will change. She hands over the mask. She needs to give it to the butler. The girl excitedly closes her eyes. She points her finger at the door. The door starts to open. She goes inside. Shion is shocked to hear the question of whether she is new. The frame shows a country house. It is raining. There are IVs hanging on a hanger. Watanabe is sitting on a chair, and 4 is connected to her. Hamin with a hammer watches the doctor do something. The protagonist stands next to his partner with a serious face. Hamin pokes the hammer with a grin, declaring that she will not die, specifying who sent her to Korea. The girl with a bloody face looks at her with hatred. Hamin is furious and asks if he should gouge out her eye or chop off her arm. The puzzled doctor adjusts his glasses. Watanabe frowns and looks ahead. Hamin smiles and says that she misspoke, specifying that if she chops off her arm or gouges out her eyes, she will definitely not die. The doctor tells the girl who is leaving that he will make sure that she does not die. She takes a kitchen knife. With an ominous smile, Hamin declares that this will be enough. Watanabe loudly asks if she can treat people differently, begging him to kill her. Hamin holds a knife with a grin and claims that when she was 8 years old, she saw her father pour cement over a living person's head. The frame shows the guy's back. It says that damn Youngwoo banned killings. Hamin stands in front of Shiho and says that she doesn't consider people to be people at all, and if she wants to die like a human, then let her say so. She turns around questioningly and sees a hand. Shiho stands next to her and says that he will talk to her. She clarifies that he does not know Japanese. The main character seriously says that he knows it a little. The frame shows a chic interior of a house. A man in a robe is sitting next to a girl. He touches her hips. She glances to the side. The girl remembers footage from TV. It says that this is Jonghan and he is a presidential candidate. He looks at her with a grin and asks what is wrong. She replies that she just did not expect to see him. He puts a glass on the table and says that a real man should drink and have fun with women. He says with a smile that there is no need to worry, because he is already old and is not very good at it. Shion asks excitedly what he means. He says with a smile that now he has been pushed aside even within the party, and without such small joys he would have fallen into depression. The girl looks at him and says that he played a big role in the arrest of a bandit several years ago. He says with a grin that this is approximately the positive image he has maintained in the eyes of the people, and if he had pulled off something big while this image is alive, he would have been able to strengthen his position, but it was not enough. Shion sighs with a sad face. Jonghan turns around and looks at her. He removes his hand and says that she speaks somehow too purely and innocently. They sit on the couch. The man says that her questions are rather naive. She asks if it is true. He stands up and says with a smile that he needs an interlocutor, and not those who say one thing and think another, but someone like her. He goes to the bar counter, asking if she has any more questions. The girl turns around and asks about her blood type and BTI. Surprised, Jonghan turns around. He starts laughing loudly. He happily holds a glass of whiskey. In the frame, there is a sign on the door stating that entry is for staff only. Inside, specialists in black suits are sitting at computers. On the screen, a smiling Jonghan is holding a glass of whiskey. Catherine is talking on the phone about how, apparently, they will be able to attract him to their side, and if she were sent to a mad dog, who knows what would happen. She hears on the phone that in the end, men always fall in love with women and that he will soon return to Korea, so she needs to work hard with him. Catherine starts saying something. In the frame, there is a powerful back of a fighter. A question is heard whether it is true that he will return with Gao Lingji. She hears with a serious face that he is now alone and everything in order. The girl tells Xiaomin with a smile that she understands. The guy takes a chair. He sits on it and asks if she considers herself a samurai, someone who is ready to give his life for the master, or if she is a simple mercenary. Watanabe sits silently in front of him. She smirks and declares that she is fighting for her loyalty, and it is better to just kill her. Shiho looks at her and asks what loyalty she keeps. Watanabe is depicted against the background of a yellow truck. She sits next to the driver. It is explained that at first they say that he does not believe and wants proof. The girl with a serious look says that she understands. Bloody Watanabe asks what loyalty the main character can offer her. He with a serious face declares that she will not survive, because she has endured too much torture, and he also learned to wield a sword and as a warrior can give her a quick and painless death. She smiles and is surprised by such loyalty. The girl silently lowers her head. Watanabe raises his gaze. Silhouettes of people of higher rank are shown against the background of Sancte. It is said that there is something huge behind him that the protagonist cannot even imagine, and they do not meet with him personally, but use intermediaries, and if he has problems, they will get rid of him. The protagonist listens to her silently. The ladder breaks. It is said that if he himself forcibly cuts off this tail, then Sancte will be left alone. Watanabe looks at the serious guy, declaring that then this huge force can come to kill him, because if he kills the intermediary, and not Sancte, then this will mean that he got too close to them. Shiho calmly declares that he does not care. The guy calmly says that if there is a shortcut, he will take it. Watanabe sits on a chair and says that she thought so and maybe she will tell. The bloody girl smirks, referring to his path to death. In the frame, a skyscraper in the daytime. Sancte looks out the window. Behind him is Insong. He tells the boss that the bodies have been removed and the deaths of the two secretaries have been ruled an accident, and the families are not asking for an autopsy. He nervously says that only one prosecutor is a bit of a nuisance. Sancte, with his back to him, asks which one. The shot shows a girl named Suyun. He explains that she is stubborn. Sancte, smoking a cigar, says that he seems to have heard that name and that bribes won't work with her, but that he can put pressure on the management to change the prosecutor. The shot shows a beaten Huang. It is explained that he was seriously injured by Gyeongdu from again, and that he has now thrown open the doors and is preparing for something. He takes a drag on his cigar, saying that he was no use because they pulled him out, but he still gets hit in the face, ordering them to kill him. Insong, shocked, asks why. He looks down and says nothing. Sancte does not turn to face his charge and asks what happened to Hamin. He says that her whereabouts are unknown and Ri has also disappeared. Sancte turns around. The worried assistant says that Inspector Hansu also said that this case is too complicated and he will not help anymore. He puts out his cigar and asks what is going on with the guys from another city. He replies that they have gone into hiding and it is impossible to determine their location. Sancte lies down on the table, stating that the only one they can track is Gyeongdu. The assistant looks at the boss and says yes, and he demands the return of Gunwoo's body. The boss, with his eyes closed, says to return it. Surprised, Insong thinks why so simple. Sancte looks at him with a serious expression. The shocked assistant thinks really. The frame shows a country house at dawn. The sun is gradually rising. Hamin, arms crossed, looks at the hostage. The protagonist washes himself while she wonders who this intermediary is connecting Sancte with that huge force. Shiho washes himself and says that since they know, they need to check. She wonders what if Watanabe was lying. Shiho turns around. He wipes his face with a towel and says that she expected to be killed and did not lie. His partner asks if he can handle it alone. The protagonist covers his face and says that they need to try. Hamin frowns and says that this is her suggestion, and in the end the common goal is Sancte, and in order to catch him, we need strength, so we need to unite. The surprised guy hears the offer to unite with again at the same time. The protagonist takes his jacket and says that he will go first. He puts it on and goes outside. Hamin jumps out and asks what he is going to again, offering to go together because it is easy to get lost. The protagonist turns around. The frame shows an evening city. The sign of the again establishment is brightly lit. Opposite Gyeongdu there is a car and people are unloading a box. Insong says with a smile that it is humane, because they allowed to hold a funeral. The boss frowns and asks what he wants. Against the background of the bar sign it is said about again, because Gunwoo's body is not a bad price for it. Gyeongdu looks at them and declares that all the staff is transferred to them. In-sung, closing his eyes, declares that he says business, specifying whether they will do it right now. The boss stands in front of him and asks about signing right now. He asks if it is possible. Surprised, In-sung hears that the interlocutor will speak with Sangtae personally, because the deals are concluded with the owner, and not with small fry. In-sung swings and in rage asks about the fool who walks under him. Kyung-gu frowns and watches him. In the memories, the guy swung the weapon at Sangtae, realizing that there is only one chance. Kyung-gu with a serious face realizes that he needs to kill him when he meets him. The assistant straightens his tie and says that he will be patient. They are standing next to a car and a box lying on the ground. Kyung-gu is standing next to the bandits, who are lifting a coffin. The frame shows a building with illuminated windows. There are wreaths inside. In the photo, Gun-woo is smiling. Kyung-gu looks at this with a sad look. He is standing in the funeral hall. In front of him is a photo with a friend. He tells the ward that there is a sword in the again storage room and he needs to bring it. Kyung-gu looks ahead and realizes that this sword has been lying around and used for over 10 years and his friend needs to take it, and he will definitely sort everything out later. The man is crying in front of a photo of Gun-woo. In the picture is a sign for the flash bar. There are many cars and people near it. In-sung calls on the phone and says that everything is ready, but the funeral home has a lot of security cameras. He nervously hears that Sangtae asks to turn them off, so there is no need to worry and just kill everyone, asking if he can bring Kyung-gu's head. The assistant looks at the car and says that he can. In-sung gets into the car. He says with a serious expression that they are heading out. Several cars drive out. A white SUV pulls up to the again bar. Ha-min and the protagonist look out the window and don't understand why the door is closed. She points her finger at the smartphone and says that a message has arrived. The screen shows information about the funeral and farewell to Gun-woo. Shiho opens her eyes in shock. The frame shows a funeral home. A sports car is parked in the parking lot. The sports car is parked in the middle of the night. A man is sitting inside with a laptop and typing something. The girl looks at the screen. A blonde with green eyes is doing something on the laptop. Green numbers and letters are visible on the screen. Video footage from security cameras is visible on the laptop screen. The girl looks at it. Sangtae sits by the phone with his arms crossed. He picks up the phone and says hello. Against the backdrop of the night city, it says that the security cameras at the site have been turned off, clarifying whether they will make it before dawn. The boss sits looking out the window and states that they have to make it, and apparently that girl is finished, saying that they need to send another mercenary. A phone is visible in the frame, saying that he is insatiable, and since they decided to support them, then let them do it properly. Sangtae holds the phone, hearing that they always clean up after them after the murders and it is quite difficult to organize. Gun-woo is dead, the gang is defeated and therefore there is no more immediate threat. Sangtae listens to this with a smirk. He says into the phone that so be it. He hangs up. The boss presses the red button. He stands near the table and listens to the recording of the conversation. He silently looks out the window and listens to everything that was said earlier. The boss in a black shirt and vest stands near the phone. He realizes with a smirk that Gwang-hing will soon recover and then he will be able to reproach them for their misjudgment and get something worthwhile from them. A white SUV drives along a night road. Shiho sits next to a girl. He notices something. He sees a man walking nearby. The protagonist unfastens his seatbelt and asks to wait. The protagonist runs out of the car. He looks at the entrance to the again bar. He sees a surprised fighter with a sword. The guy looks at the weapon and says that this is the sword that the Gun-woo boss used before, and he asks to bring it from the storage. The protagonist seriously states that he saw a message about the death. The worried interlocutor turns around and asks if he is going to go, clarifying that it is better not to. The guy looks ahead in surprise. The girl behind the wheel importantly declares that carrying such a thing is a violation of the law on bladed weapons. In the frame, a funeral home. Men are standing in front of Kyung-gu. One of them pats him on the shoulder. The assistant is walking with a katana in his hands. The boss takes it in his hands. He puts it on the table. Opposite the photo of the deceased lies a sword. Kyung-gu looks at it sadly. The worried assistant says something. The boss looks at him and clarifies what he means. The protagonist enters with Ha-min. The boss looks at him in rage and insults him. Shiho lowers his head and apologizes, and he orders him to leave. The protagonist sadly asks to let him apologize. Kyung-gu clenches his fists and says that if they weren't at the funeral, he would have hit him, demanding that he leave, because it's sickening to look at him. The protagonist listens to him silently. Kyung-gu seriously states that he shouldn't get involved with them, otherwise he'll get into trouble. The protagonist lowers his head, hearing the question of whether he was treated badly, because they paid for him everywhere, and he dumped him. All the guests turn around, hearing the scream if it weren't for Shiho. Kyung-gu sadly says that in that case, Gun-woo wouldn't have died. Ha-min stands next to the protagonist and says that this is not a betrayal, but a calculation, because in the end everything should have been fine, but it was just bad luck. Kyung-gu frowns and says that he is barely holding back at the funeral, so she should not interfere. The girl looks at him worriedly. He turns around and tells Shiho to get lost, saying that he does not need any help from him. The frame shows a building at night. A string of cars pulls into the parking lot. Bandits with bats and crowbars jump out of the cars. Dozens of fighters stand in front of a black car. The door opens and In-sung comes out. He has a cigarette in his hand. He throws it on the ground and says that they need to move out. The assistant goes with many armed fighters. Shiohi was sitting on the couch in the room. A can of coffee fell into the receiving compartment of the machine. The girl handed the drink to the hero and asked if he would leave. The dark-haired man lowered his head, saying that he should be forgiven, to which she replied that now is not the time, and then asked to come later when it cools down. The protagonist examined the product that the interlocutor gave. Hamin put her hand on her side, asking him to do as she said, and then asked if he understood that they would eat the Kiyama, get power, and then Kyangu would reckon with them, noting that no matter what, but she would have to, and then asked if he thought that the guy would take revenge on his own. The fighter looked down and said that he couldn't be treated like that. The brunette put her hand on her hair and said that he was slow-witted. She looked towards the window and someone was saying that the interlocutor came to the funeral, and there was indifference on his face, to which another asked that he was kicking him out. The woman approached the window, asking what it was, noticing some noise from above. Figures were visible in the window, and she asked if it was VIP. The action took place in a room for people with special status. Groups of people stood opposite. The guy frowned, asking what was the matter and said that he should have talked to Sangtae in person. In-sung smiled, saying that he just came to express his condolences. Aggression was visible on the interlocutor's face. He turned around and ordered the group to throw out all the relatives and guests. The director looked at the guy and asked him what he thought he could do to leave, to which he suggested that he wanted to kill innocent people too. The man put his hand on his face and began to make excuses. He looked ahead from under his brows and said, he will kill everyone. Shiohi was walking with the girl to the elevator. He took a step. The fighter extended his hand forward and asked them to go away. The hero was approaching the stairs. He looked away. There were armed men sitting on the landing. The protagonist looked back and asked what floor it was, to which she replied that it was the second, and he said that the VIP room was on the fifth, and it would take a little longer to get there if they attacked on the way up. He walked forward and asked her to stay close to him. Hamin was tense and asked what they were going up. MC looked ahead from under his brows and answered her question positively. He rushed to attack the group of people. The fighter struck his opponent in the face. The people with the bats frowned, not taking their eyes off the target. He dodged the crushing blow, and then struck a side attack. The blue-eyed man looked back and the enemy was scared. The guy turned around and was about to hit him in the body with his fist, while the other one came up from behind. The bandit struck his back and the striker felt the pain. The short-haired man swung, intending to finish off the enemy. The man appeared nearby, protecting his teammate from the threat. The employee looked back at his comrade, and then said that they would get out of here through the fire exit, to which he replied that they needed to protect the family. In-sung stood in the crowd of his charges and asked what he was doing and what he would do here. The gray-haired man's hand hit the table on which the weapon was lying. He looked back and became wary. The guy took hold of the sword. He stood in a stance, saying that it was a real sword and wanted to start threatening, but he was interrupted and asked again, asking the question, "So what?" The director smiled, looking away. The short-haired man swung the stick and screamed. The defender took hold of the sheath and the handle. The guy tried unsuccessfully to pull out the weapon and became wary. The fighter fell into a stupor, while the opponent approached him with the intention of hitting. The gray-haired man dodged the blow, and he was surprised. There was a powerful blow to the back of the head, and blood spurted out in all directions. The body fell dead to the floor while the fighters watched. The man bared his teeth and turned away. In-sung was holding a lighter to a cigarette and offering to solve everything amicably. He looked back, hearing strange sounds behind him. The blow landed on the man's shoulder. The powerful attack crashed into the opponent's neck. Saliva flew out of the man's mouth, and the object crashed into his torso. The head suffered the damage that was inflicted on it by a crushing blow, and the eyes rolled back. The criminal bared his teeth as the blow reached his chest. People looked back at the man who was standing in front of the interlocutor, and In-sung asked what was going on. A figure appeared in front of the man. The bandit fell to the floor in front of the armed fighter. The director looked back and frowned, noticing the guest who had appeared. The gray-haired man fell into a stupor, looking away. Shiohi was calm and his gaze was directed forward. The hero held a weapon in his hands and tightly clenched his fist. The enemy frowned, recognizing the man who had come to them. The dark-haired man was angry and asked if it was he who had sent those people that day. The bandits were standing in front of the man. In-sung frowned and asked again. The protagonist looked down, and then asked if his brother had also been killed by them. The bandit smiled, lowering his head and said yes, noting that he was interested. He waved his hand in front of his protege, and asked him to step aside for a second. The director stepped forward of his group, putting his hands in his pockets. The opponents stood opposite each other. The man smiled, saying that his brother worked in a bar, then he was recruited and committed suicide. Shiohi lowered his head and meaningfully remained silent. A grin appeared on the bandit's face, and he asked that he thought that he would tell him everything in detail. The criminal doubled over in anger and ordered to find out for himself. The hero was upset and kept silent. Insong closed his eyes and showed that he remembered something. He smiled, saying that he could tell about the other guy's mother. The protagonist was calm and wary. MC looked upset while he was saying that his daughter wanted microphones, signed a contract, and the mother had to work off the debt, so she was shaking all over, and then died and said that the relatives were without fire, asking why they died so easily. The director leaned over, asking what he was doing, assuming that he was scared, and then noted that his face did not tremble. MC silently looked forward. Insong raised his hand and said that he would also have to die. Shiohi stood opposite the fighters. The guy stood in the room and said that they probably also have parents. The criminals raised their eyebrows and one of them asked again, to which the other said that this was the last warning. The hero held the stick tightly and said that if they wanted to live, it was better to leave here. The fighters smiled, skeptical of the warning. The protagonist stood with his back to the blonde man, who asked what he was talking about. He looked back and his face showed aggression. He bent down, preparing to strike. The sticks fell to the floor. The criminals looked around and were confused. MC struck and blood from the opponent's heads gushed in different directions. Insong turned to the side and ordered to hit. The ward swung, preparing to deliver a crushing attack. Shiohi lowered his head. He aimed the weapon forward and it pierced the threat's head through and through. The Boers looked at the huge bloody trail. The director lowered his head and looked away. The brunette fell into a stupor. The short-haired man was dying and making a strange sound. The stick was dirty and there was a hole in his neck. The weapon flew out of his hands and red liquid gushed upward. The body fell dead on the floor, while the hero watched. The blue-eyed man turned to the side. The director frowned and thought that this was not a sword, but a blunt iron pipe and did not understand how this happened. The man frowned and ordered to hold on. The protagonist looked away. Liquid was dripping down the weapons and the fighters were scared. A crushing blow passed across the dark-haired man's face. The director looked back and became wary. The guy ran in front of the opponents and said that there was a gap, and then ordered to help the guy. A mass brawl began. People ran to the side. The group was going to confront the bastards. Discontent was visible on Insong's face. Shiohi was calm and looked ahead. The action took place in a hospital. A sports car was parked in the car park. The Englishwoman was sitting in the car and asking if this was really necessary, to which the caller said that no matter what, they needed to save their own. The blonde looked at the exit, saying that she would wait another 20 minutes and that would be enough, to which he asked if everything would be okay, and then said that he knew what Natasha was capable of and asked if there would be problems later. The girl was calm and said that it was just a fire in the building and nothing special, to which he resigned himself. The lights were on in the windows. There was a table in the building with everything smashed. Gunwoo's portrait was lying on the floor next to the flowers. People were lying next to each other, not showing any signs of life. The brunette was looking ahead from under his brows and was covered in blood. Opponents were standing in front of him. He swung his sword and took a step back. The guy crashed into the man who was standing behind him. The opponents were standing behind him. The fighters surrounded the defender. Blood was flowing from the Boer's forehead and the enemies were watching. Insong frowned and asked why he stood up, ordering him to hold. Shiohi looked away at the fearful opponents. The man turned his head when he was told that they had caught Gyeonggu. The hero looked back. The director frowned and suggested trying to twitch, noting that they would see what would happen. The guy was calm and unperturbed. He was tightly clutching the bat in his hands. The Boer frowned and ordered him to be dragged here. The wards carried the tortured fighter in their arms. Blood was running down his face. The employees lowered him to his knees, holding him by his hair and collar. The brown-haired man took the katana and asked if it was a real Gunwoo weapon. He tried to get it out, but to no avail. The man frowned and asked why it wouldn't come out. They stood opposite each other, and he ordered to throw the pipe. Shiohi threw the weapon away and it hit the floor. A smile appeared on Insong's face and he ordered to kneel. The hero obeyed and knelt down. The mustachioed man dealt a vile blow to the back. His foot crashed into the guy's head. The protagonist began to cover himself from the numerous blows. The director leaned on the katana and asked why he didn't lower his hands. The fighters beat up the remaining opponent. MC stood in a stance and grunted while the stick was approaching him. A powerful blow was delivered to the face, and the guy threw his head back. He looked down, and blood was flowing from his mouth. The dark-haired man held his hand on his jaw. The opponent struck his body, not wanting to spare him. From an attack from behind, Shiohi fell to the floor and leaned on his hands. Gyeonggu watched the merciless massacre, unable to intervene. Insong smiled, expressing joy that they finally caught him, and then ordered to sit him down. The hero was kneeling and there were people next to him. The brown-haired man looked down and asked that the mother and son would die at his hands, assuming that this was fate. The protagonist looked at him from under his brows, while he asked what he would do if he saw. The guy rushed to attack the bastard. The rest of the group rushed to intercept. They grabbed the wounded guy, who was holding on to the katana. The man bared his teeth, lowering his head. His hand reached for the collar of the guy. He fought off the mustachioed man and he flew to the side. The guy fell on the floor in front of the criminals. MC looked at the weapon that was lying nearby. A hand touched the sword and pushed it. The brunette turned his head and tried to apologize for everything, but did not finish. The fighters looked down and were unhappy. The mustachioed and the fair-haired man began to kick the enemy. The wounded man covered his head and asked to kill. He opened his mouth wide, lying on the floor, and asked to kill everyone. The men looked back. In-sung fell into a stupor, noticing something strange. The hand was holding the sword. Shiohi was getting up, leaning on the weapon. He looked forward through his bangs and promised to do it. The hero tried to pull the blade out of the case. He examined the scabbard and noticed something strange. The director frowned, raised an eyebrow, and said that it was not pulled out, calling him feeble-minded. The protagonist looked away towards his opponent. He turned the weapon sideways and noticed the insert. His finger touched it, and the plug flew out of the hole. The man looked at the small object in surprise. MC was pulling the blade out of its sheath, standing opposite the killer of his family. The blade appeared outside. The opponent frowned and did not understand what was happening. The sheath fell to the floor. Shiohi took a stance, getting ready to attack. The opponent frowned and asked what he was waiting for, ordering him to hurry up. The bearded man smiled, calling him a small asshole. A red line appeared on the boar's neck. The hero swung, getting ready to deliver a strong blow. In an instant, the opponent's head was on the floor, and blood was flowing from his neck. The director lowered his head and was very surprised. The enemies watched what was happening, in a stupor. The protagonist held the weapon, thinking that with the sword in his hands, he was not afraid of anything. He lowered his head, raising his katana behind it, thinking that he did not care even if 1,000 came. Shiohi waved the tool at the crowd of enemies, thinking that it would be worth taking out just a few. The hero looked forward and his katana reflected the light. The men covered their hands from the bright light. The opponents were behind the protagonist. A cut occurred, which split the fighter in half. The body flew over his head while he looked away. The curly one bared his teeth, and horror froze in his eyes. The guy lowered his hands, standing next to him. He made an attack, cutting off the villain's arms. The protagonist attacked his opponent, splitting him in half without much effort. He opened his mouth wide and shouted yes. His eyes turned red while he thought about everyone running away. The villain's wards ran for their lives. The fighter's shirt was stained with blood. The man threw his head back, losing his legs. The blade pierced the dark-haired man's chest, releasing blood from within. The blade pierced the killer's neck. MC looked away, his head down, and his eyes were cold-blooded. A white flower lay on the floor next to a pool of blood, while people were making dying sounds. A severed limb lay on the cold tiles. The lifeless body did not move, a post-mortem expression on its face. The short-haired man lay next to the reeds on the floor. The pool of blood reached the white flower, staining it. The walls of the hall were stained with red liquid. A figure appeared from around the corner. The tip of the sword was dirty, and the result of murders was dripping down it. Shiohi looked to the side. In-sung frowned, expressing anger. Gyeonggu was scared and blood was dripping down his cheeks. The mustachioed man rushed forward, clutching a pipe in his hand. A drop of blood was dripping down the hero's face. The liquid fell to the floor. It changed the direction of its fall. There was a powerful blow, separating the head from the body. The gray-haired man froze as blood spurted over him and thought that if this guy picked up a real sword, then everyone would be in trouble, but he stopped. He looked back and horror was frozen on his face. The remaining survivor ran to the side, trying to save his life. MC struck hard once, and the coward lost both shins. The blade sank into the man's skull. Gyeonggu watched what was happening, thinking that only one person did this. The red-eyed man looked ahead, hiding part of his face with his sleeve. There were many corpses in the room and Shiohi was approaching the director, while he thought that this fighter could turn the whole world upside down. The hero took a step forward from the puddle. The warrior looked at his opponent, and his sword showed how insanely afraid he was. The brown-haired man took a stance, waving a pipe and ordered them not to come closer. He looked at the survivors and asked what they were digging around there for, and then ordered them to quickly come here. The wards looked at the enemy in fear, falling into a stupor. The protagonist stood in front of the remaining enemies. The man took another step. In-sung bared his teeth and made a strange sound. He pushed the employee forward. MC held the sword in front of the frightened man. The guy struck, taking the opponent's legs. There was a powerful blow and blood gushed in different directions. The brown-haired man covered himself with his hand and blood splashed on his clothes. The gray-haired man rushed to attack and Shiohi. The pipe fell to the floor and bounced. The man extended his hand towards the warrior and said that if he killed him, he would make things worse for himself. The director grinned, saying that he can tell you what happened to your brother, and there is something he does not know. The hero looked away and was calm. In-sung was horrified and promised to introduce him to Sang-tae, noting that he could do it. The blade appeared in front of the victim. He extended his hand, saying that killing him now was a bad idea. The hand separated from the body. Blood gushed up and the man raised his head. The protagonist lowered his head, remembering the guy who said that he could not protect the man, who said that he heard that he was humiliated and perhaps this was the reason for suicide. The director frowned, opening his mouth while his tongue separated from the root. The victim fell to the floor, covering his mouth with his hand and asking to save him. Shiho hid his eyes under his hair, remembering the smiling woman. He kicked him and In-sung opened his mouth wide. The mutilated body stretched out its hand and asked him to stop. His mother appeared behind the hero, and he lowered his head. The protagonist swung at the killer. The blade cut into his face, cutting the soft tissues of the offender. The head was divided into two parts and blood gushed to the sides. There was a powerful cut, separating the limb from the body. The head lay on the floor and horror froze in the eyes of the corpse. MC lowered his head down. His hand tightly clutched the handle. The Englishwoman looked at the phone. The car drove out of the parking space and moved towards the exit. The woman held the smartphone in her hands, while holding the steering wheel. She pressed the touch screen. Behind the car, an explosion occurred in the building. Gyunga looked back. Shiohi stood with his back to the rescued man and held a katana in his hand. There were tables in the room on which everything was scattered. The gray-haired guy showed his teeth and was surprised. Hamin appeared from around the corner and ordered to run quickly. The ceiling lights went out. Blood was streaming down the hero's face. A warm light appeared behind him and he broke the window. The protagonist stood next to him while the wounded man jumped down, saving him from the threat. The guy landed on the floor. He looked away and asked if he was okay. The woman was leaning on the window and looking down. She was going to take off her heels and asked so what if it was the second floor, saying that they would go straight to the villa anyway, so she asked to start the car. The ward looked at the girl and said that her skirt was very short. She bared her teeth and asked him if he was lucky. Gyunga was upset and looked away. The brown-haired woman jumped from the window. MC swung his arms while the blast wave was approaching him. There was an explosion behind the rescued, and the rest jumped out. They looked back and their faces lit up. Shiohi jumped out of the window, engulfed in flames. Shiohi landed on the ground and behind him, fire clouds burst out of the windows. A fire started in the street. The action moved to the city and it was said that the next news was that a large fire of unknown origin occurred in the crematorium and completely destroyed the building. Sang-tae sat at the table while it was said that although the crematorium only had one room for farewells, at the time of the fire, relatives of the deceased were there, as a result of which 7 people were injured, among whom there were fatalities. The host looked into the camera and said that the police were investigating the exact cause of the fire. The dark-haired man looked at the phone. He pressed the button and asked to be connected. The guy folded his hands and the caller apologized, to which he asked how many people actually suffered. The phone was on the table and the caller said that there were only about 50 people. The criminal was calm and asked if Gyunga was alive. The device was next to the man and the interlocutor said that the whole building was locked, but he broke the glass and escaped, and it was not ordinary glass. Sang-tae grinned and said that he did everything as they said and asked what the result was, saying that In-sung was dead, and the brunette was alive and now his strength was weakened, and the enemies remained alive and wondered how he could rely on them after this. He sat at the computer while he apologized and promised to eliminate the consequences without problems, to which he agreed. His finger tapped on the table. He looked forward and smiled, thinking about how he could express dissatisfaction with wrong decisions and then get something big. The criminal showed his teeth, saying that he now wanted to get in direct contact with Izu. He lowered his head while the subscriber asked again and said that it was dangerous, because they did not want to meet with him. Sang-tae sat in a chair and asked that they did not consider him their level. He stood in front of the window, while the interlocutor said that he would not deny, noting that he was not yet ready to cope with the power of those and it could cost him his life. The dark-haired man looked back. The guy put his hands in his pockets and said that he was born a man, and then asked that risking his life on the way is a completely natural phenomenon. The criminal looked at the view from the window, saying that if he could withstand the power, people would begin to look at him differently and his influence would increase, because those who are afraid of failure remain under someone all their lives, and people like him destroy the old order and move forward. He put his hands in his pockets and said that he considered it a law of nature. The screen went dark. The interlocutor sat in the darkness and said that if he thought so, he would not stop him and noted that he hoped that he would be able to break through. The action moved to the luxurious B club. The cage was open and there were traces of murder nearby. The walls were smeared with blood. A man was taking a bath with a towel over his eyes. The huge doors swung open. Catherine stood next to the man and said that he was crazy, because someone almost committed suicide again because of him, asking if he thought it was easy to bring girls here. The guy lifted the rag and asked again. He stood in front of the girl. The bastard stretched, asking for something interesting. The woman smiled and said that she would give it to him. He was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a towel. The phone fell next to him. Sangtae looked back at the camera. The employee smiled and said that he was overconfident in wanting to meet Hisa directly, and then asked to lure him and finish the job. The man took the tablet in his hands. He smiled, saying that he would figure it out in 30 seconds. The action took place indoors. Couples crossed paths, walking towards each other. The long-haired man frowned and looked ahead in surprise. The girl stood behind the man and lowered her gaze. The couples passed each other, not paying much attention. The brown-haired man looked back. The criminal smiled and asked who it was, noting that he had not seen her before, to which Catherine asked not to touch the servant, because they would still need her. The brown-eyed man put his hand on her shoulder and asked what was going on, specifying that when he came here to settle things, what was the reward, to which she replied that unlimited access to the girls. He opened his eyes wide and noted the amount of access. The purple-haired woman removed her hand and asked to first sort out the matter, and the reward would come later. The man rushed forward and said that they spoke the same language. The woman watched him with displeasure. A warm light came from the house. Hamin was walking to the sofa, and behind her were the survivors of the brawl. She spread her arms and said that this was a temporary shelter. The ward grinned and asked that she had arrived, to which she asked that everything had already been cleared out. He held out his passport, and said that wild animals had carried it off and most likely already eaten it. The girl looked at the document and asked about Watanabe, having learned the name, to which he noted that it was a fake passport, and in any case, he had done as he was told and established contact. Hyunga looked at them with interest. The brown-haired man turned around, saying that in short, someone was covering for Sangtae and there was an intermediary between them. The clock was hanging on the wall and Hamin said that if they eliminated him, the patrons would get rid of the criminal, because they would not want to reveal themselves and it would be easier to eliminate the unwanted one, and then asked what such a scheme was and whether they understood it. The wounded man frowned and asked again. The boss looked at the subordinate, saying that he needed to heal the wounds first, and then noted that she could heal the wounds, to which he said that it was nothing and it was enough to just spread the ointment. A lot of blood was flowing from the wound and the guy sighed. The woman put her hand on her side, while Shiohi watched the liquid spurting out of the wound like a fountain, and said that everything was fine and offered to look, asking where the laptop was. The partner climbed into the device and said that communication was only carried out through the Chat Plus program. A set of characters was written on the screen. Hamin put her hand on her head and sighed. The hero lowered his head and said that in 2 days, Gyeonggi Station, Exit 4, time 7 in the evening, and asked to get into the van. Those present fell into a stupor. The protagonist looked ahead and said that this is if you believe the transcript, to which she asked what was wrong with her, noting that they listened together, but she did not remember anything. Gyunga sat on the couch and kept a meaningful silence. He looked down and suggested meeting tomorrow. The action took place in the building. The car drove up to the entrance. Yuzuri opened the door and looked around. The long-haired man held onto the glass and smiled. They were moving towards the doors. The elevator was on floor B1. The doors opened and the partners appeared. There were many people on the floor. The short-haired man leaned against the wall and asked why he hadn't noticed that the sign was off and said that they weren't working. The man looked at his interlocutor, saying that the representative had said that he wanted to meet. The bandit showed his fingers and said that they hadn't been told that there were 2 of them. The hands grabbed the employees. The brown-haired man dragged them both into the elevator. Everyone present was surprised by what was happening. The long-haired man smiled and asked to close the door. The hand pressed the corresponding button. The elevator doors slammed shut. Screams and groans were heard from the room. The employees looked away warily. The elevator opened. 2 unconscious bodies fell to the floor. The fighters stood at attention and asked who it was. The partners were approaching the guards. The guy looked at the pocket where the sound was coming from. He showed his palm to the people, looking at the phone. The employee picked up the phone and said that he understood. He turned to the guests and said that they could come in. The brown-haired man walked past, wiping blood on his white shirt. The agents followed them with their eyes. The door to the office swung open. The 2 entered the room where Sangtae was sitting drunk. He was holding a glass in his hands. The man put his hand to his mouth. He looked ahead and said that this ugly foreigner was clearly not the one he wanted to meet. The mustachioed man frowned, saying that he did not want to come here in person. A smile appeared on the psycho's face. He raised his head. His gaze was directed forward. The starry sky appeared above the ground. The partners were standing on the balcony, looking at the forest. The cigarette butt fell on the floor with the others. The man put out the rest of the ashes with his shoe. Byung-da looked at his partner. He put his hands in his pocket and said that it was him, to which he replied that it was. The wounded man turned around and said that he wanted to talk, but he just stood there smoking for 20 minutes, and then asked if he wanted to know what was going on. Shiohi looked up and said that there were beautiful stars, and he asked again. He was looking at space, saying that they say that after death people become stars, and he wondered what his mother and sister had become. The partner grinned and said that he was not a child, and then noted that he did not want to sound disrespectful. A smile appeared on the protagonist's face. The comrade looked at him and asked if he could make that face too. MC lowered his head and agreed. Gyungu stood next to him, saying that when they first met, he was drunk and lost control, and after that, he thought he was a psychopath. Shiohi looked down and remained silent. The wounded man turned around, saying that it didn't seem like that and that he also had his limits, to which he replied that he had lost control because his parent had been mentioned. The gray-haired man reached into his jacket, asking how the man liked the weapon, noting that he didn't even know there was a lock. The hero smiled, presenting the blade, and said that it was a good sword, heavy, sharp, with almost no damage to the blade, and of high quality. The fighter took out a cigarette, and noted that everything had an owner, and then asked if he had killed anyone with a sword before. The protagonist stood in front of him and denied it. The partner closed his eyes and said that he had wielded it very skillfully, and that they deserved to die. The guy closed his lips. The wind drove the leaves away while he said that he had given up his human form, choosing this path. Gyungu held a cigarette in his hands and turned his attention to the interlocutor. MC stood with his back, looking at the trees. The guy looked away and said nothing meaningfully. Shiohi walked towards the exit and asked if that was all, could they go inside, to which he tried to find the right words. The hero looked away and became interested. The wounded man brought the lighter to his mouth and said that he thought that he would eventually punish Sancte, which he confirmed. His hand rested on the railing and the partner asked what would happen next. The protagonist lowered his head and said that he needed to pay for his crimes. Gyungu stood nearby and assumed that surrendering, saying that this was the only way, and he did not understand what he heard. He turned around and said that after the enemy fell, someone else would take his place and he would have to watch all of this. A smile appeared on MC's face. He looked at his interlocutor and said that he was not interested in a struggle for power, because he just wanted revenge. Cigarette butts were lying on the floor and Shiohi asked that he wanted to take Sancte's place, to which he said nothing meaningfully. The man took a step and said that at least so, but did not finish. The hero leaned on the railing and said that before he surrendered, he would give him a gift. The wounded man turned to his comrade. The protagonist looked into the distance and was silent. A slight smile appeared on his face. Gyungu approached him and thought that this guy was strange, but did not finish. He remembered how he looked at the stars and said that people become stars after death. They stood next to him, and he thought that he did not think so. Han put an empty glass on the table. Sancte poured alcohol and asked why they brought the killer to their meeting, and then noted that they disappointed him, because he thought that they would be able to talk. The mustachioed man was calm and said that if he passed this test, the guy would meet him in person and wanted to start threatening, but did not finish. The criminal smiled and asked why he was so strong. The old man looked away and said that he was S-rank and killed hundreds. The psycho got upset and asked again, clarifying that they really wanted to kill him. The guest looked at his interlocutor and said that he had started supporting him after the gold trading co-program, and noted that it was not easy to raise someone like that. The killer lowered his head and asked again. The brown-eyed man lowered his eyelids and said that he did not want the guy to leave his post because he had big plans for him. Sancte hid his eyes behind his hair and expected a trick. The agent was calm and said that only when there was no suspicion. The criminal smiled and asked to remember where he was, asking why he suddenly wanted to be equal. The mustachioed man opened his mouth and said that it was possible. The long-haired man adjusted his hair and asked when they would fight and why they talked so much. The dark-haired man became wary, looking ahead. The fighter pointed his finger forward, asking what he was threatening, and noted that he did not know his place, to which his partner replied that it looked like it. The man put his hands on the table, saying that it was time to end this, to which his comrade asked not to underestimate him, because Sancte was a former judo champion. The big guy waved his hand, saying that sport was no different from a real fight, and noted that he would die today. The criminal held a glass in his hands and offered him a drink. The killer smiled while the translator said that he was asking for a drink and asked if this was his last meal before death, and then noted that he did not mind. The bandit held a glass and wanted to start a speech. The mustachioed man watched with interest. The dark-haired man lowered his head and said that Hiza did not raise him, but he made himself. He took a sip and was about to say something else. The guy smiled, saying that they were just pawns. He waved his hand. The glass flew past the opponent and smashed against the wall. There was a sharp movement. Sancte rushed to attack. He clenched his fist tightly, preparing to hit the offender. The fighter blocked the threat. The psycho's eyes were hidden behind his hair. The long-haired man smiled and asked if he thought it would work and suggested that he was tired of living. The brown-haired man swung at the guy who was holding onto his torso. A smile appeared on his face, and he looked away at his opponent. The criminal took him in a grab. His face showed rage. The man crashed into the floor and smashed the furniture. The negotiator was stunned by what he saw. The killer was straightening his shirt, standing next to the unconscious body.